Brilliant lightning tore across the sky in jagged streaks, and it was instantly obvious that this storm carried nothing but ill omens. The courtyard at the heart of the palace was scattered with the corpses of both humans and monsters alike. Moving among the carnage was a girl clutching a knife, her body soaked in blood, strolling through the devastation with an expression of quiet admiration. Even after being battered by hundreds of debuffs, Qinfan had still managed to single-handedly raise the ruins of the ancient god. Yet in the end, the eye of justice would settle on the girl. The warrior stood there in his bloodied armor, hunched and barely managing to stay upright, and he asked her why it had to be her of all people. He couldn't wrap his mind around it. She was his sister, Qin Xiao. How could she do this to her own brother, but the girl didn't see him as a brother at all? As far as she was concerned, he was nothing more than an orphan taken in by her parents. They shared no blood, no real bond, and he had no right to call himself Qin Xiao's brother. Songfay confirmed the girl's position, telling her she was entirely correct in her reasoning. Though it had to be acknowledged that Qinfan had proven quite useful, the two of them never could have obtained the sacred artifact on their own. That artifact, capable of instantly draining every last drop of energy from Qinfan, had come at tremendous cost. They had endured countless hardships to acquire the Soul Eater blade, and now it was lodged in the young man's back. The wounded man cried out that he had raised Qin Sha after their parents perished, that he had paid for her schooling, and that after the game shattered the world they knew, he had risked his life, over and over again for her sake. Qinsha fired back that after their parents died, Fun had kept inserting himself into her life for no reason, controlling her and always insisting on being useful. But now the artifact was theirs, and his protection was no longer needed. Song raised his twin blades above his head, announcing that he would personally look after Qin Xiao from that point forward, and that Qinfan could die knowing that much. But as the life drained out of him, the young man screamed that even if they killed him, they wouldn't escape what was coming. Blood flooded the ground as Songface ran his blade through the wounded fighter. Then the game was released. Whenever a person fell asleep, they found themselves transported to the game world, whether they wished it or not. The only currency in this reality was life energy. Death diminished it, while victory over monsters replenished it. Players could spend their life energy to wield their powers in the real world. The strongest among them could tear tanks apart with bare hands and bring down aircraft with a single sword stroke. From the moment the game appeared, the world plunged into chaos. The hero had done everything within his power to keep himself and his sister alive. After surviving seemingly endless mortal danger, the young man had finally reached the ruins of the ancient god. There a sacred artifact had awaited him, the Eye of Justice, because in the end he had proven himself worthy of it. No one could have anticipated that betrayal would come from the person he trusted most. But all of his efforts had been trampled underfoot, and every drop of suffering he had endured had only paved a road for someone else to walk. Qinfan refused to accept this as the end. If only he could start everything over again, he told himself he would think only of himself. The young man lay soundly asleep in his bed beneath a blanket. Then suddenly he jolted upright, gasping, scrambling to understand where he was. Was this the real world? He pressed his hand to his throat, checking whether he was truly alive, because the memory of dying felt almost tangible. After checking the date and looking out the window, he understood what had happened. He had truly been reborn. It was the very same day the game had appeared, 9 years ago. The apartment door burst open with a kick, and a pretty girl stepped inside. She was startled to find Qinfan at home, and couldn't understand why he hadn't been answering her calls when she had tried so many times. Qinfan recalled that, yes, he had quarreled with Songfay over his sister, she had simply wanted to support him, and he had blown things out of proportion. Even before the godforsaken lands had emerged, Songfei had been a celebrated idol, and Qin Xiao had been one of his most devoted fans. The guy had striking looks, but beneath the surface he was a scoundrel who drained money and pleasure from his female admirers. To keep Xiao from falling into his trap, Qinfan, as her older brother, had forbidden her from spending time with him, and she had accused him of being controlling. The fight that followed was fierce. Qin Sha demanded money from her brother and blamed him for her favorite getting knocked out of the top rankings. Qinfan had reached his limit and slapped his sister. The girl hit the floor in shock, her hand flying to her reddened cheek, unable to believe that her brother Qinfan had struck her. Qinfan told her flatly that he was in no mood to argue, and if she didn't quiet down he would silence her himself. He had no intention of handing over any money. It had belonged to their parents. In all the years since their deaths, he hadn't touched a single coin of it, and now he flung the card at his sister. Fun said that their parents' memory wasn't going to be dragged down to Xiao's level, but now he wanted her to hear him clearly. He no longer considered her his sister. Qinxia wept, tears pouring down her face as she clutched her bruised cheek. His words cut her deeply. Qinfan had surrendered many opportunities in his previous life trying to protect his sister. He had turned down dangerous ruins and dungeons afraid of what might happen to him. Now Qinfan took a sleeping pill. eager to re-enter the game world as quickly as possible. He wanted to discover just how far he could go without that weight dragging him down. This time he would apply everything he knew and become the strongest player in existence. His sister was on her own from here, but the young man swore silently that he would tear Songfay's head off with his own hands. Finally, Qinfen drifted off and found himself once again in the game space, the land abandoned by God. How deeply he had missed the selection hall. He remembered the first time he had appeared there, how he had spent far too long deliberating over his class. This time would be different. In his previous life, he had chosen warrior to protect his sister. It wasn't the worst decision, but for someone now playing alone, it wasn't the right one either. Speed and reaction time. Those were what mattered most at the start. The player activated the Eye of Justice and selected the Assassin class. With the Eye of Justice guiding him, Qinfen automatically received the most powerful build available for that class. This was exceptional news. The Eye of Justice had remained with him after his rebirth. It turned out the artifact was impossible to steal, it would always return to its true owner. Perhaps it was thanks to the Eye of Justice that Qinfen had been granted the second chance at life. But then a wave of dark energy surged through him. He had unlocked a secret subclass. Synchronization followed, and it completed without issue. As a result, Qinfen became a Shadow, the assassin's secret build. Unlike his previous warrior class, his starting power this time was dramatically higher. Unlocking a secret class build under normal circumstances was an extraordinarily difficult feat, but the power of justice had made it effortless. What exactly was the power of justice? It was the primordial force of the universe, one that transcended every law, natural or human. In his previous life, sometime after the game's launch, a single player had managed to break out of the godforsaken lands and enter the kingdom of law. It was only then that humanity first learned of the power of law, but that had only happened once. Qinfen couldn't believe he had received this primordial force right at the very beginning. All he needed was to enter the kingdom of law and claim godhood to attain complete control. Qinfen realized he now had another objective. When class selection was complete, he was prompted to enter a nickname, thinking of the darkness from which his build was born. He chose the name Shadow. After that, the game transported him to the god-forsaken lands, a realm of ruins overrun by countless monsters hungry to tear players apart and devour their life energy. Killing enemies increased one's energy, while dying cost a player half of everything they had accumulated. The city of Rakushka served as a safe zone where monsters didn't roam and players couldn't attack each other. The streets were filled with people discussing their classes, nicknames, and abilities. Shadow observed the crowd and noted how many people had already entered the game. He knew it wouldn't be long before the wealthy and powerful from the real world flooded in and overwhelmed everyone else. If Qinfen was going to stay ahead, he couldn't afford to linger here. But at that moment, a group of players revived right in the middle of the square. They had died on their missions and respawned in the city. The people on the street reacted with surprise at Qinfen's appearance. They could tell he was an assassin, but they sensed something unusual. He radiated power and presence. Some men were talking about how badly the monsters had mauled them, how they had failed to increase their vitality, and how their life energy had been cut in half. One man raged about the monster's overwhelming strength. Their entire group combined had barely made a dent in its health bar, and they held no hope of defeating it. They turned to a girl named Li and asked what their next move should be. Qinfen noticed this girl. Most archers started with standard short bows, but this beauty appeared to carry a secret build as well. Li turned to Shadow in that moment, commenting that his build was unusually rare and suggested they team up. She explained that her group alone couldn't handle the monsters, despite having some experience. What experience? The experience of getting killed. Shadow had no interest in teaming up with them. The men argued that the stranger was just posturing, pretending to be a professional while hoping to solo monsters their group of 5 couldn't even handle. They figured he had some kind of secret. Leaky looked up Shadow's nickname and addressed him directly, then suggested her team follow this player and observe what he was capable of, while also learning something about the monsters he intended to fight. The shrewd blonde privately decided they would all watch together as this so-called elite assassin met his end. Qinfen left the city alone, composed and ready to face his first opponents. The territory outside was dangerous and unforgiving, and without game experience, a newcomer could be destroyed in seconds. Even the very first monster would obliterate a new player with ease. For those just starting at level 1, this was a terrifyingly powerful adversary. The watching players noticed that the assassin's starting weapon was unlike anything they'd seen. He moved with extraordinary speed, his agility visibly enhanced, and even his appearance set him apart. They hoped to trail Shadow and perhaps gain some valuable insight. At some point, they realized he had noticed them, but then something strange began happening to him. Black energy began to envelope the assassin. Before their eyes, it slowly dissipated and dissolved into the air. The players rushed in surprise to the spot where he had been standing just a moment before. He had simply vanished into thin air. This was clearly not a first-level invisibility skill. Remaining invisible, Shinfun watched the players deliberate. They concluded it was too dangerous outside the city, and decided to head back. They needed to find the secret chest. Shinfun noted with satisfaction that other players couldn't detect him exactly what one would expect from a secret build. The invisibility skill worked wonders, preventing low-level monsters and players from sensing him at all. Remaining invisible, Shinfun left Shell City. It was nothing more than a hiding spot for weaklings who served as food for monsters. Before long, the invisibility ran out. It had a short duration, though its cooldown was brief enough that the player could reactivate it within seconds. Shinfun checked his stats. All players began with equal base stats, with additional bonuses granted by their chosen class. When he had been a warrior, his strength and physique had each received +3 bonuses, but this time around, every single one of his stats had received a bonus. He also had free points to allocate himself. Most players dumped everything into strength or intelligence, but that was a catastrophic mistake. Shinfun invested all his free points into agility, which he considered the single most important stat in the early game. No matter how you distributed your stats, monsters would still deal damage. The only way to beat them was to be faster. Suddenly, behind a tree nearby, the young man heard growling. He could make out the shape of a monster's back. It was in the middle of mutating. Shinfun immediately recognized what he was looking at. The worm consumed life energy, and it had almost certainly killed the 4 players who had recently respawned in Shell City. The worm spotted the player and charged instantly. It was already injured. The players must have managed to chip away at its health before falling. When a monster kills a player, it absorbs their life energy. Accumulate enough energy and it can mutate. Shinfun began activating his abilities in front of the worm, which also braced for combat. It dropped onto 4 limbs that resembled crab claws. Then Shinfun began to fade from the worm's sight, dissolving away. The monster turned its head from side to side, confused about where the player it had been about to devour had gone. But in that next instant, Shinfun launched himself from a tremendous height and drove the creature into the ground. He hadn't expected to kill the worm in one blow. Even if it had struck a weak spot, it was still remarkable. The worm died, and its life energy flowed into the player's account. Shinfun's new skills had already demonstrated their worth. In his previous life, even his strongest blow had only dealt 40 points of damage, and fighting a worm like this had nearly killed him multiple times. Back then, he had also split the earned energy with his sister. But now every last drop was his. This worm had killed 4 players and drained the life from all of them. And now all of that poured into Shinfun. He ended up with 54 years of energy, not identical to what the worm had held, but still a solid result. A notification then informed him that the player had unlocked the infinite mutation skill. When defeating a monster alone, there was now a chance to earn mutation points for improving skills. Future battles would grant him points, and defeating a boss was guaranteed to yield a substantial bonus. Infinite mutation was an extraordinary mechanism for continuous improvement, something Shinfun had never even heard of in his previous life. The power of justice truly was a magnificent bonus that surpassed any law. Shinfun decided to level up his shadow walk and sneak attack skills. Speed and agility over his opponents, that was everything in the early game. The player was thoroughly satisfied. His upgraded shadow walk, combined with his invisibility skill, now allowed him to remain completely hidden, and with his current skill level he could kill even a fully healthy worm in a single strike. Shinfun heard someone nearby say that punk beat that monster all by himself. Told you the game isn't that hard. He turned to find a young couple. The girl praised the assassin, saying he was magnificent and clearly in excellent shape, while the guy asked if he needed backup. Shinfun didn't have time to respond before he caught a glimpse of 2 glowing red eyes in the distance. The couple offered to continue alongside him, saying they could help if he tired out, they'd even carry him if need be. But right in the middle of that conversation, the stranger seemed to dissolve and disappear before their eyes. The pair looked around in bewilderment. Then a monstrous spider descended from above on a tree directly onto the couple. They whipped around in terror and saw what was dropping toward them. It was the shepherd, who devoured both players in an instant and then summoned companions. Shinfun knew the shepherd was a starting area boss with roughly 1,600 health points. Beginners couldn't handle it, and the challenge was further compounded by the fact that other spiders fell under its command. The player was thrilled to have a chance to test how well his improved skills measured up. Shinfun decided to engage the shepherd. He struck it across the head, and the monster howled viciously as purple blood sprayed outward. Shinfun used his invisibility and agility to evade the spider's counterattack. The shepherd was still standing. However, the player had managed to immediately deal damage equal to roughly a quarter of its total strength. Shinfun watched the monster from behind a tree. He knew he had taken a risk. Thanks to his agility upgrade, he had survived, but he still absorbed some minor damage. That said, a strike dealing over 300 damage was extraordinary. The shepherd was enraged, thrashing through the trees and leaving a trail of purple blood. Chinfun understood that the boss had entered a berserk state. Local monsters were far from mindless, they wouldn't wait passively for their deaths, and so none of them ventured close to the battle. The shepherd was tearing through the environment trying to locate its attacker while his spiders waited in formation. Chinfun understood he couldn't act recklessly. Then instinct struck him, and he immediately chose to act on it. He calculated the attack with precision and hurled a stone with tremendous force at the weak point, dealing enormous damage. Most of the damage came from the bonus effects on stealth skills. Even a plain rock thrown at the right moment could devastate the monster, it just needed to be at the right time. Such a throw would stack bonuses from hidden strike, sneak attack, and striking a weak point simultaneously. He threw the stone again. Then the player positioned himself behind a tree to reactivate Shadow Walk. Now he could remain visible until Shadow Walk lapsed and deliver his strike in that final moment. In the city of Rakushka, a new update appeared on the main board. Player rankings had changed. A player named Shadow had killed the shepherd and became the first to reach level 2. It was unbelievable. Players couldn't comprehend how this was possible. They had died multiple times against ordinary monsters, and this person had soloed the boss. Leaky and her team recognized who it must be, though most other players had no frame of reference. How could he have reached level 2 and killed the boss when 4 of them couldn't even handle the worms together? The couple who had been devoured by the shepherd were equally stunned that had been the biggest spider in the area and the stranger from the forest had handled it. Chinfun received an update. The smaller spiders had vanished the moment the shepherd fell. Note to self: kill the weaker monsters first next time to gain more experience. Chinfun received a skill scroll. Greedy Hands. It was an extremely useful assassin ability, and an unexpected drop from a spider boss. The Greedy Hands skill increased the amount of loot recoverable after a kill. In his previous life, there had been a player known as a Godslayer, whose raw strength hadn't been particularly impressive, but thanks to Greedy Hands, he had risen to become one of the most powerful in the game. Chinfun then remembered that he possessed infinite mutation, which meant he could immediately upgrade Greedy Hands. In the real world, schoolchildren were making their way to class, and everything seemed completely peaceful. Qin Xiao was furious. She had no intention of apologizing to her brother for skipping the exam the day before. She had gone to support her idol instead. Her friend thought she should apologize, impressed by how much her brother cared for his sister, but Qin Xiao refused. He was always meddling, she argued, and on top of that, he wasn't even her real brother. The girls approached their classroom, but a crowd of students had gathered near the door. One of their classmates, Young Wei, had fallen asleep at his desk and had become nearly transparent. The phenomenon was deeply strange, and his friends were trying in vain to wake him. Jung Wei had just told them he wanted to rest, and then almost instantly he had begun to fade. This wasn't isolated. The internet was buzzing with similar reports from around the world. Experts believed that when a person fell asleep, they entered a ghost-like state. Young Wei's girlfriend immediately called his parents to warn them. When Qin Xiao was urged to call her brother about the situation, she refused flatly, saying her brother deserved to die. At that moment, Chinfun boosted his Greedy Hand skill to the next level and activated it to test the effect. He also received 2 mutation points. To upgrade Greedy Hands to the 3rd level, he would need 3 points, and soon the activation chance would reach 100%. Chinfun understood that by now world governments would be taking notice. More and more people would begin entering the game, which meant he needed to level up with urgency. Once people realized that skills could carry over into the real world, the planet would descend into chaos. 2 conditions were required for that: reaching level 10 and accumulating sufficient exchangeable life energy. Grinding monsters for small gains would be a waste. He needed to locate a more powerful boss as quickly as possible. Chinfun spotted players fighting the Swiftfoot Maniac. He recognized this monster. As they say, speak of the sun and light appears. He then noticed one of the players and recognized him, Wang Ming. He hadn't expected to encounter him here, but it was said that when Wang Ming entered the game, he assembled a team composed exclusively of secret builds. The player held a sacred shield. Wang Ming's build, Holy Warrior, carried double the stats of an ordinary warrior along with refined stealth abilities. There was also a female mage on the battlefield, the major secret build Prophet, which dealt double magic damage and possessed the unique skill of the Seer's Fireball. The secret archer build Sharpshooter carried double stats with a rapid fire skill. The team's healer Oracle had healing power twice as potent as an ordinary cleric. And now this entire team was struggling against the Swiftfoot Maniac. The monster maneuvered brilliantly, slipping every attack. The boss was simply too fast. The hits weren't reducing its health at all. The cleric healed Wang Ming while he attempted to draw the monster's attention, giving the others a chance to attack relentlessly. Chinfun understood this player was trying to whittle the monster down gradually, but that was dangerously optimistic. Wang Ying had forgotten that out in the wild, the noise of battle would draw additional monsters. Sure enough, the Corruptors appeared, ordinary 2nd-level monsters coated in filthy slime that used area of effect attacks. The swordsman immediately rushed to intercept them, defending his leader. Shinfun noticed the swordsman's secret build as he sliced through the monsters with swift, powerful strokes, but the slime monster's defenses were too thick and the blows barely registered. Then the corruptor itself struck with a crushing blow that flooded everything around it with viscous slime, trapping the players and making normal movement nearly impossible. The female mage found herself isolated with the monster. She screamed for her teammates and squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the end, when suddenly a blade swept through the air and the monster's head went flying. The corruptor had been felled with a single blow. No one had seen who was responsible. No one could have imagined anyone would step in like that. Even a first-level worm had taken the group significant time to deal with, and a second-level corruptor was considered far out of reach for a solo player. The swordsman was about to speak when the next monster standing beside him also lost its head. Wang Ying asked his players if they had caught a glimpse of whoever had saved them, but both the swordsman and the mage had been moving too quickly to get a good look. The commander told them not to be distracted and to stay focused on the fight. Only one enemy remained, the Swift-Foot Maniac. The players held their formation. Shinfun checked his stats. He had a poison arrow that dealt poison damage at medium range, and he needed to level up that skill immediately. Then tragedy struck on the battlefield. The Swift-Foot Maniac broke through the shield and drove its sharp tentacles through Wang Ming. The cleric scrambled to restore his health, but even the healer lacked the strength and speed to complete the spell in time. Wang Ming ordered his team to run. At that same instant, something buried itself in the monster's skull, and it opened its mouth in a wild, agonized shriek. The players couldn't believe what they were witnessing. Someone's attack had just reduced the boss's health by half. The Swift-Foot Maniac staggered, no longer running. It bled heavily and growled with diminishing strength. Chanfun realized that the poison arrow didn't break his invisibility. He could continue to launch poison arrows while remaining completely unseen. Nothing at this stage of the game could stop him. The swordsman stared in disbelief at the staggering damage that appeared above the monster's corpse. It was impossible to conceive of one person doing that. Jinfun, still invisible, absorbed the energy he had earned. The swordsman called out into the air, thanking whoever had saved them and asking for the name of their rescuer. The invisible stranger's voice replied that in this wild world, trust was a luxury one couldn't afford. Wang Ying understood the player wished to remain anonymous, but introduced himself regardless, and pledged that he would be ready to support or assist the invisible stranger anytime he needed it. Shinfun considered Wang Ming reliable. Furthermore, he had backing from the Chinese government, which commanded considerable resources. Selling unwanted loot through him was a viable strategy. The mutation points he had earned were now sufficient to upgrade, and with that his leather gloves were reinforced. Shinfun was pleased. He planned to fill his bag to the brim and then head to Shell City to sell everything unnecessary. This time around, the player was developing at a pace 100 times faster than in his past life. Soon he would track down his enemy, Songfay. While Shinfun fought, enemies appeared faster and faster, drawn in by the noise of battle. The players realized they could no longer keep up and chose to flee. Then suddenly the group froze, mouths falling open. From the trees emerged a terrifying creature none of them had encountered before. The monster launched long, sharp spikes at the players and impaled them all at once. A short while later, the entire group of players found themselves back in a location resembling the city of Rakushka. The mood among them was grim. Monsters always moved in groups, making it impossible to destroy them cleanly. Additionally, players needed to reach the third level to exit the game, and no one yet knew how to do that. 3 people in a group wasn't enough. They decided to gather at least 6, ideally 10 players, though even that guaranteed nothing. At one point, a group of 40 had attacked some cursed lord, and he had killed 30 of them with a single blow. A large group of new players materialized in the city square. The game was impossibly difficult. They couldn't afford to keep dying. Beyond that, the game captured consciousness during sleep, meaning the game itself was focused on the mind. If they didn't find a way out in time, their bodies would perish from exhaustion in the real world. At that moment, updated player statistics appeared, and Shadow had reached the 3rd level, sitting in 1st place. Leaky was convinced Shadow must have found some kind of exploit. She had to get him to reveal it so she could use it to leave the game as well. Lisa spread the word that she was ready to meet with Shadow, offering to pay him 10 million in cash in the real world if he helped her reach the 3rd level. Meanwhile, Chinfun continued to earn points, skewering monsters with his poisonous bow. After accumulating enough points, the young man chose to mutate again. This time, the guy upgraded the greedy hand skill. This ability boosted the odds of gaining additional skills after defeating a monster and guaranteed higher quality loot. Higher class loot was an outstanding bonus, and the effect of it was simply stunning. Chinfun knew he could upgrade it several more times, each time receiving a further boost upon mutation. At that moment, a massive monstrous creature moved past the player. It was the Cursed Lord, a bronze status boss in the process of devouring life energy to evolve to silver status. This was exactly why it had been able to kill that group of 40 players. Qinfun checked his inventory and found it was full. He wouldn't be able to collect loot even if he destroyed the Cursed Lord right now. The player marked the spot on his map. Qinfun knew the monster would need time to finish mutating, so it would remain in the area for a while, but for now, he had to go to Shell City, sell his unnecessary items, and return. Back in Shell City, everyone was buzzing about the 10 million reward offered for Shadow to help level someone up. Players were dying repeatedly and draining their lives away, and the wealthy were trying to buy their way out of the problem, while ordinary players had no choice but to keep dying. Qinfun materialized in his shadow form, right in the middle of the city, and went straight to the market to put his artifacts up for sale. This was something new. Players noticed he was equipped with 2 bronze items and was offloading 2 others. That meant the stranger had killed a bronze status boss. Soon people realized they were looking at the #1 player in the rankings. The guy kept his face hidden. Something appeared to be wrong with his facial appearance, or perhaps he simply didn't wish to reveal himself. A female mage approached Qinfun and asked how much he wanted for the ice skill. Shadow said his price was 100 days of exchange energy. He recognized the girl. It was Grey Rose, currently ranked 11th in the city. Grey Rose said 100 days was steep and asked for a discount. Shadow told her this skill would dramatically accelerate her development in the early stages, and if she had real money, she could exchange it with someone in the city for life energy and return to him. Grey Rose's companion, who also concealed her identity, said she needed to consult with the team. The team confirmed they would back whatever decision Grey Rose made. It was only through her that they had reached the 2nd level. If the ice skill could push them to the 3rd and let them exit the game, they had to pursue it at any cost. Grey Rose secured the 100 days the seller had requested and completed the transaction. Qinfun understood this team had to have killed roughly 40 worms to amass that much energy. Grey Rose had just turned to leave when Lee appeared. The girl declared she had finally found the one she was searching for. Leaky offered Shadow one chance to help her reach the 3rd level, promising generous compensation in the real world. Players nearby listened in awe as the beauty dangled 10 million in cash. They marveled at how easy it was to make money in this new world. Qinfun knew this girl from his past life. She had led a criminal syndicate that the state eventually dismantled. Qinfun also recalled from the news that the girl had used seduction to lure people into selling their life energy and then kidnapped and murdered them. Shadow declined. Lily protested that Shadow might be strong in the game right now, but no one truly understood how this world operated. She invited him to join her team, promising a luxurious life in exchange. Qinfun declined again, stating he was only interested in exchanging life energy. The girl erupted in anger. Snapping that back in the real world, she would have already taught him a lesson. Qinfun looked at Lei with a cold demonic gaze and told her plainly that if she uttered another word, he would kill her in the game over and over until her life energy reached 0. The threat landed with devastating weight, and no one present had any doubt he meant it. Lisi and her companions went pale with fear and immediately turned and fled. The trading continued without further incident. Qinfun quickly sold everything, and each buyer came away satisfied and hopeful. Qinfun was eager to return to his hunting grounds. The Cursed Lord was waiting for him. None of the players around him yet understood that exchange energy could be used to manifest gaming skills in the real world. They didn't know that wealth and status no longer mattered. Leaky and her companions had run far enough that they were out of breath, finally able to stop and think. Les was seething. This man had dared to threaten her, and the moment she returned to reality, she would have him killed. Just then, the door to a nearby building opened, and a man emerged to greet her. He introduced himself as Maui Jun. He had already reached the 2nd level, he said, and had a couple of secrets to share with the beauty. If the 10 million offer was still on the table, he would share something, though he didn't usually discuss it with just anyone. Lisa eyed the stranger with suspicion, uncertain what secrets he was referring to. Legion explained that, to level up quickly, she needed to invest all her experience points in agility. That way she would become faster than the worms and be able to defeat them. It was a good idea in theory. But the problem was, the girl had already spent all her points on strength. Lita became convinced the stranger knew what he was talking about, and agreed to accept his help leveling up. The guy outlined his conditions, and Leaky agreed. Though given that he wasn't as powerful as Shadow, she offered 5 million payable upon their return from the game. Legion agreed to the amount, remarking that Shadow may have been powerful, but he was clearly not right in the head if he had turned down such a sum. Meanwhile, Qinfun was back in the game and making his way toward where he had last spotted the Cursed Lord. As expected, the monster had evolved to the silver level, though the process wasn't yet complete. Full evolution to gold status would take roughly 7 hours, but Qinfun had no intention of waiting. He readied a poisonous arrow. He aimed immediately, and the combined effect of the hidden attack and poisonous arrow was simply stunning. However, despite the powerful strike, the Cursed Lord's health pool was several times deeper than the bronze boss's had been. The Cursed Lord began immediately trying to rebuild its defenses on the fly. Qinfun wasn't worried. 2 or 3 poison arrows should be sufficient to bring this monster down. The Cursed Lord was a magic-type monster that primarily attacked through area effects, dealing enormous damage. A single hit without dodging, even with maximum defense, could kill a shadow at his current level. The Cursed Lord tried to locate the player in order to damage him. Qinfen struck the monster again with a poison arrow, but knew his invisibility would expire soon, meaning he had to attack in that window and immediately reactivate Shadow Walk to avoid taking damage. The next attack exhausted the enemy significantly, and Qinfen took advantage of the opening and pressed the assault. The monster's health began dropping rapidly, and it fled into the forest as its instincts told it to hide and recover. Qinfen had no intention of chasing recklessly and followed his prey at a measured pace, confident the monster would prefer dying in agony over a slow retreat. And indeed, even looking at the powerful boss dragging itself across the ground was painful. Qinfen decided it was too tedious to kill a victim that wasn't putting up resistance and finally delivered the finishing blow. Killing the Cursed Lord earned him 2 level ups and 4 mutation points. Qinfen immediately activated the Greedy Hand skill, and his mutation points tripled. It was extraordinary. The player ended up with a full 12 mutation points and a tremendous amount of exchange energy days. Pure luck, which explained why he had upgraded this skill to the Emerald level. Qinfen examined the bonuses he had earned and saw that his inventory was nearly full. He would have to return to Shell City soon to sell off his skills, and he hoped to find something like a storage ring along the way. At that moment, a girl appeared in the city, alive and vibrant, unable to contain her joy. The players were deeply grateful to their leader, Van Min, believing it was thanks to him they had reached the 3rd level, but the guy credited the entire team. The girl mage felt a pang of disappointment. She regretted not having added their mysterious savior as a friend. He had probably kept his distance after seeing the sort of company she kept. Her companion, the swordsman, tried to cheer her up, saying that in such a beautiful dress, the stranger would certainly seek her out next time. At that moment, the rankings in the city of Rakushka updated, and the result left everyone stunned. Shadow had already climbed to level 5. Just 10 minutes ago, he had been standing among the players at the bazaar selling his loot. This was unprecedented. The player had jumped from level 3 to level 5 in a single leap. It was almost certainly a case of him killing an incredibly powerful boss. Skilled players understood they had barely managed to clear the 3rd level, and this extraordinary player was already at the 5th. The gap was incomprehensible. Wang Ning told his companions that now wasn't the time to dwell on it. They had to exit the game and warn their families and friends about what was happening. It was already clear the world was heading towards something catastrophic, but at least they could protect the people closest to them. Wang Ying's team left the game. The young man woke up with a pounding headache, disoriented, sitting up in bed. His friends rushed to him. Van Min had finally woken up, something they had begun to fear would never happen. The captain told him to rest, that they would keep watch over the suspects themselves, and that he needed to recover his strength. Wang Ming overruled them and ordered everyone in the room to assemble immediately. Something unprecedented had occurred, and they needed to respond at once. Wang Ying told them everything, how he had built a team of secret builds and how even they had been unable to accomplish anything, and how only a lone player named Shadow had kept them from dying. As for this player, he had somehow reached level 5. He was the strongest player in the entire world. They needed to understand how he had done it. Most likely, he had killed a boss or something comparable. One of his comrades asked why the player who had been at level 3 just a few hours ago hadn't returned to the real world. Maybe he had no one left in this life, no one to warn. Wang Ming didn't know how to answer that. Maybe he really had no family. One of the police officers on the team, a young woman, suggested the stranger might be a reincarnated player. Reincarnated players often had no family and advanced at an unusually fast pace, and she was almost certain her theory was sound. The captain dismissed it, telling the girl to stop reading fantasy novels and take the situation seriously. The captain then informed his subordinates that he had received the same information through official channels. The latest research confirmed that many elderly people were dying shortly after entering the game. The few players who had made it back reported dying multiple times inside, which appeared to significantly shorten their real-world lifespan. The conclusion was stark. If a player's life energy in the game dropped to 0, the person would die in reality as well. Incomprehensible as it sounded, the evidence was clear. An emergency order was issued. Teams were to be formed to study the game, Land of the Abandoned Gods, and a specialized army was to be assembled immediately. The phenomenon had affected the entire planet, and all nations were racing to understand what was happening. Every country was scrambling to keep up in this international competition. Yu was tasked with leading the first team and serving as its captain, with Wang Ming as her deputy. The police officer was free to select the rest of the team herself. Based on all accounts, Shadow didn't appear to be a villain, so recruiting him became a priority. Yu was selected as captain because of her gentle nature, which would be ideal for getting close to Shadow. Revealing his identity quickly was critical, and bringing him in as an ally and extracting relevant information from him was the ultimate goal. They also needed to monitor the stability of events both inside the game and in the real world. At school, all anyone talked about was how people were falling asleep and waking up in the same place, the village of newbies. The students agreed they needed to warn their parents, especially those who had never played games like this, and they needed to develop themselves quickly so they could eventually help the people they cared about. Xin Xiao had no interest in these conversations. She stared at her phone and saw that her brother hadn't tried to apologize and wasn't responding to her messages. Every other time Qinfen had found some way to reach out after a fight, but this time he had clearly gone too far by hitting Qin Xiao. Even their parents had never raised a hand to her. The girl was hurt and upset. She had only skipped class to go to her idol's concert. If her brother refused to apologize, she would never forgive him. The one bright spot was that she had seen Songfay the day before, with this ridiculous new game consuming everything. Meeting her idol would only get harder going forward. Her favorite, that handsome singer whose concert Qin Xiao had spent all evening at, had been so close, and the girl had seen him in person and confirmed every feeling she had for him. Qin Xiao suddenly realized something. If entering the game happened automatically during sleep, then Songfay would eventually end up there too. And if Qin Xiao was in the game, she might actually be able to meet him. The beauty was about to go to bed when she remembered that her classmate Young Wei had already reached the 3rd level. She had to find out how. The girl immediately sent him a message. Every other boy in the class became immediately envious when the gorgeous goddess like Qin Xiao reached out to Young Wei. It was an unprecedented opportunity to get her attention. The young man told her that she should invest all her leveling points in agility. Even if her goal was to become a mage, it would boost her spell speed and help her survive. Zhang Wei also mentioned that a player who reached level 5 could open a teleport to the city. The girl needed to team up with someone to level, after which Zhang Wei promised to help her rise to the top. Qin Xiao decided that her loser classmates weren't completely useless after all. She went to bed hoping to reach a high level and make her brother green with envy, while making absolutely sure not to help him when he inevitably came crawling. At that time, Qinfen was sitting in the forest carefully reviewing his latest loot. He had gotten a cursed ring that made the player nearly 3 levels stronger with useful resistance in dark matter against certain monsters, and an attack bonus on top of that. He also found a scroll for the skill Shadow Slaughter. This assassin skill allowed him to attack in one direction while activating invisibility, dealing 3 simultaneous hits to each enemy in the path. It was extraordinarily powerful. And naturally the young man decided to keep it for himself. Qinfen immediately spent his remaining mutation points on greedy hands, earning additional bonuses, and then invested in Shadow Slaughter, reducing its cooldown time. The rest of the loot was essentially junk, though the Battle Cry scroll could still fetch a decent price from a buyer. Qinfen was still combing through the items when strange sounds approached from nearby. The player was immediately attacked by several 4th level centipede worms. He decided this was the perfect moment to try Shadow Slaughter for the first time. The experience was a success. He dispatched all the monsters with complete ease. Monster parts lay scattered across the clearing. He noted that the effectiveness of his attacks had increased and the time spent in combat had decreased, meaning a lower chance of something unexpected going wrong. Qinfen calculated that he would need roughly 2.5 years of exchange energy to transfer his skills and artifacts to the real world. If he sold everything he didn't need, he would be able to save enough. This meant the player had to push his level to 10, after which he could carry out his plan calmly. Qinfen was walking through the forest when he heard voices. The guys were congratulating Li A on reaching the 3rd level and reminding her it was time to fulfill her promise. Li Qi said it was worth every bit of it. She would head to the real world right away and pay the 5 million she had promised. She also asked if they wanted to sell her exchange energy. She was willing to pay 10,000 per day. Legion said they would discuss the details in the real world. The guy reflected that the Shadow was clearly an idiot for passing up such an opportunity. He could earn energy anytime and convert it to real cash. Qinfen stretched out his hand and attempted to create a spatial gate. Thanks to his current level, he could open a spatial gate to Shell City from anywhere he chose. For now, this one-way portal was limited. He would need someone in another city to reach level 5 first and open their own channel. As Qinfen recalled, Songfay should have appeared in Firefly City, but that was secondary. The true objective of the game was reaching the 10th level and entering the Wastelands. That was where the real God-forsaken lands began. Qinfeng returned to Shell City and prepared to sell artifacts. Other players were already waiting, hoping to purchase something useful. Last time, Grey Rose had bought the ice spell, which catapulted her to 2nd place in the rankings. Now everyone wanted a piece of that same advantage. One player immediately made an exchange, buying a battle cry for warriors, paying an exchange energy. Others were astonished at what seemed like a monstrous price. But in truth, a skill that effective would multiply a warrior's attack several times over, meaning he could quickly recoup the investment. The rest of the loot sold out in minutes. Many players were desperate for any edge they could find. Qinfen cleared his entire inventory in less than a minute, and earned a large amount of days, though still not enough to transfer his artifacts to the real world. At that moment, a girl approached, and calling him a genius, offered to show him something interesting. The girl mage held a space ring in her palm. It offered 12 additional inventory slots, a genuinely valuable item. While the space ring wasn't a storage device per se, it could be used alongside other storage items. The girl was sincerely lucky, and now Qinfan was willing to buy it. In his previous life, people had paid multiple years of exchange energy for rings like this one. The stranger said she didn't want energy, she just wanted to add Shadow as a friend and have him join their team to take down a boss. Shadow immediately agreed to these terms, and the player known as Black Plum added him as a friend. Qinfan asked at once which boss she was referring to. The girl replied it was Gold Status, but unfortunately she couldn't get a clear look at it from where she stood. It was too far away, and there appeared to be something like a worn-down boat nearby. Qinfan guessed it was almost certainly the Golden Status Ghost Ship, a fairly rare boss, but one that dropped useful artifacts. Every time it appeared, a fierce competition broke out between player groups. If it had spawned near the newbie town, it would be no higher than level 5, and dealing with it wouldn't be particularly difficult. The girl from Wang Ming's team hadn't found a space ring, but she had stumbled across a valuable boss. Could she be one of the legends of a past life? The one they called Kosh? The girl admitted that after leaving the game, she had eaten quickly and come right back. The rest of the team was held up, so she had been wandering alone when she spotted the boat. In his previous life, there were rumors that Wang Ming's team harbored a girl with the luck of a koi fish, who could find the rarest items just by idly wandering around. At first it had seemed like nothing more than a legend, but now it appeared to be completely true. The girl couldn't understand why Shadow was looking at her with such a peculiar expression. Qinfan said nothing, and the two of them set off to find the golden boss. Their departure hadn't gone unnoticed. A player reported to his boss that Shadow had left the city with the girl. The boss immediately grew interested and ordered the group to get ready and follow. He told them that when Shadow defeated the boss, he would let the girl keep one appropriate item while the rest went to him. The girl attempted to negotiate loot rights for her team, but Qinfan declined. The girl then asked whether he might be willing to sell items to her companions at a discount if anything suitable came up. Qinfan agreed to that arrangement. The girl suggested waiting until the whole team led by Wang Ming arrived in the game, and then launching the mission together, but Qinfan said that the two of them were doing this right now. The girl was terrified. Shadow was an assassin, and she was only a mage. She would never survive the boss's direct attacks. Qinfan reassured her, saying she just needed to stand aside because he alone was more than enough to bring this boss down. And then right before the mage's eyes, the shadow began to gradually dissolve into thin air and disappear. The mage looked around. She couldn't detect Shadow anywhere. The thugs who had been tailing them also noticed the shadow had vanished. They assumed he had tricked the girl, led her into the forest, and abandoned her to the monsters. The thugs decided to move in on the girl and have some fun at her expense. Qinfan, still invisible, heard everything the thugs were saying, and of course he couldn't stand by and do nothing. Shadow Massacre activated perfectly. All the players were eliminated and their exchangeable life energy transferred to Shadow's account. The combined energy from those 5 players amounted to only slightly more than that of the weakest monsters. Not worth much, but those thugs weren't worth much more. The young man reappeared and told the girl they had been followed, but that he had sent the followers back to the city. The girl mage began chattering about how useful invisibility was. You could crouch anywhere and take care of whatever needed doing. A new player appeared in the city of Irkushka. She was a girl mage who looked around with wide-eyed wonder, comparing everything to the real world. It was Qin Shao. She had been lucky enough to receive the open build sacrifice. She thought it sounded powerful and imagined that Songfay would approve. Shao was confused about where her brother was. In the past, he had always been hovering around her, but now at this critical moment, he was nowhere to be found. She checked the rankings and was impressed that the top player was already at level 6. Her classmate had been proud about his measly 3rd level, but the real standout in this game was clearly Shadow. If she joined him, she could level far more quickly. A group of players was upset. They couldn't reach a teammate named Gone with the Wind. They didn't want to wait for a latecomer, but they couldn't fight without a healer. A replacement needed to be found. At that moment, someone called out to the group and they turned toward the voice. A pretty girl stood before them and said she had overheard their conversation. She could be useful if they genuinely needed a healer. Qinfan and his mage companion eventually reached the location where the ghost ship boss lurked, standing atop a cliff. They saw it moored at the base below. Qinfan had guessed right from the start. He told his friend to hide while he dealt with the boss and vanished instantly. Qinfan leaped from the cliff and landed in a zone that, under the ghost ship's influence, had been transformed into a blood domain. Every 15 minutes spent in that area cost the equivalent of 1 day of life energy. The ghost ship controlled by a skeleton soon approached a gold-level boss. Such special bosses often existed for a limited window before simply disappearing. Qinfan considered himself fortunate. The player immediately launched Shadow Slaughter. There was no value in lingering. He followed with poison arrows, fully aware that the central challenge with this boss was locating its weak point. Most players assumed it was the skeleton itself or the boat, but in truth, the weakness lay in the ghostly bells hanging from its bow. Striking them, however, would trigger the boss's interaction with the water surface, unleashing a catastrophically powerful water pillar attack. Even a silver-ranked player was unlikely to survive a direct hit from those pillars. Chinfun barely managed to dodge the attack thanks to his extraordinary agility. When the large-scale attack subsided, the ghost entered its second phase of defense. It would summon 12 water monsters rising from the sea, each at least silver-ranked, to surround and guard it. These water monsters would fight without mercy, leaving no room for escape. The main ghost would summon a fresh group of monsters every 3 minutes. Chinfun had been invisible since the fight began, meaning the monsters couldn't detect him. He exploited this completely, and when a large wave of water monsters was summoned, he attacked them with Shadow Massacre. The female mage watched from her hiding spot in stunned disbelief. Shadow appeared and vanished in fractions of a second, and the boss never managed to touch him. Chinfun shouted to Black Plum that he would be dying soon. The player didn't understand Shadow was winning. Black Plum was frightened, but chose to trust her idol. At that moment, the sound of approaching footsteps reached her. The bandit leader was furious about a previous humiliation and had now arrived with backup, declaring they would settle things here and now. One of his players had spotted the couple, the girl on the rock, Shadow fighting the monster. The bandits decided now was the time to kill both of them. Shadow continued to fight. The most grueling phase of the battle still lay ahead, but it was also the last. When the boss's health fell to half, it would unleash a colossal spiritual discharge, one that at his current level Chinfun could not withstand for even 5 seconds. The player accepted this as inevitable, and indeed Shadow died. He lost a large amount of exchangeable life energy and disappeared from the battlefield. The bullies were thrilled. That arrogant fool had gotten what he deserved for challenging a gold boss solo, and the enormous ball of energy he had left behind. It meant Shadow had been wealthy. The thugs immediately decided they would finish off his remaining health. They would collect his energy and split it later, but before they could act, they found themselves flung back to Shell City. They had barely approached the golden boss when a swarm of small monsters had descended on them. The offended bandit leader couldn't believe it and demanded to go right back and straighten things out. At that moment, Chinfun returned to the battle location and couldn't account for the surge of energy he found waiting there. Black Plume explained that a group of thugs had shown up and been destroyed by the water pillars. They had hoped to take his energy for themselves. Chinfun understood the guys had overestimated themselves, but then he himself had also suffered dearly from ghost chariots in his past life. The boss can only use its immobilizing spell once, after which reducing its health to 0 becomes manageable. But there is one complication. When the boss's health drops below half, any damage has a chance to trigger a teleport to a different location. The player used a poison arrow, landing it on one of the hanging bells. Chinfun had studied this boss's behavior thoroughly and immediately activated Shadow Slash. He remained invisible and repositioned as quickly as possible. Just then, the thugs reappeared. They watched Shadow fight the monster and planned to kill both the boss and Shadow once he was weakened. Dark Plum saw that the group of idiots had come back, but they couldn't be allowed to interfere with the genius's fight. She decided to use her own skills and conjured Divine Lightning, eliminating several of the players. They couldn't figure out who was attacking them, but they quickly identified the sorceress. They immediately decided to kill her before she could cause more trouble. Dark Plum panicked and sprinted away as fast as she could, with the pack of thugs screaming behind her. 2 other players had been silently watching from high ground, giving away nothing. Chinfun continued fighting. His opponent was nearly dead, yet for a player alone at his level, the fight was far from trivial. The prolonged battle was drawing unwanted spectators. Some players on the nearby rock had apparently died and respawned and were now chasing Dark Plum. Another group hid in the forest, waiting for the battle to end so they could claim all the loot for themselves. Finally, the boss ghost ship was defeated. This victory pushed the player to level 8. The battle had been genuinely challenging. The player Shadow became the first on the server to kill a golden boss, earning 3 reputation points for the achievement. Shell City erupted in disbelief. People couldn't understand where this guy had come from, or where his strength had originated. He had just handled a bronze boss and was now at the gold tier. He was something else entirely, and absolutely everyone wanted to know which country had produced him. Qin Xiao was now fully convinced that Shadow was the strongest player in the game. She needed him to help her level up, and with his help she would reach Songfay much more quickly. After the battle, a massive amount of loot became available to the victor. The players hiding in the trees realized Shadow had spotted them and had gone invisible. They wanted to hunt him down, kill him, and seize all the loot for themselves. One of them, a player named Agon, used a skill to detect the invisible. He deployed a phantom eagle capable of deactivating Shadow's invisibility. Qinfeng was surprised these guys possessed a ghost eagle. Clearly that was why they believed they had a shot at the loot. However, Qinfeng's invisibility skill level was higher, and they couldn't see him at all. One of the gang told his boss that Shadow wasn't in the area. He must have gotten scared and run. Great news. The guys went immediately to claim the abandoned trophies. They only had to wait 5 minutes before Shadow's ownership lapsed and everything would be theirs. But Qinfeng and his Shadow slaughter were already in motion. The players were sent back to the city. Dayfeng was satisfied and decided things were much quieter now. He hadn't spotted Black Plum, but he would find her later. First, the player wanted to upgrade Greedy Hands before collecting the loot to maximize what he received. After the upgrade, the harvest was genuinely spectacular. Qinfeng happily absorbed all the energy and items he could carry. Thanks to Greedy Hands, the absorption of trophies lit up the entire forest in brilliant light. The player received a large number of bonuses, mutation points, and exchange energy days. 2 items among them were ghostly bells, and all of it owed to the Greedy Hands skill. The ghostly bells prevented the loss of life energy upon death. Qinfeng didn't even have time to examine them properly before he heard a cry for help. He recognized the voice immediately. It was Dark Plum, who had been chased down by the thugs the entire time. The thugs had finally caught up with her. There was no escape, and the boys made it clear they would deal with her now. The girl was completely defenseless, standing at the edge of a cliff with no room left to run. Rather than fall into their hands, Dark Plum leaped off the cliff into the abyss. The boys hadn't anticipated this. The girl had chosen death over capture. She hit the ground and instantly perished. Even the thugs noted it was a decisive act. She had simply jumped. They watched their quarry die. Dark Plum addressed Shadow, saying he no longer needed to rescue her since she had already returned to the city. She was hurting, but thankfully the team's exchange energy stored with the captain cushioned the blow. Qinfeng told her to stay in the city and wait. He would continue leveling his skills and abilities. He boosted Greedy Hands again. Then he turned his attention to offensive skills, which also needed upgrading to handle stronger bosses and secure better loot. Qinfeng raised the level of Shadow Slaughter while in stealth mode and strengthened his sneak attack. The updated stats left the player deeply satisfied. He could now deal significant damage even without the benefit of invisibility. A gold boss under normal circumstances would yield 2 to 4 silver level artifacts. The odds of a gold drop were slim, but thanks to Greedy Hands, the player received 11 gold items. He also received a pair of ghostly blades. They were platinum level and dealt double damage with every regular attack. While basic attacks weren't his primary method, the fundamental stats on these daggers were outstanding, and the attack speed increase would quicken the execution of skills. He also needed to reinforce his physical resilience using the armor from his victory, allowing him to increase his health and improve his resistance. After that, the young man rendered the armor invisible, so other players would assume he was wearing standard assassin gear. He also gained a damage reduction skill, something he had dismissed as useless in his previous life. Back then, he had been forced to completely ignore the armor level of other artifacts, which had been extremely dangerous. But now Qinfeng was different. He could upgrade his skills directly and didn't have to sacrifice anything. The remaining loot belonged to warrior, cleric, and archer classes. Qinfeng decided to sell those items to Wang Min's team at a discount. If they were short on funds, he could extend credit. Shadow was about to thank Dark Plum, because it was through her tip about the boss that he had earned all these new bonuses, when he ran into a group of thugs. They hadn't expected to see him and were visibly frightened. The guys immediately ran, trying to get away. The thugs ran as fast as they could and hoped until the last second they would escape and disappear, but Shadow was right on their heels. The leader of the thugs suddenly spun around and began apologizing, saying it was his fault and that it would never happen again. He begged Shadow not to kill him, saying he only had 1 year left to live, but Qinfeng replied coolly that the player hadn't thought about that when he was attacking others. With that, he said his farewell and moved on, and received a warning from the game. Because Qinfeng had killed too many players, he had been flagged with killer status, meaning upon death he would lose a greatly elevated amount of energy. But thanks to the ghost spells, that was inconsequential. Qinfeng returned to the city after defeating the golden boss. The other players looked at him with a mixture of fear and admiration. Everyone marveled at his abilities and skills, and envied the volume of impressive loot he had secured entirely for himself. Qinfeng was approached by one of the city's residents who had called out to him. It was a player from the group in the forest who had tried to take the loot. The guy offered him an apology, saying his group had bought him an assassin skill as a peace offering. They asked him to let the past go and hold no grudge. They had purchased the piercing skill for close combat. Qinfeng accepted the gift and walked right past the group without stopping. Not everyone in the group found this acceptable. Some felt that after Shadow had killed them, rewarding him with a skill was excessive, and that they should gather a bigger crowd and attack him together. One of them, Sheng Xiao, told his companions they were missing the bigger picture. Shadow clearly had secrets. If they could track him down and abduct him in the real world, they wouldn't just learn those secrets, they could force him to collect life energy as their slave. He would send a woman to earn Shadow's trust and extract the information. From what he could tell, Shadow was from a humble background. He would fall for a beautiful woman. The plan was endorsed by his companions. Shinfun met up with Black Plum and gave her a portion of the loot in exchange for the tip about the gold boss. The girl immediately used one of the skills, which boosted her power and mana regeneration. She thanked her idol once more, and he asked her to return the ring they had agreed on. Dark Plum then mentioned that while fleeing the thugs she had stumbled across a cave, it might be the entrance to some ruins. This caught Shinfun's interest. He realized that staying friends with Dark Plum was paying off. His generosity had been well spent. She would never have told him about these ruins otherwise. Day wanted to find Wangming to sell him the items at a discount, and then head directly to the ruins. The girl said the captain and the rest of the crew were training a new cleric, but Dark Plum had marked the cave entrance on the map. It was concealed in the undergrowth beneath a flat stone slab. The girl had thought about hiding there, but fear had stopped her. Chinfun took the coordinates and vanished instantly, saying he was heading there now and would sort things out with Captain Min later. Initially, he had been searching for a decent farming location, but now he wouldn't need to. 3 types of ruins existed near the newbie village. All of them were packed with bronze and silver monsters, which meant a sea of energy and mutation points for Shinfun. Soon the young man reached the location Dark Plum had described. He found a shifted stone slab and discovered steps leading underground. There isn't much to say about tombs in general. They were typically inhabited by hordes of smaller monsters and capped off with a gold boss at the end. The monsters in the ruins are cursed by ancient evil gods. In life they may have been human, but death had transformed them into something else entirely. The temples are inhabited by monsters that were once human worshippers of the ancient gods. Temples were generally the most labyrinthine type of ruins. Clearing either of the first 2 successfully could yield a special item or skill scroll. Judging by the fresco inside the dungeon, the player had entered the Temple of Faith, the 3rd type of ruins. Shinfun looked around, studying the drawings on the walls. They felt oddly familiar. The player realized he had entered the temple of the ancient god of justice, the very same force tied to the Eye of Justice in his possession. The player fought with a defensive shield, doing everything possible to survive. A massive and terrifying monster lunged at him, throwing open its fang-filled mouth. The monster struck the player multiple times and blood began to flow. Shinsho was in shock. She hadn't even registered that she needed to start healing. Her teammates demanded it of her. The girl trembled with fear. On top of that, she had absolutely no understanding of how healing functioned. At that moment, the monster prepared to attack the group again. She urgently needed to use her skills, but Xiao was paralyzed by terror. She dropped her staff and squeezed her eyes shut. Moments later, the entire group found themselves transported back to the city. None of them looked well. Dark Plum greeted the captain, saying they had returned very quickly. Shadow had gone off on his own business, and they would have to wait for him. Every member of the team was furious with the cleric who had turned out to be utterly useless. How do you enter a game without knowing how to use your skills? Dark Plum came to the girl's defense, saying they shouldn't be so hard on her. It was Xiao's first real fight, and the first time is always terrifying. The swordsman admitted that the group had already died 3 times in the span of an hour. They had no energy or strength left. Dark Plum said she would quickly heal the group using the items Shadow had given her, and thanks to those, the team wouldn't be losing any more lives. Wang Ying thanked the girl, saying everything would be fine now, and that they would meet Shadow again the next time they entered. Xiao was forced to apologize to the team, promising to try harder. But internally, the girl felt powerless in front of these people she considered idiots. She maintained the relationship with them, only in the hope of eventually getting close to Shadow through their connection. Chinfun pushed deeper inside and emerged into a vast hall. Kneeling there, several monsters prayed in solemn worship. They were devoted servants of the ancient god, carrying silver-level power. Shinfun used Shadow Slash to damage the monsters. He noted that even with sneak attack and invisibility active, the monsters lost very little health. This was to be expected from 10th level silver monsters. Collectively, they were more fearsome than the golden ghost ship had been. At that moment, the monsters bowed again. Chinfun didn't understand how they could sense him since he was invisible. Perhaps they could detect the aura of the Eye of Justice, and so they bowed without attacking. Chinfun ordered the monsters to let him pass, but they only howled back. Their consciousness had been shattered, and now they were little more than animals driven by the instinct to steal life energy. But then their eyes brightened and something switched on inside them. The monsters leaped to their feet and charged, but they ran straight past Chinfeng. Deep inside the hall, they had spotted other players and were now targeting them instead. Shadow remained invisible. He heard the players debating whether to flee. They didn't believe they could handle 2 silver monsters, but then a girl stepped forward and began using her magic. It appeared to be Grey Rose, who had previously purchased the ice spell from him. Of course, the temple had been discovered so quickly. For the foreseeable future, no player would have sufficient strength to clear it. Instead of players, only their exchange energy remained where they had stood. The monsters resumed their devotion as before. Shadow checked the exchange energy supply and found it was quite satisfactory. Qinfen still couldn't find anything else of value inside this temple. No traps, no treasures. There couldn't be only these 2 monsters. In the end, there was no point wasting time here. Qinfen fired his poisonous sting at the monsters. Both were destroyed. The player earned a large amount of experience and climbed to level 9. He immediately activated Greedy Hands to multiply the bonuses received several times over. And indeed, the haul was enormous. Many mutation points, gold and silver artifacts, and 1,500 days of exchange energy. There was also a small gift meant for assassins, a believer's medallion, which allowed him to summon the condemned and use them as his own. In addition, there was a significant boost to speed and reduced recharge times, though the player decided to hold the remaining items and sell them later since no other player had the level required to use them yet. At that moment, the young man noticed a glowing circle on the floor behind him. It was a hidden hatch. To activate the mechanism, all monsters in the hall first had to be eliminated, which had already happened. Qinfen approached the mechanism and worked out how to open it. He pressed the button, and everything around him began to shift. The floor beneath his feet parted and opened downward. Gradually, it resembled an underground elevator. The descent took some time, and by his estimations, the player had gone down 300 to 400 meters. Qinfen realized he had entered the temple catacombs, found in only select temples, but in his previous life he had explored several similar locations. These catacombs are riddled with traps, but since people in the game can function as expendable scouts, they are manageable, though at his current level, Qinfen would die from almost any trap. So he used the believer's medallion to summon a condemned creature. The young man activated the summoning, and a monster materialized beside him at once. Qinfen sent the condemned to scout ahead. Things were far more manageable with company. Still, the danger was real, so he urgently needed to boost his resilience. After doing so, the player also upgraded Shadow Slaughter to the epic level. Upgrading from there to legendary would require 10 times more mutation points. The higher the initial level of an artifact or skill, the more cost-efficient it is to upgrade. For example, an item that starts at epic level only costs 1 point to push to legendary, but a skill starting at the basic level demands hundreds of points across many upgrades. Qinfen could now afford it, and none of his abilities would fall short in power. He spent the remaining points on upgrading Shadow Walk, cutting down its cooldown time significantly, though it was still considerable. At that moment, the condemned scouting ahead stepped on a slab and a click sounded. Instantly, an enormous stone ball dropped from above and crushed the condemned creature. Qinfen had to wait before summoning another. It was a slow method, but a safe one. At that moment, upstairs the temple had grown quiet and still. Several players cautiously peered into the hall from a temple corridor, surveying the room. Grey Rose and her companions had returned, only to find that the 2 monsters had vanished. There was also no life energy belonging to any players. Someone had killed the monsters and taken everything, and only one person could have done that. Grey Rose recalled catching a glimpse of a man speaking to the monsters when they had first arrived. It must have been Shadow. Could he really have a skill that could charm monsters? The next summoned creature died after falling into an iron bar trap. Qinfen had been making his way through the catacombs for 3 hours and finally appeared to be reaching the end. Without the summoned creature absorbing traps along the route, it would have taken at least 100 lives to get this far. The player summoned another creature to continue the exploration. They moved forward together, leaving behind empty corridors stripped of all hazards. At last, a massive door appeared ahead of them, and Qinfen commanded the summoned creature to open it. The monster failed. Qinfen approached the door himself and pressed his hand against it. Immediately, something extraordinary occurred. The door swung open, and from the room behind it, a terrifying mist began to spread outward. Stepping inside, the player discovered a massive chest entwined in poisonous vines. Beside it stood an NPC, a girl with her mouth bound, preventing her from speaking. Qinfen had never encountered an NPC of this kind before. She was deeply mysterious, and the player looked around in quiet astonishment. Then, the NPC began to speak in a completely incomprehensible language. After that, she simply dissolved and disappeared, leaving the player thoroughly confused. Qinfen noticed the chest had vanished along with the NPC. All of it was deeply puzzling, but the player felt instinctively that it was connected to his Eye of Justice. The chest radiated gold light, meaning something epic was inside, but caution was required. This could be a trap. Qinfen ordered the summoned creature to open it. The monster approached the chest and lifted the lid. The entire room flooded with brilliant light. Inside was an assassin skill with both active and passive effects. Now, the player himself stepped forward to examine what he had received. It was a skill book that improved accuracy when striking weak spots and dealt damage over a fixed period. Chinfun was satisfied. Passive damage doubling was outstanding, and the throat slash had an even more powerful additional effect. If damage landed, the effect would persist for 3 seconds, during which the player's skills allowed him to land multiple strikes. But throat slash only activated on the first hit. This was an epic level skill, and he would need more mutation points to push it to legendary. Yinfun tallied the results of his journey through the ruins. He had achieved an excellent outcome and could now deal far greater damage than before, all thanks to Dark Plum. He needed to sell the remaining trophies to her squad. Returning to the city, the player waited for Wang Ming and his team to appear so he could settle with them and move on. At that moment, a crowd of players approached, announcing they had come from the city of Firefly and wanted to add him as friends or take him as a mentor. People had gone completely mad, offering their sisters and wives in exchange for Shadow's attention. Shinfun didn't react to any of this. He noted, however, that the teleport from other cities had already been activated, meaning he could now reach the city of Songfay. To stop the players from pestering him, Chinfun dissolved before the eyes of stunned onlookers. The players immediately erupted in self-blame, each accusing the others of having driven Shadow away. No one should have pressed him like that. Shortly after, Chinfun found Black Plum on the street and told her he was ready to meet the whole team. The girl quickly brought her idol to Captain Wang Min. Among the gathered players, Chinfun immediately spotted his sister Xiao. She stared at the famous and most powerful player with admiring eyes. Jinfun didn't understand how his sister had ended up on this team. Her presence could destroy Wang Ming's entire group. She gazed at her idol and dreamed of getting closer to him, intending to use his help for her own purposes. Chanfun knew he had to be careful. The entire world knew Shadow, but his true identity had to remain hidden, because in reality, it wasn't worth using his powers on people. Now absolutely everyone wanted to kill him. Xiao studied Shadow and immediately sensed from his bearing just how powerful he was. Compared to him, her entire team was nothing. She desperately wanted to reach Songfay with his help. At that moment, Shinfun laid out the equipment he was prepared to give to Wang Ming's team. Every item was gold or silver status, well beyond what the team could currently afford. Shadow said they could pay him back later, and Wang Ming expressed sincere gratitude, pledging readiness to help with anything in the future. The moment the items were distributed, the players began testing their new skills, and were delighted. Their abilities and potential increased dramatically. There were no healer items in the lot, though. The guys reasoned that the girl had already gained experience through combat. Xiao worked up her courage and approached Shadow. She greeted him and asked if there was anything left for her. Chinfun looked at her intently. Xiao held her eyes on the player without blinking. Without a word, Shadow simply vanished before her eyes. Everyone found Shadow's dramatic exits deeply impressive. The team guessed he probably hadn't had anything suitable for the cleric this time, but would stock up next time. In truth, Shinfun had extremely useful items he could have shared with the team. He had gold healer equipment and a skill book, but he had absolutely no intention of giving them to his sister. He knew that in the future, he would continue accumulating unwanted items, making it profitable to sell them to the team, but Shinfun did not want his sister ruining his relationship with them. He needed to find Little Gu as quickly as possible. She had been the former manager of the Godslayer Guild and belonged to the Hidden Healer class. She was the only one who had ever defeated an epic-level monster solo. Compared to her, Qin Xiao was nothing. Furthermore, Little Gu was in the same city as Songfay. Chinfun opened a portal immediately and teleported to Firefly. The teleportation completed successfully, and Chinfun now stood in Firefly City. He looked around. The streets were almost empty, but then voices rang out urging each other to hurry, saying the silver boss had less than half health remaining, and that they couldn't let others steal their victory, or all the effort would be for nothing. And on top of that, Songfay had brought an entire crowd of fans. This couldn't go on. The boss had to be finished. Chinfun realized that in this city too, all anyone spoke of was the celebrity Songfay. The man left the city and entered a gorge flanked by towering mountains on both sides. The area was called the Valley of Tears and carried a difficulty rating of 5. The monsters here were predominantly fading demons and magically bound demons. At that very moment, a battle was unfolding between players, and one of the demons. Kinfun recognized this monster. It was the two-headed demon boss, silver ranked. The battlefield was complete chaos, with many players attacking each other. A separate group led by Songfay and his devoted fans was attacking those same players. Songfay had no hesitation about using the girls as human shields for his personal gain. Many players were already furious at this handsome man who simply stole their rewards and then hid behind his adoring fans. But young women in love are a formidable force. Even without great magical skill, they weaponized their sheer numbers to defend their idol. Shinfun noted that the handsome celebrity had chosen the mage class for himself. In his previous life, he had pressured several fans into choosing mage and then taken their equipment for his own advancement, but a team made entirely of mages lacked balance. The fans had made choices. Some invested in intelligence and became glass cannon mages. Others invested in agility and became destruction mages. Others boosted their health and became living shields, while the rest raised their strength to become combat mages. Through this, Sunfei's team dominated early on, but as game updates rolled in, members of Songfei's team began dying off with increasing speed. Sunfei cheered his fans on, calling them brilliant. He hoped the monster would soon fall, and his fans could rest, because in his view, the world should be filled with love and peace, not violence. The fans were convinced their idol was the one suffering most and that this horror should never touch him. They charged as one to kill the monster together, believing that doing so would prevent any further harm to their idol. Sun envisioned complete domination, the whole world at his feet, peace and love reigning supreme. The mages threw themselves at the monster recklessly. Of course, they were weak and couldn't overcome it. Girls died with words on their lips, willing to do anything for Songfei. They wanted to kill the creature so their idol would become the #1 player. And a player named Shadow realized they meant nothing to Songfei. The girls were in a kind of ecstasy, channeling every last bit of their magical knowledge and summoning everything available to elevate their idol. Sunfei himself did absolutely nothing. He watched, calculating if the silver boss was this difficult. How could he ever hope to solo the gold boss? Sunfei used all his helpers and thanks to that continued to level up. Soon he would reach level 8 and overtake Shadow, who appeared stuck at level 9. Before the man could finish his thought, an invisible hand seized him by the head. An invisible shadow surged past, and Song's body toppled. Shinfun carried his enemy's head with him as he moved. He had always said he would tear Songfei's head off with his own hands. Shadow Slaughter then activated, and the fans followed their idol into the same fate. The two-headed demon boss was also killed. Shinfun received a large volume of points from all these players and from the destroyed monster. The surviving players stood in stunned silence, watching as Shadow wiped out the boss with one blow and annihilated the entire company led by Songfei. They had barely caught a glimpse of the assassin, but everyone assumed it was Shadow. There was simply no one else. At that moment, Shadow stepped into the clearing to collect his earned loot. The players immediately surged forward, thanking him and declaring their admiration. A new group of players materialized in Firefly City. Sunfei had been killed for the first time. The man understood Shadow had done it, but couldn't figure out why Shadow had chosen this city and destroyed the boss in his territory. The fans were equally outraged. They couldn't understand why Shadow killed them during their fight with the silver boss and then claimed the monster. It was completely unfair. At that moment, another fan appeared. She asked whether she could join them. The girl possessed the eagle-eyed skill which could reveal invisibility. The existing fans immediately turned on her, only they were needed here, and this newcomer had a low rating and would ruin everything. Sunf told his fans that love could overcome anything. He took the archer by the hands and said he could feel her love. Her class didn't matter. She would join them and together they would grow stronger. Hearing these words, the archer was overwhelmed with elation, tears of joy and admiration flooding her eyes. Shortly after, 2 more players arrived. One was an assassin capable of turning invisible, and the other was a mage who had learned an area control freeze spell that could trap Shadow. Songfei welcomed everyone with open arms, declaring that love had enough room for all of them and that they would be together forever. The fans wept openly, promising to stay with their idol always, calling him the finest and most important gentleman. After all, the evil Shadow killed people on a whim while their idol championed love, and for his sake they were ready to fight any monster and avenge themselves on Shadow. Sunfei and his fans caused a scene in the middle of the city, and other players looked on with fascination. It turned out the handsome celebrity had just been killed, and had respawned here, and his killer had been none other than Shadow. The fans declared they were ready to lay down their lives to prevent another tragedy. Song basked in the spectacle. He understood that when Shadow was publicly killed, the whole world would see how a pathetic lone assassin had been brought down by Songfei, a complete reversal of fortunes. Qinfan was finally left alone and able to sort through the loot earned from defeating the silver boss. He activated Greedy Hands immediately. The player began by leveling up the Gift of Mercy skill, which doubled the chance of landing a hit on a weak spot. Beyond improved accuracy, the area of effect and damage dealt also increased. If the skill grew stronger still, half the enemy's body would become a weak point. The player decided to push this skill immediately to Legendary and then later elevate it to Mythical. He spent the remaining points upgrading Sneak Attack. Killing the boss and the various players had yielded 1400 days of exchange energy. His work here was done, he could head back. But at that moment, Jinfun was attacked. An unknown player lunged with a dagger aimed at his throat, shouting "Die Shadow" and driving the blade toward his neck. It happened in an instant. Yenfun managed to dodge. The blow hadn't scratched him at all. The attacker couldn't understand how he had failed to eliminate Shadow, and then a voice rang out, "Chinfun, surrender. You're surrounded." It was the group of fans who had since recruited several new members and were now prepared to avenge their idol. Shinfun activated his invisibility effect and began to dissolve. But it turned out the archer possessed a skill allowing her to detect the invisible. Soon the fans had pinpointed their target and were prepared to engage. The girls launched their most powerful skills and attacks. Songfay's fans would not tolerate disrespect toward their idol. The player tried to tell them he wasn't who they thought he was, but it was already too late. A torrent of arrows and abilities rained down on him. A massive explosion reduced him to pieces. In the aftermath, the fans realized they had made a mistake, but they didn't consider it a major problem. They ordered the archer to use Eagle Eye again to find the real Chinfun. Chinfun decided to play along. He produced the phantom bells, which immobilized all enemies simultaneously and shook them to the core. Suddenly, all the girls found they couldn't move. Chinfun then activated Shadow Slaughter and eliminated the entire group in a single motion. Songfay the coward had been hiding behind a rock the whole time, trying to observe what was happening. If this was Shadow at work, he hoped to catch a visual of him during the attack. He still couldn't see him, but then a voice appeared directly at his ear. "Songfay, you're dead." The player desperately tried to activate his magic shield at the last second, but it was far too late. Song was killed again and lay in the clearing with his head pierced. Chinfun was genuinely surprised at the enormous amount of life energy this man had accumulated, a staggering 2,000 days of exchange energy. The female fans had almost nothing left. It was clear they had given everything they had to their worthless idol. He felt a flicker of pity for the girls. It was hard to watch. They were brainwashed fools who had been playing this far too seriously. Without any life energy, they would be easy prey for monsters outside and would never find their way back to the real world. Sunfay respawned in Firefly City. He was genuinely worried. His remaining exchange energy was dangerously low, and he couldn't understand why his fans hadn't managed to find Shadow. The girls reported that the Eagle Eye skill couldn't detect Shadow. His invisibility level was simply too high. Sunfay didn't understand how they were supposed to fight someone like that. The fans tried to reassure their idol, reminding him that he had never met a player who had killed their boss twice. Song couldn't figure out why Shadow bore him such hatred, probably jealousy over his looks. For everyone's safety, it was decided to relocate their farming area, and the fans were ready to follow their idol anywhere. After a while, Chinfun materialized in the city, still invisible. He was surprised to find no trace of Songfay and his group. Perhaps they had relocated to a different city or left the game entirely. Shadow approached one of the other players and asked whether they knew where Songfay and his fans had gone. The player pointed him in the right direction and then begged Shadow not to hurt his girlfriend, Kitten F-Bomb, who was part of that group. Shadow advised him to find someone else, but the guy kept pleading, saying he had searched for a long time for his soulmate. Jinfun went in pursuit of the group. The player continued to chase after him, begging him to spare his beloved. Shadow had no interest in spending time on a drawn-out hunt. He would rather track down Guy, and just then a female mage passed him on the city street. Chinfun called out to her for help. The girl looked at the stranger and guessed at once who he was. Shadow explained that he had heard about her ability to track targets across wide distances. He asked if she could locate Songfay for him, offering to sell her a golden artifact at a very low price in exchange. Gu couldn't understand how this player knew about her abilities. She had told no one. Besides, she was fairly certain she couldn't afford a golden artifact anyway. Shadow named a price so low that the girl could actually manage it, and the golden item passed into her hands. She nearly cried from happiness. Qin Feng snapped her back to reality, reminding her she needed to fulfill her end of the deal promptly. Gu met Shadow for the first time, yet his aura felt strangely familiar. She asked whether he was worried she might run off with the artifact without holding up her end. Shadow was confident she wouldn't. He knew she despised Songfay, which was curious in itself. Beyond that, Shadow's voice felt oddly familiar. She couldn't immediately place it, but it didn't matter. She needed to follow the bird. This bird was a magical tracking tool designed to locate a specific player or monster. It rose high above Firefly City and began scanning the surroundings. It signaled a hit. Now they knew where Sunfay was hiding with his admirers. The bird transmitted precise coordinates, but they needed to move immediately as no one was going to stay put. Shadow rushed toward the coordinates and told Gu to add him as a friend and continue tracking the group, updating him on their position. Chinfun promised it wouldn't take long. He would close the distance quickly. The young man reached a gorge between two tall cliffs and pressed forward carefully, keeping quiet to avoid drawing attention. He paused at one moment as though sensing danger. Gu asked why he had stopped. His attention had been drawn to a tree bearing an unusual marking. Chin-fun asked the girl to check whether there were similar trees nearby. Guo spotted another tree ahead with the same marking and a third nearby. They were spaced roughly 100 meters apart. Chin-fun approached the first tree and placed his hand against it, checking what the symbol might mean. He couldn't decipher it himself, so he asked Gu. Touching it activated all 3 trees simultaneously, creating a connection between them, and a glow materialized inside the triangle they formed. Within it sat a jade chest full of treasures. Finding one here was unusual. Such blessings from the ancient gods rarely appeared near the new player village, but it was nonetheless a welcome bonus. The blessing of the ancient gods can appear anywhere in the god-forsaken lands. To unlock one, all the symbols must first be activated. Some chests summon bosses, others call forth hordes of weaker monsters, and some yield treasures and unique rewards. This particular chest was worth 1,000 days of exchange energy. Gu watched everything through the bird and observed Shadow tracing his fingers across the symbols. She made a mental note. With her own skills, she might be able to find similar chests on her own. Chin-fun opened the jade chest and received the skill scroll Blooming Curse. He recognized this skill from his past life, though he had never known its exact name. With it, he could drain all energy from players at the moment of killing them. This was an extraordinary bonus. Now, Songfay would be completely wiped out until he exited the game, and Chin-fun himself intended to reach level 10, return to the real world, and kill Songfay in the flesh. At that moment, the idol and his fans were tormenting another monster, or rather, Songfay was simply standing and watching while the girls did all the work. Songfay hoped they had moved far enough that the Shadow would lose track of them, meaning he wouldn't have to keep dying or share boss loot. He dreamed of leveling up enough to finally deal with the Shadow as he deserved. Then one of his fans burst in with news. Someone was interfering with their fight. The girl practically screamed, asking how long people would dare to get in their way. All the fans refused to tolerate it and resolved to rush in and destroy whoever was ruining their beloved Songfay's ranking. The other group of players was already quite battered and thrilled to see reinforcements arriving. Together they would surely defeat the boss. The girls charged in a mass and raised their staves. But in the next instant, those same staves were turned against the players. It seemed insane. Why were these girls killing other players when they needed to fight the monsters together? But the fans were completely brainwashed. They declared this was the fate of all fans, and they were ready to kill anyone for their idol. One girl sincerely couldn't understand what she had done to deserve their hatred, but in the next moment, her head was shattered and she died before anyone's eyes. Her companions stared in horror at her fallen body. The group of fans, unbothered, turned their combined fury on the boss next, believing the whole world should submit to Songfay. The poor monster fell under a force it had no hope of resisting. The girls earned a colossal amount of energy. Sun thanked his fans and declared that without them he would have perished. He owed his life to his beloved fans. The girls were moved to tears, insisting there was no need for thanks. They would lay the entire world at Songfay's feet without hesitation. Chin-fun watched this sickeningly sweet spectacle from his position on the cliff with cold dispassion. There was no reason to wait any longer. Chin-fun activated his invisibility and stepped down to meet his enemy. The fans suddenly sensed a shadow among them and immediately rushed to cover their idol with their bodies. But in the very next moment, Songfay's head was severed from his body, and the girls wailed and sobbed hysterically. Chin-fun activated Blooming Curse. He had been waiting to test this skill for a long time. From Songfay's decapitated body, along with the pooling blood, a massive flower began to rise and bloom, a deep, vivid red. Every player present had never witnessed anything like it, and no one had any idea what was happening. Songfay found himself back in Firefly City. The player had died and respawned once again. Sunf couldn't understand why Shadow was so obsessed with killing him. Perhaps this player was jealous of his army of female fans. Sunf assumed Shadow had come to Firefly City specifically because of him, possibly because Shadow's own beloved was among his admirers. The player checked his stats and saw his life energy was draining rapidly. He couldn't understand the cause. Maybe it was a penalty for dying too often. At that moment, Songfay's fans came rushing in with terrible news. Shadow had made a flower bloom out of the player's body, and it was draining energy from him. The man immediately understood the flower was sucking his energy dry. It was clear Shadow intended to kill Songfay completely. Songfay concluded he needed to log out immediately and return to the real world to buy energy and restore his equipment. Leaving the game, Songfay told himself this wasn't over. He had been training for 2.5 years to reach his current level, and money could fix what skill alone couldn't. Qin Fang observed events with interest. He was effectively standing in the middle of a blooming poppy field. Red flowers were growing from the bodies of everyone who had been killed. Notifications informed him that his player kill count had pushed him to killer status level 4. Chin-fun wasn't concerned. He was counting how many days of energy he had earned from the entire encounter. But then the drain stopped. The players must have left the game. Gu had been watching everything through her bird. The girl was left speechless by the power the top-ranked player had displayed. he was doing things that seemed genuinely nightmarish. Kinfun asked Gu whether the idol and his fans had departed. After confirming that Songfay had logged out, he asked her to alert him the moment Songfay returned. Gu was about to say goodbye to Shadow when the young man said he had a golden skill called Sword of Divine Justice that he was willing to share and would sell it to her at a fraction of the going price on one condition: that Gu join the same team as a permanent member. Gu agreed immediately, though she warned that if the team turned out to be weak, she would complain constantly. Shadow reassured the girls that there was nothing to worry about. The team was excellent and told her to contact him. Meanwhile, at another location across the ruins, Wang Ming was locked in battle with monsters. He fought with everything he had and finally managed to bring them down. He turned to Qin Xiao and told her to neutralize the poison. All priests had that skill, and they had to act quickly, or the captain wouldn't survive. Xiao stared at the screen, saying she would check her skill and try. Then she aimed her staff and shouted the word neutralize. The strike missed the player entirely and hit a tree instead. Wang Ying continued to lose vitality from the poison inflicted while fighting the monsters. Xia could only cover her mouth and admit she had missed. A moment later, the team captain died. Wang Ming respawned in Shell City. He was thoroughly convinced the useless cleric needed to be replaced, but where could he find a replacement when all the capable healers had already joined other teams? At that moment, Xiao checked her rating and realized the game wasn't difficult at all. She had already reached the 4th level without doing a single worthwhile thing. If things continued at this pace, she would meet her idol before she knew it. Wang Ming received a message from Shadow. He suggested adding the White Bird Priestess to the team, recommending the girl as being strong enough. Wang Ming decided that he would move his team to the city of Firefly since there were too many players crowding Shell, and he would gladly welcome the new priestess. Wang Ming had to turn Xiao down. He explained that the entire team was relocating to Firefly because Shell had become too overcrowded. Unfortunately, Xiao couldn't come with them. It was too dangerous, and they wouldn't be bringing her along. She started to insist she could still be useful. But the players rushed off, and by the time Xiao realized what was happening, no one had any interest in dealing with a useless healer. Qin Xia was furious. If the team wanted to drop her, they should have just said so. She told herself she wasn't bothered. She was tired of those losers anyway. She would find Shadow herself and level up alongside him. Wang Ming moved quickly to Firefly City and immediately went to find Shadow. He told Shadow that Captain Yan Yu would transfer equipment to him when she entered the game. And now Shadow introduced a new priestess, Gu Yiger. Wang Ming barely had time to greet the new team member before he heard someone calling his name. It was An Yu, a player from Justice Execution, bearing a Hidden Dragon Knight build, one of the strongest players Shinfun had encountered in his previous life. At that time, she had been one of the most powerful forces in China and a real nightmare for foreign factions. An Yu greeted Shadow, saying she was happy to finally meet him and had heard a great deal about him. Chinfun was meeting someone who had surpassed him in his past life for the first time, and Yu told Shadow that his leveling speed was simply extraordinary. He must have a secret. She even half-jokingly suggested he was either a time traveler or reincarnated. Shadow said nothing. In his previous life, Anu hadn't been on the same team as Wang Ming. Her energy was supplied by the Shanghai authorities. Anu guessed that Shadow wasn't about to reveal his secrets and said that if anything interesting came up for sale in the future, they would purchase everything. All of Shanghai's life energy was under Anu's management. The girl hoped Shadow wouldn't kill her. Shadow confirmed it was more profitable to cooperate. He would earn more that way. But internally, the young man sensed traps in each of Anu's sentences. She played at being a naive fool, but every one of her actions was carefully calculated. The girls could barely stifle their yawns. They were exhausted. They had read that the life energy from the game was completely real, and that if it reached 0, they would die. That was terrifying. And on top of that, they had given their exchange energy to Songfay. The yawning wouldn't let them speak properly, but when they checked their indicators, everyone realized they only had a couple of years left to live. The thing was, they had killed other players, received killer status, and were now losing energy at double the normal rate. Confirming this in their stats made it worse. They had dangerously little time left. It was genuinely hard to accept that the girls had given their lives for their idol, who was now out there buying life energy. On the other hand, surely if she asked, he would help a devoted fan who had tried so hard for him. One girl decided to dress in full fan attire. She had just gotten her hands on some flashy new underwear. Now decked out in full regalia, beautiful and unmistakable, the girl was ready to go to her idol and ask for days of life energy. Qin Xiao also finally woke up in her apartment. The girl felt as though something was being erased from her memory. After checking the exchange rate, Xiao felt like a millionaire. She could sell her 200 days for an excellent price. Reading the news, the girl learned that Shadow was still relentlessly pursuing her idol and had now killed him 3 times in the game. Tears streamed down her face, and her entire body shook with grief and devastation as she absorbed the new reality of their lives. If a player's in-game life energy reached 0, the person would die in the real world. And now the girl understood that her idol had almost no energy left, all because of Shadow's obsession. No one could understand why Shadow was so cruel, or why he needed to kill Songfay and harm all his fans. At that moment, one of Songfay's closest fans posted an announcement. Their idol urgently needed help, and was ready to purchase life energy. Songfay was currently in Guiyang Square and was welcoming all fans to help, and to get rich in the process. Qin Shao, of course, could not sit idle while her idol was in crisis. She decided to go and help Sunf at once. Thanks to Wang Ming's group, Qin Shao had accumulated 200 days of exchange energy, and now it would all go to her idol. At that very moment, Qin Fun continued honing his skills by annihilating monsters. After another completed mission, a congratulatory notification arrived from the game. Shadow had reached level 10. All player stats increased by 2 points and class growth was unlocked. All missions across the entire game paused and a global announcement was broadcast. The player Shadow was the first in the world to reach level 10. Players expressed widely different reactions to Shadow. Some considered him lucky, others considered him terrifyingly powerful and ruthless. But absolutely everyone agreed that no current player anywhere in the world was comparable to Shadow. Qin Fun ran the numbers on his stats. He had over 7,000 days of exchange energy, still not enough to leave the newbie villages. He had to wait for 6 more Shanghai players at level 10 to open the portal to the god-forsaken continent. The strongest current pursuers in the rankings were only at level 7. Qin Fun understood that there was nothing left for him to do in the game right now. He decided to return to reality to handle his real-world affairs. Qin Fun had spent a tremendous amount of time in the game without once leaving it. Now he was slowly waking up. He had to decide how much exchange energy to spend transferring abilities to the real world. Qin Fun reviewed all the conditions, class transfer, equipment, skills, origin, and divinity. He decided to transfer his class and spent 1,000 days of life energy on it. After that, he transferred 2 additional levels, arriving at the 3rd level in reality. Then it was time for skills. The higher the skill level, the more energy the transfer required. But leveling up skills was practically a game exploit. The game recognized only the original level of the ability while transferring the improved version into reality. Qin Fun was able to transfer Shadow Walk, and that alone was remarkable. He didn't have enough energy for anything else, but that was sufficient for now. The young man was satisfied. He was now twice as strong as an ordinary person. His agility exceeded any human capacity, and his ability to turn invisible and fire poison arrows allowed him to neutralize any enemy. Qin Fun read that Songfay was purchasing life energy on a massive scale. The man was probably planning to return to the game and settle the score with Shadow. The young man was heading out to the square to see how things were progressing there, but at that moment a message arrived from his supervisor, Hukabin. The young man couldn't understand why he wasn't answering his phone, and apparently neither could his boss, who demanded he return to work immediately. Qin Fun had no intention of explaining himself to anyone. He threw his phone aside, activated invisible mode, and left the apartment. The young man understood that soon, everyone would realize what the game God-Forsaken Lands truly was, and when that happened, there would be no peaceful place left on Earth. The square was packed to overflowing. Thousands of fans had descended to welcome their idol. The girls screamed, squealed, and chanted, calling out to their beloved Songfay. Songfay sat on stage alongside a woman. He had come to purchase exchangeable life hours. The girl had heard about what had happened to him in the game. Shadow had killed him 3 times in a row. But she told him not to worry. She had already organized people to identify Shadow's real identity and deal with the insolent man. Songfay didn't really believe it would work. His expression betrayed no satisfaction or relief. The girl said she had sent someone to Firefly City to locate Shadow and offer him a staggering sum, money the player simply couldn't refuse. After accepting, Shadow would have to return to the real world and come to the designated meeting place where he would be captured and handed over to Songfay. Hearing the plan, the handsome man's mood immediately lifted. He knew the girl's company had deployed this method multiple times before to coerce people into working for them for free. It was worth noting that these people were completely expendable, so unintelligent it was barely worth the time. But Songfay was a different matter entirely. All these girls were ready to spill every last drop of blood just to help their idol. They surrendered their energy willingly and were prepared to sacrifice their lives. Sunfay was thoroughly pleased and considered it entirely right and true. He was flattered. At that moment, a man stepped forward from the crowd and tried to reason with the girls. He said they shouldn't be recklessly draining their energy when the official authorities had already made a statement. If a person's gaming energy dropped to 0, they would die in the real world. The man then turned to Songfay directly, saying it was clear the celebrity knew the consequences and was still brainwashing these naive girls and stealing their lives. The country's authorities would respond to behavior like this. They would not remain idle. Songfay realized he needed to take control of the narrative. Armed with a microphone, he greeted his fans and offered a gracious apology to the public for any inconvenience, calling out to his fans to come together. Most of the girls believed their idol had done nothing wrong and had no reason to apologize. Songfay continued, thanking them for their support. Together with his fans, he wanted love to be positive and uplifting, because every person had the right to choose who and how to love. In this difficult time, everyone must unite and fill society with good energy. From the stage, he said he couldn't stand idle and watch people suffer because of the game. So he had decided to spend everything he had, using all his accumulated energy for the good of the world. He was doing all of it purely so that his fans and all people on Earth could live in a world brimming with love and happiness. Tears flowed from the actor's eyes as he said he couldn't have imagined all of this would cause such turmoil in society. Songfay continued speaking about peace and love and sincere forgiveness, which he was ready to offer absolutely everyone. But the crowd chanted back that he was noble and had done nothing wrong. There was no reason to apologize. They loved him and were prepared to do anything for him. People insisted that no one had brainwashed them and that their support was completely genuine. They asked all doubters to leave the square. The most devoted fans believed no one had the right to question their idol, and if someone was foolish enough to believe such nonsense, that was their problem. One girl argued that everyone knew games and reality were separate things, so it was incomprehensible how the game could affect real life. Another girl said she would gladly help her beloved Songfay here and now, despite her in-game notification showing only 1 day remaining in her life energy, which she dismissed as complete nonsense. For love, one could sacrifice everything. The fans wept bitterly, screamed the name of their idol, and were ready to give their lives for him. It was pure mass psychosis. They were ready to give up the last days of their lives, convinced this was being done in the name of love and world peace. Songfay stepped off the stage, approached one fan, and said he wanted to thank her specifically for her sincere feelings. Tears absolutely flooded her face, and the girl confirmed once again that she was ready to do anything for her idol. Songfay looked at her with an affectionate gaze, tears forming in his own eyes, a confession seemingly on the tip of his tongue. Then a sharp whistle pierced the air. No one registered what had happened, but Songfay's expression remained unchanged, frozen in time. Then his body began to tilt forward and fall toward the fan in front of him. It turned out that half of Songfay's head was gone. In the next moment, the idol collapsed on stage with his head destroyed in full view of thousands of fans. Wild screaming erupted and sheer panic overtook the crowd. Bodyguards dragged the woman away from the stage. No one understood where the threat had originated or where the danger lurked. The girls, scattered with terrified screams, understanding they needed to save themselves and escape the crush of people. The woman ran alongside her bodyguards, but she had seen a ball of life energy materialize on Songfay's body and then instantly vanish. Someone had collected it. Without question, the man had been killed using a game ability. This meant that gaming skills could be deployed in the real world. Only one person was capable of killing Songfay and taking his life energy in the span of a second. The girl never got the chance to finish her thought. Her head had already taken a devastating hit. Despite the bodyguards throwing themselves into action, the young woman sustained a severe head wound. Shinfeng, operating under a veil of invisibility, now moved to claim the girl's life energy. The news hit like a shockwave. A beloved star idol had met a tragic end in the middle of the public square. Some of his most devoted and most extreme fans chose to end their own lives beside their idol's body, reportedly intending it as a sacrificial offering. The special services officially declared that Songfay's death had been the result of unnatural causes. Shinsha was devastated. She couldn't wrap her mind around what had happened just yesterday. She and her friends had been at their idol's concert, and now he was gone. Her friends found the whole situation deeply unsettling. The invisibility, the fired arrows, it had all the hallmarks of a calculated hunt. And when you factored in that Songfay had already died 3 times inside the game at Shadow's hands over recent days, it painted a very clear picture. But how could abilities from a game cross over into the real world? Shinsha concluded that just as Shadow had killed Songfay repeatedly within the game, he was the only one capable of ending the idol's life in reality as well. On top of that, the methods matched perfectly. There was no room for doubt. If Songfay had died in the real world, then Shadow had somehow managed to bring his in-game abilities across the boundary between virtual and real. Shinsha made up her mind. She would get close to Shadow no matter what it took, and to do that she needed to grow stronger at any cost. From that day forward, she resolved she would live for a single purpose: to kill Shadow and avenge Songfay. Qinfeng spent that evening at a noodle shop, because while the game was the game, dinner still followed a schedule. The game burned through enormous amounts of energy while he was dreaming, and no one had ever canceled his hunger, which meant he needed to eat considerably more in the real world. Another message pinged on his phone from work. His boss was furious, threatening that if the young man didn't show up, he'd be fired and forfeit the entire month's pay. The message was from Yang Xiao, a girl with a genuinely warm personality. She was timid, which made her an easy target for ridicule. but she was also sincere and kind. Xinfeng wrote back that he wasn't interested in any of that right now, and advised Xiao to log into the game and dump all her extra points into agility. Xinfeng's direct supervisor was an insufferable jerk, and his female boss was an absolute nightmare. Chen Shishi did nothing but chase after men and have a good time. In her previous life, Shishi had gone to America and built a guild there from the ground up. She'd done everything in her power to leave her homeland behind, and at the same time had started making moves on Xinfeng, so she had to be dealt with, and quickly, before she disappeared overseas and established her guild. If Shishi wasn't stopped, American players would flood into the Chinese market. Another call broke through his thoughts. This time it was Qin Xie on the line. The girl informed him that she had earned enough to buy her own place, and that she never wanted to lay eyes on her brother again. She demanded that Feng not even attempt to reach out to her. She promised not to bother him either, and asked him not to look for her new address. Feng replied that if those were all her requests and wishes, he promised to honor them completely, and would begin cutting all ties this very moment. The call ended. Xinfeng understood that the time had come to return to the game. Before long, people would figure out that in-game abilities could be transferred to reality. When that happened, there would be no peaceful corner left anywhere in the world. Qin Xiao was in Shell City alongside a friend. Her friend thought she never should have cut ties with her brother, insisting he was a good person. But Xiao maintained that he had sold her life energy. With the money she'd earned, Xiao purchased a home where she planned to one day live with Shadow. She would find him soon, and once she did, her brother would mean nothing to her anymore. At that moment, one of the other players called out to her. He had obtained the assassin skill scroll she had requested. He handed it over and reminded her to keep her promise. Xiao told him she would remember everything and make good on it once she dealt with her current problems. Xiao sent a message to Wang Min, telling him she had stumbled upon an assassin skill scroll and was willing to give it to Shadow for free if he wanted it. She figured that at least her classmate had been of some use. He'd managed to score a solid skill, and maybe this would bring her one step closer to Shadow. Walking through the forest, the girl daydreamed about the day she'd finally be at Shadow's side, healing him and helping him cut down monsters. She would level up far faster that way, and gradually earn Shadow's trust, maybe even his affection. But once she'd become powerful enough, she would no longer need him. She would cut him down with her own hands, gouge out his eyes, and avenge Songfay. Wang Min's reply came swiftly. Shadow had no use for that kind of skill. To him, it was worthless. She'd be better off selling it to someone else. Shortly before all of this, Xinfeng had been moving through the Earth realm hunting for monsters he could take on. Without warning, screams erupted nearby. Players were shouting at each other to stay sharp. Xinfeng crept forward and observed from behind a boulder. The players had come to the grim realization that their enemy was far stronger than they'd anticipated and were on the verge of breaking and running. They were facing down a multi-armed monster, powerful and terrifying in equal measure. The players had already accepted that they didn't have enough combined strength to bring it down. Xinfeng recognized the creature immediately. This was the Golden Arthropod, an 8th level boss. Xinfeng watched the battle unfold. Based on what he remembered from his previous life, this boss possessed a 2nd level anti-stealth ability. That meant invisibility was completely useless against it. The monster was a nightmarish sight. Swords and daggers bristled from its paws, and razor-sharp, rigid spikes served in place of legs. Yanfeng launched into the attack using shadow invisibility, but dealt almost no meaningful damage. He quickly realized that attacking from stealth was pointless. Many of the bonus damage multipliers simply failed to trigger. However, thanks to the legendary gift of mercy, the chance of striking a weak point was doubled, and the 3 cuts he managed to land each dealt triple damage. It was an extraordinary skill. He had Dark Plum to thank for it, and the thought made him genuinely grateful. One of the players, watching from the cover of a rock, noticed that Shadow's attacks were chipping away at the boss's health, even though the other players hadn't managed to scratch it. Yinfeng loosed a poison arrow at the creature. The arrow was only silver ranked, so it dealt some damage but was far from lethal. As the fight dragged on, the player made a mental note to upgrade his invisibility skill as soon as possible. At that point, the boss launched its own assaults, swinging all of its limbs at once. A chaotic exchange broke out between the 2 opponents. The monster's paws cut through the air in blurs of motion, and the outcome was entirely unclear. The girls watching from the sidelines were gripped by a mixture of awe and dread. They were mesmerized by Shadow's speed, his reflexes, and his near-supernatural understanding of his opponent's every move. Shadow wasn't stronger than the boss, but he could sidestep every single attack, as though he had fought this monster countless times already. Xinfeng recalled that in his previous life, he and his sister had made repeated attempts to defeat this creature together and had always failed. Now Shadow had cracked the secret. You didn't fight with raw strength. You read the monster's movements and felt its rhythm. Compared to the assault patterns of the Golden Chariot, This boss's attacks were actually easier to anticipate. Sensing that it was losing life energy rapidly, the monster decided to disengage. Little Goo spotted that the creature was about to flee. Qinfeng armed himself with a dagger and took off its head in one sweeping blow. The kill rewarded him with a massive haul of experience points, mutation points, and life energy. He immediately activated his skill and received triple the points. As an additional bonus, the player received an ultraviolet shield, a specialized assassin skill that granted him a triple layer of invulnerability. Dealing with bosses was going to be far more manageable from this point on. Better still, the skill could be immediately upgraded to epic rank. Qinfeng did exactly that, bringing his shield layers up to 7. With that kind of protection, he could safely explore far more dangerous territory. He spent the remaining mutation points on upgrading his poison arrow. For eliminating the boss, he received 2 assassin equipment pieces, the Sanctuary of Light and the Crimson Leather Gloves. Qinfeng was extremely satisfied. Killing that boss had significantly boosted his movement speed, and his survivability as a player had jumped considerably. Wang Min's team finally emerged from hiding. They expressed admiration for his extraordinary strength and asked whether he happened to have any rogue gear suited for a mage that he'd be willing to sell. Qinfeng mentioned he had a golden item that launched an ice ball, but named a price that gave the others pause. Shadow clarified that this particular artifact was superior to the others and that the price was entirely fair. The item would pay for itself very quickly. The Whitebird Priestess agreed with his reasoning and said she was ready to purchase it. After that, Shadow left the group behind. He reflected that simply wandering the area in search of opponents was a terribly inefficient use of his time. He needed proper intelligence on boss locations in the city if he wanted to level up at a faster pace. At that moment, Wang Min reached out with a message about Xiao's offer regarding the skills scroll. Qinfeng immediately understood that his sister was probably trying to offload some bronze tier garbage. He also understood that rumors were already circulating among the player base that it was Shadow who had killed the idol, so either Xiao wanted to impress Shadow, or she was angling to avenge Songfay. It was after this calculation that Wang Min was sent a message back. Shadow considered the skill worthless and suggested she sell it to someone else. Qinfeng then wrote to Wang Min that he had something to sell and proposed a meeting in the city. Wang Min got right to the point. He asked Shadow directly, "Songfei, was that you?" The response was short and blunt. Yes. Qinfeng confirmed that he had killed Sunfei. After delivering his answer, he moved on to other business. Wang Min knew this player well. He knew Shadow was on his way out of the game. The timing, the method, everything pointed directly to him. If Wang Min was asking the question, it meant the authorities had already connected the dots too. But what could they actually do? Within just a few hours, other players would be reaching level 10. And the secret that in-game abilities could cross into reality would be out in the open. Qinfeng stood before Wang Min's assembled team. They were genuinely glad to see the genius. And Anu stepped forward and asked whether Shadow had really just confessed to murder. Qinfeng confirmed it in front of everyone. Yes, he was the one who had done it. Anu smiled and said they had already conducted their own investigation and their only prime suspect had been Shadow. The police had also uncovered that Songfei and she had conspired against Shadow, kidnapping other players and forcing them to labor for their operation. In short, the authorities considered those deaths an act of self-defense. Qinfeng grasped that the police still did not know his real identity, and it was reasonable to hope that any cooperation from his previous life would carry over, because in that life he had never committed any unlawful acts. Now the player had effectively killed Songfei and Shi out in the open. What remained to be seen was how his rebirth would reshape this world. As long as Shadow could continue to sell them skills and equipment, they had to take advantage of that opportunity while it lasted. Shadow laid out platinum rank gear and skills in front of the assembled players, explaining that he had gotten lucky with a chest, and that luck was in no small part thanks to the Whitebird Priestess. Dark Plum immediately felt a flicker of jealousy toward her friend. Qinfeng was quick to add that he always remembered and remained grateful to Dark Plum for her help. The girl was satisfied. Wang Min and Anu contemplated the enormous gulf between their group and Shadow. While they were still scrapping with silver tier monsters, Shadow was walking away with platinum and jade loot. Qinfeng laid out the most interesting pieces and announced his prices. He offered a discount and planned to sell off the rest later for a considerable sum. Anu wasted no time deliberating. She agreed to the price immediately, saying there was no point bargaining when the asking price was already completely fair. In addition, the captain settled the debt for Snowflake and Wang Min. The deal was concluded. Qinfeng noted privately that Captain Anu was a remarkably decisive woman, and he respected that. The young man understood that an enormous amount of money had just changed hands. Even by government standards, these were staggering sums, but the investment was sound. The returns would more than justify the cost. With those skills and equipment, capable teams would form quickly, and the stronger the authorities became, the fewer small-scale problems they would have to manage. It would also serve as a strategic advantage in any international confrontation. Captain Anu then announced that the whole team was heading out to rescue players being held captive by the Dang group. She offered Shadow a place among them. Qinfeng recognized this for what it was, a recruitment attempt in exchange for his actions against Songfay. He declined, but said he had some advice to offer before departing. The captain's instinct had been correct. Shadow had indeed used his gaming skills to kill those two in the real world. The players needed to reach level 10, after which they would be able to do the same. Qinfeng expressed hope that they would make full use of that opportunity once it became available. The young man was nearly clear of the meeting area when Captain Anu added that the Dang group was also buying up life energy. When they reached level 10, the rescue operation would face dramatically increased resistance. Qinfeng replied that he was glad they understood him. After that, he said his goodbyes and vanished. The captain immediately ordered the team to split into separate leveling groups at their current levels. It would be far more efficient to grind independently rather than together. Wang Min agreed this was the right approach and confirmed he was ready to carry out the order. Each team member was assigned priority to reach level 10. At least one of them would need to exit the game and report this development to the government. The players then noticed that Shadow had opened the auction again, but this time he wasn't selling, he was buying. Shadow sat in the trading area and was willing to pay 30 days of life energy for information on the location of a silver-ranked boss and 100 days for intel on a gold-ranked one. One player approached, curious to see what Shadow was peddling this time. Instead, the guy delivered a message. His mistress was willing to pay 300 million, plus group shares, for Shadow to escort her. One of the bystanders mentioned that according to rumor, Shadow had killed this guy's beloved mistress along with Songfay. He froze. He despised Leaky. She had wanted to capture Shadow and haul him into the real world, but Shadow had killed her instead. The revelation was staggering. At one point, the player had considered cooperating with her, but her men had beaten him senseless the moment he showed his face. He had woken up in some basement. Under torture, he'd been forced to harvest energy for them and lure in new victims. Leaky was genuinely vile and deserved everything she got. The player mocked Shadow's apparent stupidity for turning down a fortune, but in the end, it was the player himself who looked like a fool. Others nearby remembered that this guy had helped Lucci kidnap people, though he quickly launched into protests that he'd been coerced, that he'd never wanted to hurt anyone. At that moment, a different player approached Shadow with information on a silver boss location. Then Chen Shishi, the heiress of the Chen group, materialized on the playing field. Every player in the area knew to give her a wide berth. She had already killed a significant number of players and was perfectly capable of stealing anyone's energy on a whim. Chen Shishi appeared flanked by 2 bodyguards. They all projected absolute confidence. Shishi declared that there was nothing particularly impressive about this game. She had spent money to acquire top-tier equipment and skills, leveled up her melee combat abilities, and had been picking off other players to absorb their energy. Because of this game, she had been forced to skip a business trip, and now she was stuck in China when she should already be in America. She had important business there, boys to enjoy herself with. Instead, she was stranded, surrounded by men she had zero respect for. An American representative in the game named Tony confirmed that Chinese men were utterly hopeless and said he'd prove it to her. Even the recently killed Songfay hadn't impressed the beauty in the slightest. The girl's most pressing desire was to leave the country as soon as possible. For now, the one player who had captured her interest was Shadow, because he topped the rankings, had killed the idol, and was generating an irresistible level of intrigue. If Shadow had dared to kill an idol, he'd have no hesitation killing an ordinary person. She needed to find him urgently. She told her assistants she was stepping out briefly to make a call, and in the meantime they should reach out to Shadow. Shishi had concluded that Shadow probably wouldn't care about money, but he wouldn't be able to refuse energy. She would offer him 3,000 days simply to take care of one person. She still couldn't get that look off her mind. The look on Qinfeng's face when he rejected her. That insolent man would pay with his life. The player had nearly finished off the monster, though it was clear he had spent an enormous amount of energy doing so. The cleric immediately moved in to heal the player and restore his strength. The player told Qin Xia to start healing him earlier next time. He'd nearly died out there. But the girl shot back, "Don't yell at me. You're not dead. So stop being so dramatic." After that, Xin Xiao announced that she was hungry and that the girl should log out so they could eat together. She took her friend Chu Yang with her. The player she'd been grouped with was furious. Xiao had been completely obsequious toward him, yet the moment Shadow was mentioned, she turned arrogant. He decided he would teach her proper obedience in due course. She woke up in her apartment, starving. She wanted to order food delivery, but every delivery service was shut down. There was simply no one available to work. Everyone was stuck inside the game. Xiao found herself wistfully remembering the days when her brother used to cook for her, when she didn't have to think about any of this. But she shook it off, telling herself not to be so weak. It wasn't complicated. It was just food. Freedom mattered more. She told herself she was strong and could handle this on her own. She no longer needed Qinfeng. A secluded cave sat perched on the seashore, and strange sounds drifted out from it. A monstrous crab called this cave home. The moment the crab dragged itself out of the entrance, Shadow was on it. A single blow split the creature cleanly in two. This was already the 4th silver-ranked boss he destroyed within the last hour. Each one rewarded 16 mutation points. The loot from a single monster like this could fetch decent money on the market. At this point, virtually all of the player's equipment had been upgraded to gold rank or better. His overall recharge time had accelerated by 2/3. There were no platinum bosses anywhere near the newbie towns, which meant gold was the absolute ceiling he could currently aim for. The only path forward was to step up to platinum-ranked bosses. Their anti-stealth level would be no lower than the 2nd, which meant Shadow needed to be upgraded to the 3rd before he could take them on. Otherwise, they'd spot him. In his previous life, it had taken a coordinated assault from 20 highly skilled players just to bring down each platinum boss. But for now, there was nothing left to do in the area, so Shadow resolved to return to the city and unload his loot. Qinfeng was confident he was always several steps ahead of everyone else, and that he alone would be the one to finish off the first platinum boss. Back in the city, he rapidly sold off his unnecessary items and walked away with a massive sum of exchange energy. He was making his way through the streets when a player called out, asking if he was really Shadow. The guy claimed he had business. It involved a real-world killing, and the reward was substantial. Shadow paid no attention, so the stranger jumped directly in front of him and said the job was simple. Kill an ordinary man named Qinfeng. Payment, a large sum of days. Qinfeng was intrigued by the offer to kill himself and asked what this man had done to deserve it. The stranger replied that it was none of his concern. Shadow would receive 3,000 days of energy. Qinfeng recognized the figure being a fabulous amount. He was curious to know who wanted him dead. The man who'd made the offer was a complete stranger, someone he had no memory of from this life or his previous one. In his past life, this level of trouble only appeared mid-game from confirmed enemies. It was too early for that. The only person who harbored a grudge against Qinfeng and had the resources to back it up was Chen Shishi. Only she had both the motive and the means. But if she had simply wanted him dead, she would have acted long before now. That meant she had another purpose. Her actual goal was to get close to Shadow. Killing Qinfeng was just a bonus. Payback for daring to reject her. Shadow agreed to the stranger's proposal. He would take the job, but he demanded half the payment up front and reserved the right to choose the timing of the killing himself. The player couldn't believe his luck and logged in immediately to process the prepayment. The transaction went through. Shadow received 1,500 days of exchangeable life energy and looked forward to his eventual meeting with Chen Shishi. The player handed over the target's address, noting that with Shadow's abilities, tracking the man down would be trivial. Qinfeng took in the information, turned on his heel, and told the client to wait for results. The young man was quietly amused. The client worked for Chen Shishi just like everyone else, and seemed outraged by Shadow's composure. The next person to block his path was a girl. She had heard Shadow was buying information on bosses, and said she knew where a golden boss was hiding. Qinfeng was willing to pay 100 days, but only after the information was confirmed. The girl turned and led him away, explaining that a monster named Chumnik was hiding north of the city. Qinfeng declined her offer to provide healing services. He already knew Chumnik was indeed a golden boss, and it seemed the girl had already encountered this creature firsthand. She continued leading the way, and Qinfeng was already mentally working through how to approach Chumnik. The creature was encircled by a poisonous ring, which meant the attack needed to be fast. Before long, they arrived at the cave. The girl explained that she and her group had cleared out the minor enemies, but the boss itself was beyond them. She continued deeper into the cave and Shadow followed. Eventually they reached the edge and spotted the monster Chumnik far below, deep within the cavern. Qinfeng was ready to pay for the information immediately. His mind was already churning through the battle plan. The girl then stopped and apologized. There was a trap. The moment he engaged the boss, the people who wanted him dead would flood in. She knew that one of the players had an item capable of detecting second-level stealth. For some reason, she had grown tired of the deception and no longer wanted any part of it. She confessed that she had been paid to befriend Shadow and uncover his real-world identity. Now she was telling him the truth, hoping he would help her deal with the gang that was threatening her in reality. Qinfeng asked who was behind it. She answered Dongfeng Sheng. Shadow had already killed him once inside the game. Qinfeng recognized the name, the player who had tried to steal the Golden Ghost boss from him, and later offered a skill book as an apology. Qinfeng didn't consider someone like that a genuine enemy, The girl pleaded with Shadow to deal with Dongfeng Sheng. She had just confessed everything, and if he didn't help her, she was as good as dead. It all felt slightly absurd. In his previous life, Qinfeng had never run into characters like this, but the boss needed to be destroyed, and if dealing with bad people on the side turned out to be part of his new routine, so be it. He told the girl he would proceed as if nothing had changed, just according to plan. Let the players come, and he would handle them. The girl watched Shadow walk away and thought it was over for him. There was a team of 18 people waiting here, and even they hadn't been able to do anything against the boss. The poison damage from the creature was simply too overwhelming. The players hadn't managed to scratch it. Shadow was powerful, that much she acknowledged, but he couldn't hide from poison. Qinfeng activated his liberation strike and charged in. He followed up with the skill that expanded the area of weak spots and exposed the throat. Then he slipped back into stealth, and the boss's health began to plummet visibly. The girl couldn't believe what her eyes were showing her. Shadow had stripped away 2/3 of the gold-ranked boss's health with a single skill. She was floored by how effortlessly Shadow handled the monster. He didn't seem human. Qinfeng pulled back to the girl and told her he wasn't going to finish the boss yet. He had decided to wait for Shang's people to arrive. Moments later, voices echoed from deep within the dungeon. The players were preparing their assault. They entered the cave and immediately told everyone else to clear out and not interfere. They were there to kill the boss. Qinfeng watched them. He understood that the girl needed to play along, act as though she were trying to hold back the players, defending herself from outsiders. By this point, the girl had already activated her gold-ranked divine shield. Now it was clear why Dongfeng had needed her. At this stage of the game, very few players could break through that kind of shield. They had likely encountered some kind of divine blessing along the way, a chest filled with golden treasures. Qinfeng kept watching closely from invisibility, but in the next instant an attack launched from the shadows. The players were no longer advancing. Qinfeng activated the ancestral curse, blooming flower, and began to drain every last drop of energy from the players' bodies. The girl, sheltered behind her shield, was in shock. Shadow's power terrified her. With a single skill, he dispatched a dozen people simultaneously. She was deeply glad she had told him the truth, because otherwise she'd be lying with the rest of them right now. She approached Shadow and offered to add him as a friend, then shared Dongfeng Shang's real-world location with him. Qinfeng agreed to the friendship. The girl was overjoyed and mentioned she wouldn't mind if things went even further. She wouldn't object to becoming his girlfriend. Qinfeng said nothing. He simply reflected that they were not people who walked the same path. After that, Shadow turned back to the boss and delivered the killing blows, bringing down the 10th level gold-ranked boss. Qinfeng calculated afterward that the total days of life energy he had absorbed from those dozen players was less than what a single boss dropped. It baffled him. Instead of killing monsters and developing themselves, these people preferred to get in other people's way. And the strange girl was still lingering. She just stood there, staring at Shadow, completely stunned, finally left in peace. Qinfeng got down to examining his loot from the golden monster. Among the rewards was an assassin's skill book, a technique that fired a beam of darkness from his blade, illuminating enemies. Qinfeng was genuinely excited about the blinding mechanic. He would need to study it and strengthen it immediately. If an enemy was blinded, he could deal double damage without even needing to be in stealth mode. That effectively let him ignore the boss's tier and its ability to detect hidden targets. He had also obtained the Plague Blade. Every attack made with this weapon was accompanied by poison damage, which erupted on contact with the victim's body. Qinfeng was extremely pleased with these two acquisitions. The day had not been wasted. He'd earned a significant amount of points and secured rare, important items. He would have liked a bit more experience, but none of the local monsters were willing to engage with Shadow anymore. The smaller ones scattered in terror, but Shadow ran them down and cut them apart. Before long, the entire beach was carpeted with remains. The player had now accumulated enough to advance his class. Qinfeng initiated the upgrade immediately, and Shadow achieved a new milestone. The player's current rank was now Shadow level 1. Across the board, bonuses were added to every stat. Qinfeng improved his passive skills. Stealth duration was extended. Stealth could now be reactivated mid-use, and attack damage was tripled. Qinfeng was deeply satisfied. Advancing his class had delivered a substantial boost across the board. The ability to renew invisibility while already invisible was enormous. Attack damage tripled, and this was only the first advancement. With perks like these, this was genuinely the most powerful hidden class in the game. At that moment, a public announcement rang out across the city of Zhanghai. 7 players had already reached level 10. The young man understood that a teleportation portal leading to the abandoned lands of Divine Will was about to open. Qinfeng wanted to know which players had leveled up so quickly. He checked the rankings and found a number of familiar names near the top: Grey Rose, Snowy Day, Dark Plum, King Ming, and others. In his previous life, the top of the rankings had been dominated by foreign players. But now the landscape had shifted, because Qinfeng had sold his companions a trove of top-tier items and skills. The structure of the world in this life was shaping up to be very different from the one he remembered. But at that very same moment, a new order was also being established in the real world. Police officers wearing masks were escorting handcuffed gang members away. The core members of the criminal organization had been apprehended, though 3 others remained trapped inside the game. Their bodies existed in a state of non-presence, making immediate arrest impossible. The police chief commended the team on their excellent work and asked them to report everything to the captain, and Anu exited the game. So far, the most reliable method for forcing a player out of the game was hunger. The moment they became too hungry to tolerate it, they would leave to eat, at which point they could be arrested on the spot. This time, everything had gone relatively smoothly. A player named Shadow had genuinely provided critical intelligence and assisted the police by revealing the existence of the ability transfer. Had the arrest been delayed any longer, the gang members would have succeeded in transferring their skills and would have been far more difficult to take down. In many countries, riots had broken out because of this very phenomenon. It was fair to say that the player known as Shadow was a boon to the entire nation. Establishing a means of getting closer to him was now an imperative. Qinfeng returned to the city, and the girl immediately reached out to him. She proceeded to heap praise on Shadow's abilities, destroying evil left and right, apparently. She filled him in on the large-scale arrests that had already swept through the city. News reports, meanwhile, were claiming that the player known as Shadow was acting on orders from higher authorities in eliminating the villains, Li and Seth. Qinfeng immediately read the situation. The government had decided to clear his name in order to open the door for future cooperation. But Dongfeng Shang was still somewhere inside the game. Qinfeng had no interest in wasting more time on any of this. His eyes were set firmly on the next location, the Forgotten Lands. The player knew that the portal on the main continent had never been activated before. The starting city was just the prologue. The real game began in the Forgotten Lands. Qinfeng stepped onto the teleportation circle and vanished before the eyes of the startled players watching nearby. It was the first time anyone had seen the teleport activate with seemingly no one there, but they soon realized that Shadow had been present all along. Still, even with their skills, none of them could detect him. His level was simply too far beyond theirs. The teleportation completed. Qinfeng had arrived in an entirely different place. He looked around and murmured that it was exactly the same as in his past life. The player knew these ruins of Tianhai like the back of his own hand. When players used this teleport for the first time, they arrived in the ruins of their hometown, a virtual city that faithfully replicated its real-world counterpart in perfect detail. No one had ever fully understood why the game worked this way. Qinfeng was moving through the ruins in an invisible state when he suddenly registered an unfamiliar sound. An enormous monstrous creature had materialized behind the player. Some kind of worm, covered in eyes and lined with rows of teeth. Qinfeng leaped aside with lightning speed and delivered an instant shadow strike. It was enough to destroy the enemy. This had been an earth-shaking worm, 11th level. Qinfeng jumped to the defeated monster and activated the gift of liberation. He was well aware that safe havens like the starting city were a thing of the past, and they were not coming back. He had dispatched the monster with ease and was now collecting everything it had dropped. If the players could find the temple hidden somewhere within these ruins, they would earn the right to establish a fortress there and claim the surrounding territory. The ideal location was one the player had already identified in his previous life. The Godslayer Guild's temple from that life had been situated nearby. The group of players who'd gained access also teleported into the lands abandoned by God. Everything had the look of a ruined modern city, and disturbingly familiar. The players started recognizing landmark buildings and realized they were standing in the ruins of their own hometown. The players already knew Shadow had teleported here ahead of them and figured he might be close by since he was often nearby in invisibility. Before long, monstrous worms emerged in front of them, giving the group an opportunity to fight. Gu activated the Elven Blessing, though it wasn't performing particularly effectively. Wang Min was forced to raise his shield to block a worm's strike. These monsters were significantly stronger than the silver bosses they had previously faced. The archer deployed a binding shot. The worms appeared to be restrained. They were writhing with considerably less intensity than before. The archer pointed out that since the worms were lighter and slowed, now was the time to press the attack. Dark Plum raised her staff and activated Fireball, launching it into the pack of worms, the first monsters the team managed to destroy. Wang Min called for someone to send out the owl to scout the surrounding area. Gyaku did so without hesitation. The owl's view revealed monsters in every direction. There were so many of them. The battle with the worms had drawn in a massive number of similar creatures, and they were all converging. There was nowhere nearby to take cover. The players came to the grim realization that they had no safe hiding spot. The game had just become dramatically harder. Dark Plum suggested searching for Shadow if he hadn't gone too far. They might be able to reach him. Players always felt safer in Shadow's vicinity. The girl scanned the area but didn't spot anyone when suddenly something unusual caught her attention. A trail of bright glowing lights was visible to the northwest. Items dropped after monster kills were scattered along the road. Shadow had almost certainly passed through there. His inventory was already full, so he'd left behind anything he didn't need. But monsters were closing in from all sides and the group realized they needed to run fast. Captain Anu suggested taking the same route Shadow had taken. If they followed his trail and the items he'd left behind, they might find him and be safer for it. The players bolted headlong down the trail, pursued by enormous worms. Wherever there were many worms clustered together, Shadow had used area of effect attacks capable of dealing catastrophic damage. The local monsters died from a single blow and their sheer numbers provided exceptional leveling opportunities. Qinfeng finally reached the right place. This was the refuge. Beneath these ruins lay a vast palace, discovered by players much later in his previous life. The palace had abundant resting areas and a huge number of halls. It was the largest hideout in Shanghai, and it had eventually become the base of operations for the Godslayer Guild. But before that guild had claimed it, the palace had been occupied by monsters and bosses who guarded every room. The larger the hideout, the more formidable its guardian. In his previous life, after Qinfeng had created the Kill Gods Guild, he had assembled 3 separate teams, all of whom leveled up to 15 before he himself was strong enough to take the place. But now the young man entered on his own and immediately heard a clicking sound. It was the abode of pure souls. Qinfeng knew he could handle it himself. To claim this territory, he had to defeat the Guardian. On every side, he was observed by level 12 gold-ranked bosses, elemental spirits. These were his targets. Qinfeng activated the skill Darkest Hour and rendered himself completely invisible to all of them. He then delivered a shadow strike, cutting down the elemental spirits simultaneously. He also planned to blind his enemies to amplify his attacks, though even without that enhancement, Qinfeng could have defeated them outright. In the end, every monster was destroyed, but the abode of pure souls had many more halls and smaller rooms to contend with. He found himself wondering who had designed this place. Given the monster density throughout the refuge, Qinfeng also stood to significantly upgrade his Palm of Greed, and after clearing all the monsters here, the experience gained would be nothing short of extraordinary. The moment the final monster in the room was dealt with, the Guardian finally revealed itself. The players used the teleport to enter the abandoned lands, and they too noted that the environment looked eerily familiar, even though it was called the land abandoned by the gods. It didn't take them long to work out where they had ended up. It felt like someone's cruel idea of a joke. Some players had found themselves in the ruins of London. It became apparent that people from different countries each arrived in the ruins of their own hometowns. This was beyond comprehension. How could locations from different parts of the actual world be recreated inside a game? But every player, regardless of origin, was greeted by worms, welcoming and terrifying in equal measure. The ruins of Shanghai were blanketed in loot left behind by Shadow. The players looked around with exhausted eyes. No monsters were visible nearby, so they seized the moment to catch their breath. The archer admitted he hoped he could contribute something useful, but it was becoming obvious they were all just getting in Shadow's way. Captain Anu believed that was exactly the case. Dark Plum noted that they should consider themselves lucky Shadow had cleared the area, otherwise they would already be dead given the monster density. She wondered aloud whether players would respawn if they died here. Wang Min advised against rushing to start clearing this area. They should wait until the rest of the team arrived in these lands. White Owl carefully analyzed the situation. Monsters had been dying one after another, but then the trail had abruptly stopped. It seemed as though Shadow had simply disappeared at a specific point. Wang Min decided to contact Shadow and ask whether he needed the dropped items or whether the team could claim them for themselves. Shadow was somewhat busy at that moment fighting the boss of the refuge. He had already eliminated all the smaller monsters, numbering around 400. Wang Min reached out and confirmed the team had arrived, asking if Shadow wanted to exchange the discarded items for energy points. Shadow replied that he would contact the team after reviewing the items and preparing goods for sale. Suddenly, the air in the room became electrified, and lightning crackled through it. One thing was clear, the guardian of this room was about to make its appearance, and indeed, a platinum-ranked boss, the Soul Purifier, soon manifested before him. To claim this territory, he would have to destroy the guardian of the land of purified souls. The Soul Purifier was the most powerful boss in the location. It possessed an enormous health pool divided into 3 distinct phases. In his previous life, Qinfeng had come dangerously close to death against its lightning single-target skill, even while fully equipped, but now the monster couldn't even land a hit. Qinfeng launched a shadow strike against the boss, followed immediately by a throat slash that began carving into the boss's health. The Guardian attacked with concentrated lightning bolts, but the player dodged every single one with perfection. Missing even a single strike, even with maximum defense, would have killed any player outright. Most high-ranking monsters possess the ability to alter the direction of their attacks mid-strike. But Shinfeng's speed was now high enough that he could sidestep them with ease. In his previous life, he had survived that fight only through luck and a healer's intervention. Now, Shinfeng was giving his opponent no chances whatsoever. The Shadow Strike and Poison Blade had already stripped away a third of the boss's health. The second phase began. The Soul Purifier turned invisible, but continued to release lightning bolts and electric orbs. In this phase, deflecting 3 electric orbs was the critical objective. The previous time the team had attempted this fight, every player had died to them, and afterward, Xiao had thrown a tantrum and said she never wanted to fight again, which was why her brother hadn't brought her the second time. Shinfeng not only dodged the orbs, but fired poison darts at them. Each time an orb detonated, the boss took additional damage from the poison. Deflecting all 3 was required to trigger the third phase. Shinfeng executed it perfectly. In the third phase, the boss began releasing area lightning strikes. In his previous life, victory had only been possible through electricity resistance and the coordinated healing magic of 4 healers. But in this life, Shinfeng was confident that winning would not be a struggle. He activated his defense and rose into the air. The boss's attacks were designed to punish ground-level targets. He activated Blessing and the Shield of Dark Light, then chose to assault the enemy from above. He added Shadow Slaughter to the combination, and everything rained down on the enemy from the sky. The Platinum-ranked Angel of Purgatory was slain. Qinfeng became the first player in the world to kill a Platinum boss. He was crowned Guardian of Purgatory, reached level 11, and received an enormous package of bonuses. The refuge could function not only as a safe haven, but also as a storage facility. And more remarkably, items could be withdrawn from it directly into reality. At first, weapons all across the real world began to rust and decay. The most lethal armaments, including nuclear bombs, became inoperable. From that point on, every conflict in the world would be fought exclusively using in-game capabilities. But shelters transferable to reality were capable of generating a magical barrier, making them the safest locations on the planet. In his past life, this place had been the Godslayer Guild's base of operations. There were good memories tied to it, but also the memory of many wonderful people who had departed from his life forever. Qinfeng resolved that in this life things would be different. He would remain alone until the very end. Rain poured relentlessly across the distant countryside. The player was locked in combat with a monster, and this time it didn't look like he would come out on top. At one point the monster scattered the entire party, and Xiao could only scream for help. But in the next moment, the girl was killed and ejected from the location. Shell had died once again and now found herself respawning in Shell City. The girl couldn't believe it. Killed again. And on top of that, she had failed to dodge the giant monster's attack. The tank didn't understand why she had just been sitting there and hadn't even tried to take cover. But Xiao was convinced that if he had done his job properly and absorbed the damage himself, she wouldn't have been hurt. At that moment, her friend Chu Yang wrote to inform her that the monster had been chasing her, and the tank had already fled. But there was no need to help Xiao now since she had already died and ended up back in the city. Chu Yang was genuinely frightened. She had almost no energy left, and now the girls would have to hunt whatever minor mobs they could find just to survive. At that moment, the game issued a notification that the player Shadow had just become the first in the world to kill a Platinum boss. The players couldn't believe what they were hearing. Most of them hadn't even made it to the new location yet, and Shadow had already earned new ranks there. Xia was shaken. She had never even seen a gold boss in person, and Shadow had already taken down a Platinum one. This player was unreachably powerful. Quinoa was ready to cry from the sheer frustration. While ordinary people couldn't manage silver monsters, Shadow was dispatching platinum ones. Shinfeng reached a new level from the kill and now had 10 free experience points. He decided to continue investing in agility. Shinfeng hadn't expected to receive many mutation points from the platinum boss, but he had. He now had enough to upgrade Greedy Hands. When the upgrade was complete, the player realized that instead of tripling his loot, the skill now multiplied it by 5. Greedy Hands had become an exceptionally powerful skill, 5 additional items per drop. On top of that, he received 100 mutation points, 2 assassin equipment items, and 1 skill. But Shinfeng's level was still too low to use them. Qinfeng summoned a follower and assigned it an important task: gather all the loot into a single pile covering every area he had moved through. He spent the remaining mutation points to upgrade non-priority skills to epic rank. He strengthened Shadow Walk and Sneak Attack, and made Moment of Darkness even more formidable. On top of that, the Blooming Curse now completely drained defeated enemies within seconds. Qinfeng also gained a new passive effect: the ability to absorb non-exchangeable energy directly from the surrounding air. High-level areas and monsters continuously drain non-exchangeable energy from the environment, and this new effect would allow him to reclaim it passively. At that moment, the girl from reality reached out to him. She congratulated Shadow on the first platinum boss kill in the world and informed him that Dong Fonang had logged out. She had tracked him to a nearby restaurant where his entire family had gathered. They had accumulated a significant amount of energy and were planning to spend it on skills. Qinfeng thanked the girl for the tip, but she reminded him he had to kill Fanang, otherwise Fanang would kill her. The summoned follower finished gathering all the loot, and with the help of greedy hands, the player absorbed everything he had earned. He still had storage space to spare. Qinfeng decided to find Wang Min and sell the items to his group. Captain Anu was the first to spot Shadow approaching. The girl couldn't contain her excitement and rushed toward the player to wrap her arms around the genius, but Qinfeng immediately set boundaries and stated he would be naming the price. If they didn't like it, they weren't obligated to buy. He was extending a discount and was waiting for their answer. Anu agreed to purchase everything he'd brought for sale without hesitation, ready to pay the full amount on the spot. The girl collected the silver, gold, and platinum items, noting she herself only had one gold tier item. The players were baffled as to how Shadow had such an enormous inventory that he could store this many items. Shadow, as always, gave nothing away, but he dropped a small hint. Beneath the monument in the city was a staircase, and descending it would reveal a teleportation circle back to the newbie city. Making the journey would cost players 500 days, but the return trip would be free. Now everyone had their own business to attend to. Anu immediately exclaimed that she had been right, Shadow was indeed reborn. How else could he know about the teleportation circle hidden beneath the stairs? Wang Min shot his captain a tired look. The girl had already decided she could seduce Shadow into working exclusively for the team. Qinfeng walked away from his acquaintances in his trademark solitary fashion, strolling through familiar streets while planning his next moves. Qinfeng resolved to spend his exchangeable life energy to transfer his abilities into reality. His class upgrade also needed to be synchronized. After completing the synchronization, the player transferred his skills. Last time, he had transferred only the first level of Invisibility Shadow Walk. Now he was able to level up further and transfer several more skills alongside it. The synchronization went smoothly. Exchange days were spent, but now the player was fully equipped in both worlds. Yinfeng possessed a medallion that not only accelerated his reload speed, but also granted him the ability to summon zombies, an extraordinarily useful advantage in the real world. At that moment, his available energy stood at just over a year, but his real-world power now nearly mirrored what he could do in the game. The next synchronization would close that remaining gap completely. Qinfeng finally returned to reality. He sat on his bed and thought through his plan. Chen Shishi knew his address, which meant he had to relocate. Moving the Purgatory Refuge would require a significant energy expenditure, so for now, he needed to find a temporary safe house. He activated greedy hands and all the furniture in the apartment was swept up and absorbed into storage. The skill served as a perfect substitute for moving boxes. Absolutely everything had been packed and moved without a trace. Qinfeng checked and confirmed that Dong Fonang and his family were gathered at a nearby restaurant. The young man sat at a window and studied the route on his phone, then he activated invisibility and set out to find the place. Within 10 minutes, the player arrived at the restaurant where the entire Fang Sung family had assembled. It was already known that in-game skills and life energy had real effects in the physical world. This represented a golden opportunity for the family. Everyone was pleased that their son had moved on this early. The patriarch was extremely proud. He remarked that the family had spent a considerable sum of energy acquiring skills and equipment. Their objective was to level the family core to 10. Once done, they would expand their influence into reality, reinforcing their position on both fronts simultaneously. The Dongfang family would become rulers of entire regions, their power enduring for millennia. The grandson half listened to his grandfather's grand ambitions and thought privately that the old man already had one foot in the grave, yet he was still clinging to his role as family patriarch. Fang Shang was nursing his own ambition. The moment he captured this mysterious genius known as Shadow and forced him to surrender his secrets, he himself would become the strongest person in the world, and then all these relatives of his would become unnecessary. At that moment, the grandfather asked how things were progressing with Shadow. The grandson replied that he had found a girl to help uncover his real identity and that they'd know soon enough, but he had to be taken alive, otherwise he couldn't be made to serve the family. By this point, Shadow had already dispatched every bodyguard on the premises, while inside the Dongfang family toasted to their bright future. Qinfeng weighed his options and decided against a direct confrontation here. Shadow Walk and the ultraviolet shield couldn't stop a bullet, and his armor hadn't yet been transferred. He activated his loyal follower, a zombie capable of fighting with its claws at close range and launching sparks at a distance. He instructed it to enter the building and kill everyone inside, leaving no survivors. A silver-ranked monster should have enough endurance to absorb direct gunfire. The restaurant door swung open and the follower stepped inside. The people inside stared in stunned silence at the zombie standing in the doorway. It was enormous and growling. Bodyguards immediately opened fire. Everyone realizing in an instant that this was a creature from the game, the shots didn't stop it. The zombie pressed forward, preparing its assault. It activated its attack and unleashed its poisonous power, cutting down everyone present one by one. The Dongfang family members fell in turn. Finally, it was the grandfather's turn. He looked at his grandson with a desperate, unspoken plea, "Save me," but the boy had already calculated that his only option was to escape. The moment he logged into the game, he would be safe, and once he reached level 10, nothing could stop him. But in that very moment, Dong and Chang looked down the corridor and saw the man he had been searching for. Xinfeng passed directly by him, veiled in his invisible gate. The boy felt an unexplainable wave of dizziness wash over him, and then Dongfen Shang was dead, and blood-red flowers bloomed across the floor, drawing in the life energy of the entire destroyed family. The blooming curse had functioned flawlessly. Every ounce of energy from the dead flowed into Qinfeng's account. The young man himself hadn't anticipated such a massive harvest. The impact of the blooming curse was staggering. Not only did all the bodies and blood dissolve without a trace, but the years accumulated by the dead also transferred. Qinfeng now possessed a frankly enormous amount of life energy, over 2,000 years. With that, there was no longer any incentive to venture into the wilderness. The guy was already leaving the restaurant when police sirens and approaching footsteps reached his ears. Someone had called them after hearing the gunshots. A squad of officers made its way through the building's corridors. They knew important people had gathered here tonight, and if there had been a shootout, the fallout would be significant. The police entered the restaurant and found essentially nothing. The space was clean and utterly empty. Whatever disturbance had occurred, there was no trace of anyone who might have been involved. Witnesses reported that no one had been seen leaving the establishment. The entire family, along with their guests and bodyguards, had simply ceased to exist, and not a single person had walked out the door. Qinfeng walked through the city streets, turning his attention to his next target, specifically Chen Shishi herself. The company's headquarters had relocated to North America long before the game ever launched. Right now, the only member of the Chen group still present in the ruins was Chen Shishi, the CEO's daughter, and she needed to be eliminated before she left the country. The distance from Shanghai to the ruins was nearly 300 kilometers, roughly 2 to 3 hours on foot. Qinfeng resolved to find transportation, but that would have to wait until next time. For now, the young man went to sleep. He drifted off and found himself back in the world of the game. A handful of silver and gold bosses remained in the ruins. Wang Min's team would be able to manage those on their own, and Anu reached out with encouraging news. It turned out that Dark Plum had located the entrance to the catacombs, but it was guarded by a gold-ranked spirit that the players couldn't overcome. On their way back to the city, the team had taken a small detour to avoid a crowd, and everyone noticed the area had grown quieter. The players wandered for half a day before Dark Plum fell into a pit. Calling for help had been useless. It was a special area of the catacombs. The team had gone in after her and found the entrance was blocked by a gold-ranked spirit of level 12, the Bridge Guardian. Fortunately, the players were fast enough to sprint away from it. If Shadow wanted to explore the catacombs, the captain was prepared to send him the coordinates. Qinfeng reflected that he couldn't go a single day without encountering some kind of trouble. He agreed to check out the catacombs. They were a naturally occurring anomaly within the wilderness, and there might be worthwhile items inside. The entrance was a massive well. He genuinely couldn't understand how someone could fall into it while just walking. Dark Plum continued to surprise everyone, and Qinfeng jumped in without hesitation. He found himself in the grave of hatred. His remote connection was immediately severed. Not long after, a gold-ranked spirit of hatred rose from the depths of the catacombs, a colossal goblin. In his past life, Qinfeng had faced monsters of this type before. Judging by its form, it would deal powerful physical attacks at long range. No wonder Wang Min's team had fled. The equipment they were currently carrying would offer no protection against it whatsoever. Wang Min had a holy shield, but this boss would drain half of his health with a single blow, and it would kill Qinfeng outright if even one strike connected. The young man activated Mercy and Shadow Slaughter against the monster. The monster's defense was considerable, but that was irrelevant to this player. He needed to layer in a poisonous piercing attack. No monster could turn down such a gift. The monster's severed arm, however, began to writhe on its own and inch toward the player, a deeply unsettling development. Then suddenly, everything concluded in a violent explosion. A wave of poisonous flesh erupted in all directions. The explosion was completely unexpected, and the player would have been annihilated if not for his blurred shadow skill. The last time this had happened, players had taken down a boss they'd never encountered before, and one of them had run up to collect the loot only for the corpse to explode. Nothing remained of that player. Several team members had died to self-destructing bosses in similar fashion. Most of those had been platinum ranked, but now it turned out that even gold bosses were capable of this. Qinfeng decided not to dwell on that sobering detail and activated Greedy Hands. He now had all the equipment he needed, along with a skill book. A powerful assassin skill called Shadow Blade was among the rewards. It released a beam of dark energy from his blade capable of striking all nearby enemies simultaneously. Qinfeng genuinely loved reviewing new data, This skill had now been elevated to epic rank. With the Shadow Blade's development, his attack radius expanded and the raw damage output became extraordinary. After all, it was an area of effect attack. The damage per individual strike was modest compared to Shadow Slaughter, but it was devastatingly effective for clearing out weaker mobs. Shadow Slaughter's radius was 5 meters and functioned in a straight line, while Shadow Blade dealt proportionally greater damage when enemies encircled the player in a full ring. The leather armor of Hatred was now gold ranked. Its active effect was minimal, but the base protection, resistance stats, and blocking capabilities were exceptional. The rest of the high-tier equipment comprised more than 20 items, each with a service life of 10,000 days. A few more catacombs needed to be explored. There was clearly a lot of useful material buried in them. The terrifying goblin boss fixed its victims with a gaze of pure hatred and swung its sword. The girls' eyes filled with horror, and all they could manage were screams, and just like that, the friends found themselves back in the city, killed and respawned once more. Janovi had reached his limit. He called Xiao brainless and stupid, blaming her for every defeat the group had suffered. He kicked her from the team and warned that if he saw her at school, he would kill her in-game on sight. He logged out in a state of fury and barely concealed hatred. Chu Yang tried to comfort her friend. She suggested the girls travel to her parents' small town, where there was a community organization that helped newcomers learn how to play the game properly. Qin Xiao was seething. She intended to make her classmate pay for daring to hit her. She shoved her friend aside and told Chu Yang to go to her parents on her own. Kinya logged out and finally woke up in her room furious and miserable. Xiao reached out to a former friend asking for help leveling up, but the guy replied that assistance would come at a price. Qin Xia had no intention of paying some idiot. She tried writing to another former admirer, telling him she had always liked him and that now they could spend time together since her brother would no longer be a factor. But this former admirer wasn't buying it. If Qin Fang had cut his sister off, she was clearly a lost cause. She tried several more people, but word had already spread that she was a complete failure looking to exploit someone. Not a single former friend or classmate was willing to help her. Xiao was in despair and on the verge of tears. At this critical moment, she couldn't count on any man to come through for her. She had only 2.5 years of life energy remaining, utterly at a loss. The name of her brother, Qin Feng, surfaced in her mind. He would never abandon me, she decided. He was the only person who had ever genuinely treated Xiao well. She made up her mind to try to reconnect with him and ask for his help. Pulling herself together, she walked to her brother's house. She stood at the door, composing herself, head bowed, projecting vulnerability, ready to offer a few apologies, and some warm words in the expectation that Qin Feng would forgive her. Qin Xia was certain this would work, because in her mind she hadn't actually done anything wrong to him. She knocked, she would bow her head, pretend to be fragile, and wait for her brother to perfect her skills. Once she was strong enough, she planned to cast him aside forever. Satisfied with her strategy, she set it in motion. She knocked and knocked, calling out that she had returned, that she was sorry, and many other things, but the door remained firmly closed. Eventually, Qin Xia couldn't take it anymore, and kicked the door down, ready to confront the insolent brother who wouldn't let her in. She burst inside, and the room was completely empty. No furniture, no bed, no belongings, nothing. Chino tried calling her brother, but the phone either went unanswered or was listed as unavailable. Qin Xiao finally understood. Her brother had left, just as she had always dreamed he would, leaving her completely alone with everything she'd wished for. In the catacombs of the Spirit of Hatred, the battle was still underway. Qin Feng destroyed another monster. He finally reached the last hall. Along the way, he had eliminated more than 200 mobs, and his level was closing in on 12. He summoned his zombie assistant in the hope that the gold-ranked boss was asleep inside the sealed coffin. The summoned creature opened the lid. At first, nothing could be seen or heard. But then an ear-splitting growl erupted from inside, so powerful it startled even the summoned creature. Inside was the gold-ranked boss, Deadly Miasma. Nobody who knew what that meant was eager to face it. It had no physical form, which rendered it completely immune to physical attacks. In a previous life, players had encountered this boss. Its poison had filled the entire area. Many died, because if the spirit of this boss possessed a person, and there was no companion with invulnerability skills nearby, death was immediate. Qin Feng knew he had to deal with the boss before the poison seeped into him. He activated Shadow Blade. He understood that the key was reaching the boss's core, a worm-like entity covered in many eyes. Wenfeng dispatched the gold boss with relative ease, even though the monster's raw power exceeded its gold classification. Deadly Miasma was categorized as gold tier, so it dropped gold loot, and the new Shadow Blade dealt magical damage. Qin Feng activated Greedy Hands, ready to collect his well-earned reward. Getting through those catacombs had not been simple, so the gold loot needed to justify the effort. As a result, the player received a rare artifact, a riding bell. It was genuinely extraordinary. The Golden Bell summoned the ghostly Nightwolf, which could function both as a combat ally and as a means of rapid movement. The Ghost Night Wolf was among the fastest creatures obtainable at this stage of the game. It could also enter stealth mode. Now this enormous beast belonged to Qinfeng and answered to him like a devoted companion. It was transportation teammate and battle partner rolled into one, and it could turn invisible. Acquiring an artifact like this was nothing short of exceptional. The player immediately decided to take his new companion for a ride. The speed and raw power were staggering. With the Night Wolf, leveling up to 15 would be straightforward, and accumulating enough life energy to transfer the wolf to the real world was well within reach. On this creature, the young man could close the distance to Chen Shishi and deal with her before she could create further complications. Qinfeng rode the Night Wolf straight toward the Shanghai Dungeon, a 2-level landfill zone teeming with monsters, and the perfect location to farm experience. It took only minutes to arrive. Qinfeng savored the sensation of speed and power, then dismounted and sent the fearsome beast charging into the monsters. Shadow Slash immediately activated. Monsters of various levels found their time in the game ending today, falling one after another as prey to Qinfeng. Captain Anu engaged a monster and slashed it with her sword. The creature was finally defeated and the team exhaled. A player named Ma Noling, son of one of Shanghai's district leaders, watched Captain Anu with undisguised admiration and applauded her skill. Anu reminded herself it had only been an 8th level boss, even if the group had been struggling with it for quite some time. She couldn't imagine how Shadow had managed to defeat a platinum boss. Manoling believed Shadow had simply chosen his moment and struck from behind. Captain Anu suggested that Manoling, being such a fine marksman, could just as easily bring down a boss like that. Manoling had no actual interest in killing anyone. He had befriended a police officer with a 3rd level anti-stealth skill. With that, exposing Shadow was theoretically possible. He proposed that the team set a trap, uncover Shadow's identity, and then compel him to work for them. If they didn't move soon, Shadow would keep eliminating criminals and the police would be left cleaning up after him. Anu and Wang Min listened to this with wide eyes. It had been a long time since anyone had entertained them quite so thoroughly, because it was difficult to imagine anything more absurd. The police were not cleaning up after Shadow, on the contrary, they were actively trying to help him. That was the only way to maximize any potential partnership. The players simply couldn't fathom how their teammate was capable of saying something so spectacularly wrong. He clearly wasn't operating with a full set of mental faculties. Manoling was furious. He couldn't stand the despicable assassin and his shadow-based tricks, and now his own teammates were openly laughing at him. How dare they? Manoling swore to destroy Shadow, after which everyone would come crawling back to beg for forgiveness. Wang Min was no longer listening to the chatterbox. He asked the captain what they had gotten from the last boss. The yield was a fragment of gold-ranked healer equipment, silver equipment, and a silver skill book. When Shadow came to trade with them, he typically brought gold and platinum items. It was interesting to contemplate how many bosses Shadow had already taken down. Wang Min trusted his captain deeply enough to share something that had been weighing on him. He was troubled by a series of strange details. It was genuinely suspicious that the Dongfeng family had simply vanished from their restaurant gathering without a trace. Perhaps Shadow truly had been responsible. The police knew nothing concrete about this player, but perhaps he really was a serial killer. Anu acknowledged that senior leadership had flagged their interest in this individual, but that the police had no evidence against him. Even so, even if Shadow really had done it, the captain preferred to continue helping him regardless of what her superiors thought. Wang Min couldn't understand why his captain, a sincere and honest officer, was choosing to behave this way and protect what might be a criminal. At that moment, an archer rushed over to report that the players had located the arena, but every single monster inside was already dead. The entire arena was blanketed in monster loot, and no one could tell which team had cleared it. Anu called on her companions to head there and investigate. Inside the arena, an enormous quantity of loot lay scattered across the floor. At minimum, 100 monsters had been slain here. This bore all the hallmarks of Shadow's work, which meant caution was warranted. The boss might still be alive. Manoling couldn't understand why his captain was so certain Shadow was responsible. Anu replied simply that no one else was capable of it. Manoling insisted he could also go invisible and do something similar. He just needed a bit more time. At that precise moment, Shadow appeared in the square on Nightwolf. The sheer scale and presence of it caused Manoling to stumble backward and land flat on the ground. He had never seen Nightwolf before, and the whole sight was genuinely terrifying. Anu was thrilled she loved the wolf and asked where Shadow had found it. Qinfeng explained that thanks to the coordinates from Dark Plum, he had cleared out the catacombs and found a new friend. The girl was delighted. Shadow thanked her. The information had been invaluable. Qinfeng then offered the captain a deal. Everything he had left lying around was theirs for the taking. Anu replied that his prices were always fair, so she was glad to buy from him. Manoling watched his captain chatting warmly with Shadow, and resentment filled him. Once again, Shadow had made him feel entirely irrelevant, but he would show everyone who the real power was here. Qinfeng said his farewells and rode off on Nightwolf to clear new locations. He was currently at level 13, and his nearest pursuers in the rankings had only reached 10. Qinfeng was pleased. He had cleared the Colosseum ruins and obtained a golden skill book in the process. It granted perpetual stealth. As long as the player neither attacked nor moved, invisibility could be maintained indefinitely. This strengthened his concealment substantially. The skill could even be applied in reality, allowing him to log out of the game while remaining completely invisible. Additionally, several poison dart skills were eligible for upgrade. Accuracy had now evolved to allow him to strike only the weak points of enemies in the vast majority of situations. But the most valuable find turned out to be the Thief's Necklace. It provided an additional stealth enhancement, amplified attacks, and reinforced defense. At this stage, the player's stealth effect had reached the 4th level, and now effectively no one could detect him since Qinfeng's Shadow Veil stats were maxed. With all these improvements locked in, the young man rode Nightwolf toward the part of the city where active fighting was taking place. Qinfeng arrived and pulled to a stop. What stood before him was nowhere close to a simple opponent. In the center of the square towered a colossal steel idol. It loomed over the surrounding buildings, and where hands should have been, it wielded chain-suspended axes. Even Qinfeng regarded it with a measured caution. He couldn't understand who in their right mind had summoned something like this. In his previous life, every attempt to defeat this monster had resulted in thousands of casualties. The steel idol was the guardian of a particular refuge, the temple refuge the second largest in all of Shanghai. Of course, the young man intended to fight it. He had planned to do so after dealing with Qin Shishi, but the timeline had apparently shifted. The steel idol stood in the center of the square, swinging its chains and axes with full rotational force, keeping everyone at bay, and the cheerful, hopelessly optimistic players continued to charge in, die, and charge in again. It was a mixture of bravery and poor judgment. Expecting to defeat a boss like this was naive at best. Qinfeng watched the carnage and couldn't quite process what kind of people would keep assaulting something so thoroughly beyond them. It was both absurd and admittedly impressive in its own way. Looking closer, he identified one of the players, Chen Wuming, mounted on a massive tiger. Chen Wuming held the profession of temple guardian. In his previous life, players had fought each other endlessly, but no one had ever brought down Chen Wuming. The man was cunning, and every time defeat seemed certain, he managed to slip away. It was his squad that had ultimately brought down the steel idol in that life. After that, legends were born about the blood god of the West and the Eastern Refuge. Chen Wuing had operated on ruthless contracts. He supplied protection in exchange for half of his client's energy, and most of his squad members were effectively indentured to the most powerful players in the guild. Qinfeng was glad to see him again in this life, and had no intention of letting him escape this time. The steel idol continued to swing its axes through the crowd of players, and that was perfectly fine for Chen Wuming. The players were expendable. Qinfeng activated invisibility and descended directly beside the steel idol. He activated Shadow Blade and Rings of Night. Several of Chen Wuing's closest followers were instantly cut down. They had no idea how, since the idol's axe hadn't touched them. Seeing his men reduced to nothing, Chen Wuing immediately suspected Shadow was nearby. He couldn't understand why Shadow was attacking them. They hadn't done anything to provoke him. At that moment, Qinfeng was already positioned directly behind Wuing and whispered in his ear that he simply didn't like him. He executed a shadow cut. This time, even the tiger took damage. The blooming curse activated and began drawing energy from the bodies of the fallen. Players scattered across the city square, horrified to discover they had been killed in-game. The ordinary warriors were in shock. Their exchange energy had dropped to 0, and Chen Wuing was incandescent with rage. He immediately commanded his surviving players to replenish their energy reserves, then turned his attention back to the steel idol. Qin Shao, among those in the area, was completely confused as to why she was being hunted. The girl realized her energy was nearly exhausted. Qin Fang noticed among Wuing's ranks the face of his stepsister, a deeply unexpected sight. He concluded that she must have ended up in trouble after joining the Templars. In the past, she had been shielded from every conflict thanks to her brother, but now he had no intention of intervening. Since she hadn't subscribed during his fight with the Platinum Tier boss, the Steel Maiden attempted to catch him off guard with a smoke screen, but once the air cleared, King Fang had already evaded using his ghostly blur. Ability, he was well aware that the boss's first phase was manageable. The Steel Maiden's chain arms began to tighten and rotate, her own mechanics seemingly confusing her. King Fang's expression grew focused. He knew her first phase was limited to chainsword swings and directional or area physical strikes. He leaped above her and unleashed a combination of Blessed Liberation and Plague Blade. The Blessed Liberation triggered a throat slash effect, which detonated for massive damage, while the Plague Blade set off a toxin explosion 3 seconds after landing. His assault shaved thousands of health points off the boss in moments. When he followed up with Throat Slash, cutting deeply into her neck, her health bar plummeted to below half. Rage lit up her eyes. King Fang stayed composed. He knew the real threat was her second phase. Once she crossed below half health, the demon sealed inside her would awaken. In that state, all incoming damage would be reflected back at the attacker. There was also an unconfirmed legend that a portal existed inside the demon's stomach. Anyone swallowed supposedly got transported to a location rumored to be the bottom of a volcano. In his previous life, no one had actually triggered this, and King Fang suspected the rumor was confused with mechanics from other games. A group of spectating players watched from a distance, discussing how ruthless Shadow had been. The Knights Sanctuary Guild had summoned the Platinum Boss, only for Shadow to appear, massacre all their members, and then immediately use a single skill to take the boss below half health, forcing it straight into its second phase. While they talked, King Fang, using his invisibility, quietly observed the group. He knew the Steel Maiden had a specific vulnerability in her second phase. The damage reflection effect momentarily dropped whenever she initiated an attack. This meant attacking precisely in that window would let him deal damage without suffering the reflection. The problem was his damage over time skills. Shadow / Throat Cut, Plague Blade, and Poison Dagger would still trigger reflected damage during their tick intervals, and at his current level, that would kill him instantly. Looking at the spectating players on the cliff, King Fang decided to use them as tools. Among the observers was a player named Anuan. When others recognized him, there was a stir of excitement. Anuan's subordinate explained that they had memorized the boss's entire move set during observation. A woman in the group smiled and described what they had seen. After the boss's health dropped below half, she had paused and appeared to be gaining new abilities before entering her second phase. At that same moment, Shadow had vanished. Anuan couldn't believe Shadow had been soloing the boss, his eyes filled with fury. He instructed his subordinate Xiao to activate her Red Eye ability to check whether Shadow was still present. She summoned a small rabbit that crept near the boss without drawing attention, then reported she couldn't locate Shadow and assumed he had left. Anuan concluded that since her level 3 anti-stealth couldn't find him, he had definitely gone, thinking it impossible that anyone could possess level 4 invisibility. Anuan jumped down from the elevated position, which puzzled Xiao. He told her to keep watch and alert him the moment Shadow returned. Then Anuan drew his swords, eyes glowing with confidence and a self-assured grin on his face. Other onlookers thought he was walking toward his death by challenging a platinum boss alone, until one recognized him. He had seen Anuan in the starting town defeat a gold tier boss without taking a single hit. His class was the Soul Warrior, which granted him 100% dodge when rolling, and he was a well-known player called Safety First, reportedly a former top global streamer of Souls-style games with extraordinarily fast reflexes. The Steel Maiden locked onto Anuan and struck with her blade arms. Anuan slid along the ground at the last second to evade. When she grew energy arms and tried to crush him, he rolled away again. Each time she attempted to catch him, he rolled out of her reach, and his subordinates cheered, praising his composure and discipline and resisting the urge to take extra hits. One onlooker noticed repeated slash effects appearing across the boss, and the dark-haired woman in the group explained that rolling triggered the Soul Warrior's passive counterattack mechanic. Every perfect dodge simultaneously dealt damage to the boss. A second observer named Xiao also noted that the perfect dodge was merely the foundation. What truly distinguished Anuan was his offensive timing. His skill combinations turned defense into an unrelenting assault that was both untouchable and lethal. Xiao further revealed that a successful dodge roll caused Anuan's next attack to ignore 50% of the boss's defense. Anuan turned to face the boss and blue energy began emanating from his body. His subordinates recognized the visual cue as a sign his next strike would deal 4-digit damage. His eyes gleamed with excitement. Before the boss could react, he unleashed a devastating strike that split into 3 shadow-like trajectories, swift and fierce, cutting into the boss through precise openings. In a blink, her health dropped below 1/3. His subordinates erupted in applause. But at that exact moment, someone struck Anuan with powerful slashes, dealing over 34,000 damage and killing him instantly. His subordinates panicked. They couldn't understand how he had died when they were certain he had dodged every attack. And even stranger, the blow that killed him didn't seem to decrease the boss's health at all, despite the slash effects they had seen earlier. Not far away stood King Fang. He had been silently observing Anuan's lifespan orbs and mentally thanked him. The Soul Warrior's constant showboating had forced the boss to expend many of her abilities during the fight. King Fang's eyes lit up. He had been attacking steadily throughout, and the stylish spectacle had given him cover to reduce the boss's health to 1/3. The Soul Warrior had dealt decent damage, but his death was ultimately his own doing. Due to his class mechanics, he could not attack while rolling, and when he attacked, he was exposed to reflected damage, a true curse against this particular boss. The Steel Maiden began moving back toward the church sanctuary. King Fang tensed. If she reached it, she would fully recover, making all prior effort pointless. He surveyed Anuan's lingering subordinates and doubted they would fight again after witnessing the Soul Warrior's death. Without someone to provoke the boss's reflection-free attack windows, he had no safe openings. It was time to take matters seriously. King Fang landed in front of her, cutting off her retreat path. The spectating players were stunned. To them, Anuan had just been the distraction. Shadow was the real force. The realization that all the cuts on the boss had been Shadow's doing was chilling. Xiao couldn't believe it. Her level 3 anti-stealth had failed to detect him, which meant Shadow's invisibility had to be level 4 or higher. Meanwhile, one of the onlookers spotted Anuen's loot still on the ground and began scheming to grab it. King Fang activated his black light shield, summoning a golden barrier with 10 protective layers, each capable of absorbing 1 instance of damage. The boss focused on him and her arms reverted to blade form. She attacked, and King Fang seized the moment using instant shadow slash for rapid consecutive strikes. He watched the boss carefully afterward. 3 of the 9 hits from the skill had landed during her brief post-attack reflection phase, and only his blacklight shield had saved his life. 7 layers remained. The boss then concentrated energy in her abdomen, leaped, and began releasing purple flames. King Fang stepped back. All 7 remaining layers of his shield were instantly destroyed, despite an evasion rate above 80%. The flamethrower's rapid frequency had overwhelmed it. Half a second slower, and he would have been dead. During this interval, one of the spectators tried to loot Anuan's dropped items. King Fang noticed and hurled a poison dart into his forehead, killing him outright. He made his intentions clear. No one was taking that loot. The system informed King Fang that he had acquired 612 days of tradable lifespan and 67 years of non-tradable lifespan from Safety First. Additionally, Blossom Curse had absorbed 355 days of tradable lifespan and 20 years of non-tradable lifespan from another player, Clean Hands and Feet. King Fang was surprised. Safety First had amassed an unusually large reserve of lifespan, almost certainly from never having died. He found this interesting enough to decide against using Blossom Curse on him. The boss let out a roar, but King Fang stayed calm and methodical. He knew the only viable strategy left was to use the Blacklight Shield and standard Shadow Slash to slowly whittle down her remaining health while exploiting attack windows. Each time she swung, he moved out of her range, letting her hands slam into the ground instead. The efficiency was low, but the approach was safe. Watching from the side, Zhao studied Shadow's performance with growing awe. She hadn't understood how he had secured the earlier kills, but now, witnessing him in real combat, she was entirely convinced of his power. King Fang's eyes hardened with resolve. He moved at speed, carving through the boss as if she were nothing, cutting her body apart. The system confirmed he had defeated the Steel Maiden, earning 48,000 experience points, 120 evolution points, and the Church Sanctuary key. The remaining spectators were speechless. Shadow had genuinely soloed a platinum-tier boss, and to them it was exactly why he sat atop the global leaderboard. King Fang collected the loot using Greedy Hand. He obtained a piece of Emerald-tier Assassin leather armor, the Black Flames Gift Piercing Leather Armor. It provided 95 points of physical defense, 120 points to all elemental resistances, 77 points of damage reduction, and 77 points of constitution. Its special effect, Black Flame's Gift, applied a stacking Black Flame status upon dealing or receiving damage up to 5 stacks, each reducing the target's defense and elemental resistance by 7%, though this weakening effect was less potent against Emerald tier or higher bosses. King Fang was pleased. A single piece of Emerald tier armor outperformed full sets others were using, and the debuff effect made it even more valuable than what the Soul Purifier had dropped earlier. He also obtained Assassin's Instinct, an Emerald tier skill allowing partial perception of invisible units and granting 2 anti-invisibility levels. He immediately chose to evolve it, spending 33 evolution points and leaving himself with 97. The skill evolved through Emerald, Diamond, and Epic tiers, ultimately reaching Legendary. The anti-invisibility bonus climbed from 2 points to 5, and the legendary effect added enhanced detection of weak points, granting a 50% modifier to critical hit damage. Combined with his graceful deliverance passive, his critical hit damage modifier reached a total of 350%, meaning he could strike enemy weak points blindfolded. With 97 evolution points remaining, King Fang next evolved Ghostly Blur to Legendary using 80 points, leaving him with 17. The skill upgraded from Epic to Legendary, increasing passive evasion from 75% to 85% and granting complete damage immunity each time an evasion activated. At that moment, Captain Anu and her group arrived. She greeted King Fang warmly and asked about the loot, expressing surprise after checking the leaderboard and realizing he had reached level 13 in a single night. Wang Mang lamented that they had grinded all night and hadn't even reached the midpoint of level 11, calling his pace completely surreal. Captain Anu swatted Wang Mang on the head and told him to stop exaggerating, noting that men tended to level up faster. King Fang, puzzled but unbothered, told her he had obtained loot worth 45,000 days of lifespan and offered to sell it as a single package. She agreed and transferred the amount. Then he mentioned he had something else of interest and asked if she knew about hideouts. Captain Anu smiled and explained they had already heard of them. In the ruins of Zhonghai City, there were no safe zones, but player guilds could occupy hideouts as operational bases, storing supplies inside and activating magical defensive barriers to repel invaders. During crises, King Fang knew she had probably only heard about the small hideout dropped by a gold boss. She confirmed this and added that the officials in Magic City had already taken control of a medium-sized hideout, which is how they first learned of their existence. King Fang then produced a golden key. Now that she understood the value of hideouts, he revealed it was the church sanctuary hideout key, dropped by the boss he had just killed, a hideout spanning over 800 square meters. He invited her to discuss pricing, after which he would consider whether to sell. Captain Anu and Wang Mang were floored. A hideout that size had formidable defenses and sufficient internal space for every member of Zhonghai City's official forces to have a private room. She extended her hand and asked his price. King Fang said he would prefer to hear their offer first. He knew this hideout had sold for 2,000 years of lifespan in his previous life, enough, combined with what he already had, to extract all his gear, skills, and levels into the real world. Captain Anu, visibly nervous, accepted his terms and promised to report immediately to her superiors. She then brought up another matter and asked for his help. 7 gold-tier bosses had appeared simultaneously in Dark Moon Town, killing many players as payment. She offered 10 years of lifespan for Shadow's intervention. King Fang observed that 7 gold bosses shouldn't normally be a crisis, even grouped together. The official forces should be able to handle them eventually. His conclusion was that there had to be something specifically problematic about them. Anu gave a thumbs-up gesture, impressed by his deduction. She confirmed his instinct. They had isolated and killed one of the 7 bosses only for it to immediately resurrect, at which point all 7 bosses experienced a dramatic stat surge and annihilated her entire team in an instant. King Fang's eyes widened. He recalled the existence of group-type bosses capable of resurrection, and suspected these might be puppets created by the Cursed Slate, one of the ancient god slates. If that was the case, it was something he couldn't afford to let go. He agreed to head there immediately and asked her to send coordinates. She wished him luck. Internally, King Fang appreciated Anu's generosity. The loot from 7 gold bosses could fetch 40 to 50 years of lifespan on its own, and she had offered an additional 10 years as reward. Mounted on his Ghost Knight Wolf, King Fang moved through the ruins. He passed a statue and noticed a group of women beating a girl not far away. The girl was Zhao Yu. A woman struck her hard across the face, accusing her of trying to seduce the guild leader despite having only just joined. Zhao Yu, face covered in bruises, wept and begged them to stop, saying it hurt and she feared she might die. The women swore they would kill her, hurling insults and continuing to beat her. King Fang entered the statue without intervening. He remembered that beneath the enormous statue at the center of Zhonghai City's ruins lay a hidden chamber that allowed one to teleport back to the starting town. Information very few players knew. A magic circle appeared before him. The system made clear that teleportation was not free. The first trip cost 500 days of lifespan. The second 1,000, the third 2,000, doubling each time. The starting town was set to evolve over time into a higher-level zone, with minor monsters transforming into bosses and hidden treasures appearing, such as the ancient god slate he now sought. The system asked whether he wished to teleport to the abandoned land of the gods, Dark Moon Town. He recalled that Dark Moon Town was a location that appeared in later stages of the game, one he had never personally heard of in his previous life. Without hesitation, he chose to teleport. 500 days of lifespan were consumed, and he arrived in Dark Moon Town. The town was unexpectedly lively, populated mostly by elderly players chatting among themselves. Nearby, a group of players had helped an elderly woman to her feet after leveling her to level 3. They calmly reminded her that, as agreed, they had split the tradable lifespan dropped by monsters during their party, and now they needed that portion returned. The old woman erupted in anger, accused them of shamelessness, and called the arrangement a scam, claiming she knew nothing about any agreement. The players patiently explained that partying with them was what had allowed her to share in the lifespan drops in the first place. The old woman screamed for help, calling out that members of the Manga River Guild were harassing her. At that moment, someone grabbed her from behind and threw her to the ground, startling both her and the players. It was King Fang. He seized her by the neck and without a moment's hesitation killed her. Lifespan orbs appeared. He told the players their payment was on the ground. The players celebrated and asked who the expert was who had helped them. King Fang said he was simply doing a small favor and walked away. The players gathered 72 days of lifespan and called their thanks after him. King Fang reflected on the Manga River Guild. He recalled it had originated in Dark Moon Town, founded with a charitable mission of helping elderly players survive in the abandoned land of the gods for free. It would eventually gain official recognition and massive support, becoming the largest guild in Hakia by sheer numbers. In King Fang's view, this chaotic apocalyptic world needed precisely these kinds of people. That night, somewhere in the forest, 2 mages and a swordsman were fighting a mud monster. The young woman asked her friend, whom she called Mother, to use Lightning Strike. Mother complied, and a thunderbolt struck the monster. The swordsman capitalized on the opening and split it in two. Its body dissolved into lifespan orbs. The girl praised the group, and Mother noted that following other players' tutorials made even small monsters manageable. As they walked through the forest, the boy named Yan asked a girl named Yan if her friend Zhao had truly joined the Knights Sanctuary Guild, since he had heard membership fees were substantial. Yan confirmed it, adding that she had personally invited Zhao to join the Manga River Guild with them, explaining it was a charitable guild where inexperienced players helped one another with experienced guidance, but Zhao had declined. Another player remembered that Zhao had already been leveled up to level 10 by people from the Knights Sanctuary, and noted that their membership contract bound members for 3 years as functional slaves. The boy acknowledged that even if the guild had carried her to level 10, they were only treating her as a tool. He advised that those without strong skills were best off silently farming small monsters, slowly building lifespan and experience, retreating when bosses appeared. Yan sighed. Xiao believed herself special because of her hidden class, making her genuinely stronger than them. Suddenly, an invisible rain of arrows descended. The arrows pierced through one player's body, taking 1200 HP and killing him. Yan screamed. The man was her father. Her mother wept. The archer who had fired laughed, pleased at the instant kill. The masked attackers dismissed Manga River Guild as trash, insisting no skilled player would waste time helping elderly players. They approached Yan and her mother and demanded all their lifespan within 3 seconds. Yan stood firm, telling her mother not to comply and to ask for help through the guild channel while she held off the attackers. The ambushers ordered their men to kill the older woman and keep the younger one alive. But before they could act, a wolf appeared and bit into them. Yan was confused. Before the archer could take another breath, someone moved at blinding speed and decapitated him. It was King Fang. His wolf continued tearing into the archer's subordinates. King Fang observed the severed head in silence. The dead archer and his men respawned back in town, furious and confused. Their lifespan had been completely drained, and they had dropped a massive amount on death. Understanding they would die if they didn't farm lifespan quickly, they ran toward the forest. A strange energy materialized around them, and an energy sword descended, immobilizing them. Two approaching figures identified themselves as official bounty hunters, announcing they were there to make an arrest, and demanded the criminals' real-world information, warning that resistance would be met with lethal force. Back in the forest, flowers bloomed from the archer's corpse. Yan thanked King Fang with relief, knowing she and her mother would have been finished without his intervention. He glanced at Yan quietly. He hadn't expected Chu Yan to be such a person. Kind-hearted, brave, and entirely different from Qin Zhaoyu. He didn't know how the two had become best friends, but fortunately they had gone different ways. King Fang disappeared without a trace, leaving Yan and her mother confused. Yan picked up the lifespan orb and wondered aloud if it was her father's. Her mother asked where Shadow had gone. Yan said she didn't know, only that he was the world's #1. Elsewhere in the forest, another group of players waited. One recalled that Captain Anu had said Shadow would arrive in a few minutes, but nearly half an hour had already passed. One doubted Shadow could handle bosses that could resurrect infinitely, remarking it was surprising he had accepted the mission. Invisibly, King Fang passed between them and moved ahead. He understood that the ancient god slate added 1 positive and 1 negative affix to equipment, and that lucky affixes could even alter a player's class traits. He recalled that the 7th-ranked player in the world had once used 7 of these slates to summon an ancient god's ghost and destroy a legendary boss. King Fang located the group-type bosses, several monsters with malice in their eyes standing in formation. He knew this type of boss could sometimes be an invisible high-stealth summoner hiding nearby, in which case the visible boss would simply respawn endlessly. He also knew that based on available information, killing even 1 triggered resurrection and a stackable berserk buff across all members. But what if all were killed simultaneously? He equipped the follower's pendant and summoned a devout follower to test. It charged the bosses and attacked, dealing over 1400 HP damage. One boss's eyes flared with rage, and it turned and destroyed the devout follower. The remaining bosses ignored it entirely. King Fang noted that all of them were level 10 with no damage reflection. Their stats were roughly double those of ordinary gold bosses. He used Shadow Ring Blade, spreading strange red energy through the area, then followed up with poison darts, embedding them in the bosses' throats. Their corpses began dissolving. King Fang was puzzled when no loot appeared. Instead, the bosses began to merge into a single, far more powerful entity, a giant. Before King Fang could settle, it charged at him. He noticed the symbols covering its enormous body and remained alert. He recognized them as ancient god script. By deciphering each word, disaster, sky, ancient, tuo, wu, god, sea, and rearranging them, he translated the true name of the boss, Uthos, the Calamity Ancient God. He suspected the solution involved attacking symbols in a specific order. After all, he had once invested enormous resources in studying ancient god script in order to clear ancient god ruins. He slipped forward and struck the symbol on its leg, then the one on its arm, then the one on its chest. Poison erupted from the boss's body. It let out an agonized roar as its body began to collapse and fall into the water. From the water emerged coffins, and the boss began floating and morphing. Several monsters burst out of its body, each corresponding to an embossed inscription on a coffin. King Fang understood the next phase. He needed to kill each monster near its matching coffin. He could already see the ancient god slate. This appeared to be the final phase. The monsters charged him. He stood firm, eyes resolute. Outside the ruins, crows circled the area where King Fang fought. Nearby players noticed the disturbance and moved to investigate. When they arrived, the battlefield was empty. No trace of King Fang, no boss, only cracked ground. Captain Anu contacted them and instructed them to retreat, stating Shadow had already dealt with the boss. The players were stunned. They had only minutes ago doubted Shadow could handle 7 respawning bosses. Now, barely 10 minutes later, all traces of the battle had disappeared without any of them noticing his arrival or departure. The coffins were empty, the chains broken. They finally understood their captain's decisions. King Fang, meanwhile, walked under moonlight with the ancient god slate in hand. This haul had been quite good. His eyes lit up. He had reached level 14. Between the 7 bosses in greedy hand, he had collected 294 evolution points. Most importantly, he had secured the ancient god slate. Given the mechanics required to solve it, the authorities wouldn't crack it in under a month, and the losses from trying through conventional means would be catastrophic. He spent 210 evolution points, leaving 115 remaining. His Shadow Flash / evolved from epic to legendary with significant improvements. Blink range extended to 40 meters. Stealth duration increased to 15 seconds, and cooldown reduced to 8.8 seconds. The skill now delivered 9 slashes across a 6-meter area, each hit adding 700 attack power. The most transformative change was a new effect. Each slash granted a shield equal to 100% of his maximum HP, stackable up to 9 times, lasting 60 seconds. King Fang was satisfied. From this point forward, landing all 9 slashes would give him 10 times his effective HP, drastically expanding his margin for error. He activated invisibility and walked onward, calculating that at his current leveling pace he would reach level 15 in roughly 5 more hours, at which point it would be time to move toward Magic City. Several hours later, King Fang returned past the ruins where the women had still been beating Zhao Yu. They were finally stopping, exhausted and sore. The white-haired woman stretched her aching back, and her companion nursed a swollen hand. They spat on Zhao Yu, declared it a sufficient lesson, and left. Zhao Yu sat up slowly, body covered in bruises and wounds, crying. In her mind, she blamed King Fang. She had told him to cut ties, and he had actually done so, not understanding that when a girl says something, she often means the opposite. Still, she reassured herself that the Knight's Sanctuary contract would secure her survival for 3 years. Though she surrendered 50% of her lifespan, she would still have enough to grow stronger faster than Chu Yan and the others. When she did, she vowed none of them, not those women, not King Fang, would escape her retribution. She cast Holy Healing to restore her health. To her shock and confusion, the healing instead landed on the invisible King Fang nearby. Zhao Yu fell to her knees, convinced she had botched the cast again, completely baffled as to where her healing had gone. In the Magic City ruins, players battled a rock boss. Hiding nearby and watching were 3 players, including Kyung Shishi. She mocked the 18-player team for struggling against a single gold boss. Her companion nudged her to be grateful. They were doing the hard work for their benefit. The boss's health fell below half, and the team's mage rallied everyone for a final push. At that moment, a spear pierced the mage's chest, killing him instantly. The attacker was one of Kyung Shishi's subordinates. With a smile, she thanked the players for their sacrifice. Realizing they faced the Spade Gang, a band of thieves comprised of mysterious women from Daxia and foreigners who preyed on their own people, the remaining players panicked and launched a counterattack. The leader ordered his group to press forward, arguing numbers were on their side. Kyung Shishi vowed to massacre them all. Her subordinate with the double hammers used thunderous tremor, creating a small earthquake that trapped the players in the ground. She drew her daggers and killed them in an instant, mocking the helplessness of Daxia players. Afterward, her companion warned that since their true identities had not yet been exposed, they should leave Daxia soon and relocate to North America. Kyung Shishi agreed and declared they would form a dedicated guild to hunt Daxia players. She decided to name the guild Alice. She announced it was time to disconnect and hold a founding celebration. Meanwhile, Captain Anu waved at King Fang and invited him to discuss the hideout price, informing him they had arrived. He asked how much. She admitted that 1,500 was low, so she had fiercely argued and secured approval for 2,000. King Fang agreed to 2,000 at the statue in the center of the ruins. He noted that Anu was clever. Even so, she had still tried an initial low offer. Later, King Feng arrived at the statue to find Captain Anu and a military escort. She blushed and explained that carrying so much lifespan made the High Command nervous, so they had arranged the escort. King Feng registered the soldiers as non-threats. They knew only 1 or 2 moves and were unaware of his true strength. He handed over the key, and the system confirmed the transaction. He had exchanged the church sanctuary hideout key for 2,000 years of tradable lifespan. He said goodbye to Captain Anu, and she waved him off. The escorting knights whispered among themselves, puzzled by the 2,000-year price for a simple key, until Anu clarified that this was a hideout capable of housing hundreds or even thousands of people, and only someone like Shadow would be generous enough to part with it. With the lifespan transfer perfectly timed, King Feng immediately reinvested. He spent 71.2 years to reach level 15, then purchased a series of new skills. He acquired Blessed Liberation at Mythic level 1 for 161.7 years, Assassin's Instinct at Legendary for 71.12 years, and 3 epic skills, Shadow Ring, Blade, Silent Concealment, and Darkest Hour for 36.35, 23.71, and 34.65 years respectively. Finally, he spent 113.89 years on the item Mount Bell, excluding equipment. Everything, his skills and level, had been fully synchronized into the real world. His real-world strength now nearly matched his in-game power. The system alerted him that his hunger level had reached 90%. Having not eaten in a long time, he disconnected to address that first King Feng disconnected and woke up inside a cage at the Hoi Lun Hotel. The men guarding him noticed he was awake and drew their weapons, demanding his lifespan. One gloated that the apocalypse was great because he could kill anyone he wanted. King Feng looked at them steadily. One demanded he hurry, another begged for permission to tear him apart. A man with a bat concluded King Feng was paralyzed with fear and decided to kill him. Before they could act, a strange energy swept through the air. King Feng used Shadow Ring Blade and the entire hotel collapsed into pieces. He picked up a pack of instant noodles, aware that the more power he drew into the real world, the more his body required. Ordinary food was no longer adequate. As he ate, he reflected on what came next. Once he dealt with Kyong Shishi and her Alice Guild, he would need to find the Divine Gifted Book. Mounted on his wolf, he set off toward Magic City, planning to find something better to eat along the way. Back in Magic City, Kyong Shishi was throwing a lavish party. She praised her men enthusiastically, hugging her associates while reflecting that the sensation of fighting and then entering the game was incredible. Her subordinate informed her that Shadow had sent a message claiming King Feng was dead and inviting her to meet in Magic City in real life to deliver the head and collect final payment. Kyong Shishi found a real-life meeting too risky and asked him to simply send a photo instead. Her subordinate explained Shadow didn't use a phone for fear of being tracked by authorities. Amused that Shadow also had a hostile relationship with the government, Kyong Shishi decided to stage a small test to gauge which side Shadow was really on. She would first meet him in-game and send him coordinates. She logged into the ruins and called out to Skywalker affectionately, asking for a favor involving a live target. King Feng was seated meditating, using silent concealment, a skill that kept him permanently stealthed while completely motionless. He noticed her invitation and decided to see what tricks she was playing. The coordinates pointed to Spectre Academy not far from him. He logged into the game. When he arrived at Spectre Academy, government agents confronted Kyong Shishi. They announced they had located the Spade Gang and identified her as Spade A, ordering her to surrender. She smiled and told their leader Tian Xingjian to inform Daxia's forces that they were no longer the Spade Gang. They were now the Alice Guild, specializing in killing Daxia's men. Provoked, Tian Xingjian vowed she would face justice. From the shadows, King Feng watched. He recognized Tian Xingjian as Chu Handan, a well-known informant who wouldn't fall until the 7th year in his previous life. He found it interesting that Kyong Shishi and Chu Handan were conspiring this early. He understood this was a staged performance to test him. If he helped Kyong Shishi, he would become an enemy of the authorities. If he didn't, she likely wouldn't agree to a real-world meeting. King Feng leaped from above. He used Shadow Ring Blade, surrounding Tian Xingjian and his men in a red aura that drained their HP. All were killed. Kyong Shishi and the others watched in stunned silence. As the corpses dissolved into lifespan, King Feng materialized and introduced himself as Shadow. Kyong Shishi's eyes widened. She blushed with excitement, openly declaring her adoration for a powerful man. Then she began to cry dramatically, lamenting that Shadow was a Daxia man, and cursing the nation for having someone so worthy. Her subordinates rushed to greet him, and King Feng promptly killed the two men in an instant. He explained with a straight face that while he hadn't understood what they said, he assumed it was an insult. Kyong Shishi, shocked, clarified they had merely been greeting him. King Feng played dumb and suggested that in this territory, speaking in the Daxia language would avoid future misunderstandings. He then told her to put some clothes on before they proceeded with business. She covered up and asked about King Feng's head. King Feng stated he had it but couldn't bring it into the game. He could show her in the real world if she was willing. She opened her system window and decided to trust him, having already witnessed his strength. The system confirmed that Shadow had received 1,500 days of tradable lifespan. As King Fang prepared to leave, she asked him to wait and proposed a long-term collaboration, his skills plus her financial resources. She mentioned a new assassination target and invited him to visit in real life that night, promising the reward would be several times more generous and that she would fulfill any need he had. She told him to meet her at Magic City's port. King Fang grew thoughtful, wondering whether her base at the port might be a yacht. Back in the ruins, Tian Xingjian and his men respawned. Furious, Chu Houndan cursed Shadow, but privately registered the result as a success. Kyong Shishi had formed an alliance with Shadow. He ordered Linking Yu to guide everyone to collect their lifespan, predicting action soon. Linking Yu, white-haired, nodded. She considered the possibility that Shadow had genuinely allied with the Spade Gang. If so, he would need to be eliminated, even at the cost of her own life. She looked at her hand in contemplation. She knew the gap between herself and Shadow was vast. She hadn't even glimpsed his silhouette before everything was already over. Late that night, a hooded figure arrived at Kyong Shishi's yacht. He introduced himself as Shadow and said he was looking for Spade A. Her guards recognized him and welcomed him aboard, saying they had been expecting him and were ready to set sail. The yacht moved out to sea, far from the cities. Kyong Shishi appeared with a glass of wine dressed in an elegant red gown. She complimented the mysterious air. Shadow maintained even in real life and offered him a drink. Shadow got straight to the point and asked who the assassination target was. She approached with a mischievous smile, suggesting that with such a beautiful night and pleasant company, they should leave business for later and simply enjoy the evening together. Shadow accepted the wine without hesitation and took a sip. Not long after, Shadow sat down on a sofa. Kyong Shishi settled beside him, took his arm and smiled, informing him that the drink contained her special secret recipe. Anyone who drank it would obediently follow her commands. She began to grow aroused, thinking that even someone like Shadow was, in the end, just a man, but the reaction she observed was more powerful than she had expected. She sat across from him drooling, announcing she intended to lift his hood at the peak moment to see his face, though for now she wanted to maintain the mystery. She began enjoying herself, marveling at him. A burning heat overwhelmed her as she reached climax, and at that moment green flames erupted from Shadow's body, burning her. She recoiled in shock. Someone reached out and grabbed the protective crystal pendant from around her neck. It was a gold-tier universal accessory whose unique effect granted a damage immunity shield every 300 seconds, and it had just saved her life. Standing before her with a suffocating aura and glowing eyes was King Fang. Kyong Shishi was horrified. She couldn't understand why he was here. Shadow had reportedly killed him. King Fang explained plainly he was Shadow. The hooded figure on the sofa was a devout follower he had summoned to pose as him, and from the follower's gleeful expression it had thoroughly enjoyed its time with Kyong Shishi. The formerly arrogant Kyong Shishi knelt before King Fang, slamming her forehead against the floor and begging for her life. She offered all her lifespan and volunteered to be his slave. King Fang asked about the 5 foreigners who had been with her. Tearfully trying to ingratiate herself, she began to bark like a dog, asking if he'd spare her in exchange for the information. Before she could finish the sentence, King Fang broke her neck. While she writhed in pain, he grabbed her phone. He noted the 5 foreigners weren't on the yacht. He had hoped to capture them all at once. He obtained 659 years of tradable lifespan from her. He decided his first move would be to use Kyong Shishi's phone to contact the authorities. Police boats raced toward the yacht. A large-scale homicide had been reported. One victim was identified as the daughter of the president of the Qian group. The informant indicated the skills used by the killer closely matched those of the game player, Shadow. An investigation team was dispatched immediately. On one of the boats was Tian Xingjian, seething. He vowed to use his skills on the corpses to locate Shadow and authorize a full-force attack. Once aboard, investigators examined Kyong Shishi's body. The preliminary autopsy indicated a fractured cervical spine, unidentified DNA in her mouth, and burn marks. Tian Xingjian placed his hands on the body and activated last words of the deceased, a skill that revealed the killer's location for 5 minutes. He declared his intent to bring justice. Then his eyes widened. He drew his pistol, warning his men to be ready. Shadow was right there. He ordered an all-out attack toward a specific direction. Before he could turn around, a poison dart buried itself in his head. He collapsed next to Kyong Shishi's body. Linking Yu kept her composure. She summoned a group shield and returned fire, accusing Shadow of killing an investigator and asking if he intended to make an enemy of the authorities. King Fang asked them not to panic. He explained that his reason for killing Chu Houndan was that the man was a traitor who had leaked official information to Kyong Shishi in exchange for personal benefit. He directed them to Chu Houndan's phone for evidence. one officer checked the phone and found communication records between Chu Haodan and Kyung Shishi. It was then revealed that Kyung Shishi was known in-game as Black Ace. Lin Qingyu grabbed the phone herself, but the officer hesitated, trying to warn her. When she opened the photo gallery, she found a collection of private photographs of Chu Haodan and Kyung Shishi together. She blushed deeply at the intimacy on display. Lin Qingyu then fully understood. Shadow had known everything from the start. His performance in the game appearing to ally with Kyung Shishi had been a ruse to earn her trust, locate her in the real world, and eliminate her. By then informing the authorities and setting a trap for Chu Haodan, Shadow had solved two major problems in one operation. She understood that if Shadow were hostile to the authorities, the consequences would be catastrophic. She also remembered that moments ago she had fired on him. Even though he probably didn't care, she worried it could create friction between him and the officials. With a determined expression, she thanked him for his help and apologized for having shot him. Without hesitation, she then shot herself in her own leg. The officers panicked, but she told them not to worry. She was simply returning the favor and asked Shadow to please continue cooperating with the authorities. Invisible King Fang observed the scene. He recognized late-night drizzle Lin Qingyu's in-game alias. She had shot herself to ensure she didn't become his enemy. It was exactly the behavior one would expect from the person who would become Magic City's leading official figure in the future. Back in the game, near the ruins, monsters appeared and a player named Xiao Yu attempted to heal her shield-bearing teammate and accidentally healed one of the monsters instead. The monster bit the player, killing both him and eventually herself. When they respawned, Xiao Yu's partner raged at her. He revealed that they had been killed by the platinum boss Headless Assassin Shu, a boss she had accidentally provoked with her misdirected heal. The guild leader assigned Xiao Yu to her new permanent role, gathering information about hideouts. He offered 3 years of lifespan for finding a gold tier hideout and 10 years for a platinum tier one. He reflected privately that they had believed a hidden class player was a gold mine, but her constant deaths had made her a liability. He settled on giving her 1 year of lifespan per day. A system window confirmed she had received 2 days of tradable lifespan, leaving her with 2 days, 13 hours, and 32 minutes total. She thanked him sincerely. The other women in the guild seethed, convinced she had planned this all along to see the guild leader daily. They vowed to try the same approach. Then lifespan orbs began rising from a nearby area, and someone noticed the boss was named Shu. The guild leader and his men exchanged bewildered looks. Moments later, the boss's corpse appeared, and then King Fang materialized, fixing the guild leader with an unblinking stare. The guild leader went pale. In a burst of fury, he punched one of his own men in the head. Immediately, a strange distortion surrounded Xiao Yu. The guild leader kicked her away, sending her flying. As she floated in the air screaming for help, 3 headless bosses appeared around her. King Fang focused on her, and the spectating Anwen and others also noticed the bosses multiplying. There were 4, then 5. They realized Shadow had already destroyed 1 and that there were many clones. Tears streaming, Xiao Yu spotted Shadow and reached for him, crying out for Brother Shadow to save her. Hearing the word brother from the person who had betrayed him, King Fang's eyes blazed with fury. He used his new Shadow Dash before the bosses could attack, cutting them all apart, and cut Xiao Yu apart as well. She was shocked, unable to understand why Shadow had killed her. The system confirmed King Fang had killed the headless assassin Shu and Zhu, earning 48,000 experience points, 20 evolution points, and 1,520 days of tradable lifespan. He turned his back on Xiao Yu and coldly said she was simply unlucky. Using greedy hand, he collected the loot. Beyond the 1,520 days from the boss itself, there was a cluster of light orbs, non-tradable lifespan, the boss had absorbed from other players but not yet processed. Captain Anu and Wang Meng arrived shortly after. Smiling, Anu offered to buy any items he didn't need. King Fang noted their reliable omnipresence with mild surprise. With a serene expression, he told her they had arrived just in time. He knew another location with good loot, and if the price was right, he would take them there. He told Wang Mang and his companions to follow, but specified that Anu could not come. She bristled at being excluded. Shadow pointed at Wang Mang and clarified women specifically were not allowed. She displayed mock offense, accusing him of discrimination. King Fang gave her a gentle knock on the head, then explained that outside the north gate of the ruins stood a tower of divine authority. Completing its challenge yielded valuable rewards, but the NPCs inside despised women. If any were present, the difficulty would increase tenfold. Little Black laughed and wished Shadow luck, while Anu fumed, vowing to kill those sexist NPCs when she was strong enough, then redirected her companion Shia toward the nearby mountain to farm mobs. Instead, King Fang invited Wang Mang and his subordinates via party invitation. One of Wang Mang's men was paralyzed with nerves at teaming up with the legendary player. Wang Mang scolded him. This was a learning opportunity. By the time they realized they should watch King Fang's movements, he had already put significant distance between them. King Feng scanned his inventory while moving, noticing more than 20 items had dropped. 2 were usable by assassins. The first was the Forest Bone Blade, an Emerald tier assassin weapon with an attack power of 388,125, armor penetration, 39 strength, and 48 agility, requiring level 15. Its unique effect doubled movement speed for 5 seconds upon dealing damage and granted 30% evasion while active. King Feng drew it with satisfaction. Nearly 80% more attack power than his previous Plague Blade, plus armor penetration, strength, and agility bonuses. The second item was the skill Shadow Blade, a platinum tier ability that launched a condensed dark element blade at a single target within 20 meters, dealing dark elemental damage plus 600. Additional dark attack. Upon impact, it dispelled a random buff up to platinum tier, with a 12-second cooldown. King Feng decided to evolve it immediately. Though the single target dark damage was modest, the buff dispel was highly useful. He spent 56 evolution points to evolve Shadow Blade from Platinum to Legendary, leaving 219 remaining. The skill progressed through Platinum, Emerald, Diamond, and Epic tiers before becoming Legendary, increasing its added Dark Elemental attack to 1500, and allowing it to dispel a random buff. Of Legendary level or below, cooldown dropped to 3.78 seconds effective. The Legendary effect, hitting a weak point, refunded 3 seconds of cooldown. King Feng calculated that with constant weak point strikes, the effective cooldown would be only 0.78 seconds. He snapped back to the present and found Wang Mang's group had entirely disappeared. 2 kilometers behind him, Wang Mang's men were gasping and sprawled on the ground. One begged to stop. Wang Mang dragged him by the feet and ordered him to keep moving. Shadow walked slowly but moved faster than they could run. When they finally arrived at the Tower of Divine Authority in a forest clearing, the structure was so tall its top was invisible. King Feng warned his team that the NPC inside was despicable. The better their performance, the more expensive his items would become. He instructed them to use only 1% of their strength and to try to defeat only a gold tier boss. He turned to find Wang Mang, and his men collapsed on the ground from exhaustion. Wang Mang gave a thumb up from the ground and promised the mission wouldn't fail. King Feng advised them to use team chat at all times so the NPC couldn't overhear them. Once they cleared the challenge, they would be able to purchase great items and would not be disappointed. Inside the tower, a hooded floating NPC welcomed them warmly as friends of Blue Star, acknowledging that the Forsaken God's arrival had caused unease. He explained this was the Tower of Divine Authority and offered to trade with them after they completed a challenge. Wang Meng's men were startled to encounter an actual NPC. The swordsman, nicknamed Old Dog after an accident where 2 party members died, making him excessively cautious, bombarded King Feng with questions: boss phase count, skill types, mechanics versus stat focus, instant death attacks, weak points, fight duration. Wang Mang cut him off. King Feng told the NPC they were ready. The swordsman panicked, saying he wasn't. The NPC lowered his head and announced it was time to begin. A portal opened, and from it emerged a level 20 gold tier boss, the Obsidian Skull-Splitting Puppet. The swordsman was horrified. The boss was level 20, while none of them exceeded level 11. King Feng calmly told Wang Mang to go first. Wang Mang charged using Shield Charge, landing a shield blow on the boss's teeth, which sent him flying after being struck back. King Feng caught Wang Mang before he hit the wall. He then directed the archer to use Starshine Shot and the swordsman to use Triple Ground Slash. The archer unleashed a rain of arrows, and the swordsman leaped in for precise, powerful strikes. The boss bled from its mouth, then grew enraged and slammed the ground. Black oil-like energy began forming around the swordsman. King Feng identified the berserk state and had everyone retreat from the black oil. He threw his Shadow Blade at the boss's face for over 4,500 damage, then used a skill to dispel the berserk state. Wang Mang grinned. It was as if the boss had lost its equipment. King Feng waited while the boss charged a fireball. He warned that it would spin clockwise and breathe fire. The black oil on the ground combined with flames could kill in 3 seconds. The team dispersed. Old Dog ran in the wrong direction, and by the time King Feng realized it was too late, he ordered Wang Mang to activate invincibility and block for the group. Wang Mang obeyed. Once the flames subsided, King Feng ordered everyone to hit with their strongest attacks. The combined assault dealt over 25,000 damage, killing the boss instantly. The system congratulated the first Blue Star players to clear the level 20 Obsidian Skull Splitter Golem. Items began materializing. The NPC Vickley congratulated them and revealed that as long as they offered lifespan, they could trade for the Divine Gifted Tome. The swordsman noticed with surprise that Vickley had 6 fingers. Vickley's eyes snapped onto him, and without hesitation, Vickley summoned a thunderbolt that killed the swordsman instantly. Wang Mang panicked. King Feng calmly explained that this NPC operated under a strict taboo. His fingers were not to be mentioned or observed. As long as no one referenced them again, they were safe. Wang Mang privately wondered if King Feng could defeat Vickley. King Fang admitted he could not. Not yet. The system explained that these NPCs were powerful beings from other timelines who had obtained divinity. Bound by eternal rules, they arrived at Blue Star disguised as NPCs to collect player lifespan. Vickley arrogantly told them to choose their divine skill books, pay in lifespan, and leave. Wang Mang and the Archer were floored. The books could create daily necessities in reality: food, water, and drinks. Even if a disaster struck, they would never run short. The Archer found a skill book called the Mechanical Maid and wanted it immediately. King Fang spent 9,000 days of tradable lifespan and received the complete set of 9 Zhonghai City divine books, covering his daily needs. But there was another reason. The Tower of Divine Authority offered an achievement that granted reputation rewards, and he intended to claim it. He informed Vickley he wanted to challenge the highest difficulty alone. Vickley mocked him, saying his performance demonstrated he'd struggle even against the first level, yet he dared dream of the highest. King Fang asked what the highest difficulty actually entailed. Vickley explained 5 difficulty levels, with the 5th being the peak, the same gold-tier Obsidian Skullsplitter Golem, but with attack, health, defense, and cooldown all increased by 500%. Wang Mang and the Archer were speechless at the scale of the increase. Vickley warned King Fang that death during the challenge would result in Vickley claiming his dropped lifespan. King Fang ignored the warning and accepted. Vickley summoned a crackling ball of magic, privately thinking Blue Star players had become arrogant far too quickly. The empowered boss revived. King Fang drew his dagger. He knew Vickley could boost his summons even further in his past life. That limit had been 2,000%, but 500% was a perfect proving ground for his new weapon. He fired a poisonous dart, activating Black Flame's gift and reducing the boss's defense and elemental resistance by 7%. The Forest Bone Blade's special effect triggered, doubling his movement speed for 5 seconds. The boss launched flames, and King Fang vanished before they arrived. While the boss scanned for him, King Fang materialized on its head and drove his dagger into its skull, triggering the Emerald Bone Feather effect. The boss roared in agony. King Fang disappeared again. Movement speed doubled once more. Wang Mang and the Archer watched in shock, initially thinking he had become invisible again before realizing his raw speed was simply beyond what they could track. King Fang activated Blessed Liberation, ensuring his next attack would cause the throat slash effect. Using Shadow Dash, he moved at lightning speed and dealt over 100,000 damage. The attack triggered Black Flame's gift, stacking the defense reduction to 64%. Despite using his strongest skills, the boss's HP had barely dropped, a direct result of the Ancient God Slate's buff, which had extended the stacking limit of Black Flame's gift. Without it, each hit would have dealt at most 18,000 damage. Wang Mang was stunned that a single strike had removed a third of the boss's health. The Archer thought he recognized an instant Shadow Slash, but the version he knew had only 3 strikes. Vickley watched in silence, wondering how someone in the game's earliest stages could wield such power. King Fang activated Throat Slash, which dealt 200% of the last hit's damage per second. Blood poured from the boss. In seconds, it collapsed. The system congratulated him on completing the 5th level difficulty challenge of the Tower of Divine Authority, granting 15 reputation points for all levels cleared and an additional 75 for being the first solo clear in the world. A global announcement echoed throughout the game, informing all players that the player King Fang had cleared the Tower of Divine Authority's maximum difficulty challenge for the first time in history. Players across the server were confused. Most had never encountered a building like this in their city ruins and were just beginning to understand how far ahead Shadow already was. Vickley was livid, cursing his own pricing decisions and regretting he hadn't charged tens of thousands of days per book. Vickley summoned a powerful ball of magic and ordered them out of his sight. Wang Mang and the Archer covered their heads in terror, convinced they were finished, only to find themselves teleported outside the tower. They were alive and unharmed, simply ejected. King Fang reminded them that NPCs couldn't attack players. He said he was logging off to eat and vanished. Wang Mang thanked King Fang and asked to be included next time. The Archer said his goodbyes. King Fang returned to reality in his hideout, using 90 days of tradable lifespan to extract the 9 divine gift books. He then spent 106 years to acquire luxury furniture, daily necessities, cooking ingredients, and a multi-purpose mechanical maid. The dog-eared maid appeared, introduced herself, and offered to handle everything in the house. She immediately began cleaning while planning to prepare a feast. In the real world in Zhonghai City, investigators looked at a 3rd female corpse discovered that week. All 3 victims had their limbs severed and eyes removed, confirming the same killer. The Superior asked for progress. An officer revealed that Shadow's login and logout times aligned exactly with the victims' times of death. The Superior acknowledged this wasn't sufficient proof by itself, but authorized a 24/7 investigation from that angle. A separate officer named Xiaoma observed the discussion quietly. After the Superior moved on, Xiaoma stared at the floor with barely concealed fury. He was using his investigation angle to frame Shadow. His actual motive was a personal obsession with Captain Anu, and he believed that as long as Shadow existed, he would never have her. Back in the game, King Fang stood before the Academy of Evil Spirits, a platinum-tier hideout located in the Magic City ruins. It wasn't particularly hidden, but its protective barrier was said to be the strongest in Hoxia. He spent 2.74 years of tradable lifespan to establish his guild, Shadow. His plan: take the hideout and register it as guild property to create a sanctuary in Magic City, one that could also teleport to and from the Zhanghai Sanctuary, making travel far more convenient. Using invisibility, he entered the hideout and moved silently through it. After reaching the third and deepest underground level, he realized he had not encountered a single monster, indicating someone powerful had already been through. Then he heard shouting. Rounding a corner, he found several men surrounding a woman on a bridge above a river of lava. With eyes full of fear, she asked them to stop. One man told her Madame Dongfang wanted them to take her for her son's company, demanding she provide her real-world location. Otherwise, they would kill her repeatedly until her lifespan ran out. Suicide would be useless, he added, since guild members of Shura Palace were waiting at her respawn point. The orange-haired man suggested a deal. She had killed Madame Dongfang twice, likely costing her at least 30 years of lifespan. If she returned those 30 years and spent some time with all three of them, she could go free. The woman trembled, asking what they intended. They pulled down their pants, causing her to panic. The orange-haired man invited her to start with him. She appeared to be considering it, but then her eyes hardened with resolve and she lunged with a poison dart. Before she could act, the blindfolded man slammed her down with his golden cauldron earthquake skill, crushing her against the ground. With no options, she braced herself, and then that confident smile reappeared. With a powerful skill, she cut the bald man and the orange-haired man in half. The blindfolded man barely had time to be confused before a strip of paper wrapped around his neck. She crushed his head like a watermelon. Flowers bloomed from the corpses. She crushed the orange-haired man's body further, her expression filled with cold hatred, and she swore she would kill Dongfang Ming. King Fang emerged from hiding. He recognized her class instantly: Chainblade. He also noticed the Blade of the Underworld, one of only 2 hidden classes in the Assassin branch. In his previous life, she had ranked among the 10 greatest powers in the world, eventually dying of exhaustion after being besieged by a coalition of powerful families when her identity was exposed. Following a vendetta against the Chu family from Demon City, he had never expected to meet her here. What he didn't understand was the mention of Dongfang Ming. He had personally wiped out the Dongfang family. Something must have been missed. King Fang deactivated his invisibility. Her reaction was immediate aggression. She assumed he was with the men she'd just killed. He denied any connection. She attacked anyway with Underworld Chainblade, her paper ribbon wrapping around him, but he shifted into shadow and vanished, reappearing behind her. She retreated, attempted shadow stealth, and disappeared. King Fang followed with his own stealth. Minutes passed in silence. Undetectable Ghost Spirit was baffled. Her class had built-in level 4 anti-stealth, yet she couldn't find him. She began to wonder if this was Shadow. King Fang deactivated his stealth and reappeared quietly behind her. Upon hearing his voice, she panicked, realizing he could see her even at level 4 stealth. She launched her most powerful skill, Evil Ghost Soul Chase, causing a small pink flame to lock onto King Fang's location. He retreated, but the blade followed regardless. It could track his location and bypass stealth levels entirely. King Fang moved in circles around her. By the time she realized his trap, her own weapon had looped around and immobilized her. He lifted her by the paper ribbon and told her plainly he was Shadow, not one of Dongfang Ming's men, and that if he had wanted her dead, she already would be. With no alternative, she believed him and asked to be set down. King Fang asked if the Dongfang she had mentioned was from Zhanghai City's Dongfang family. Even dangling upside down, she nodded, but clarified that Dongfang Yu had married into the Chu family, so her ties to the Dongfangs had weakened. King Fang understood. A fish had escaped his net. Ghost Spirit's eyes lit up when she realized he had been the one to eliminate the Dongfang family. This meant she and Shadow shared the same enemy. She begged to be let down and proposed cooperation. He released the ribbon and she fell to the ground. He asked her to explain why she wanted to kill Dongfang Yu. Ghost Spirit clenched her teeth and began. Before the game arrived, Dongfang Yu had killed her mother in a drunk driving accident and walked free because the Chu family had arranged for someone else to take the blame. Her father uncovered the evidence, but the next day his body was found in a river, officially ruled a suicide. When she confronted Dongfang Yu, the Chu family's guards beat her nearly to death. In despair and on the verge of ending her own life, the godforsaken game appeared. She entered it and killed Dongfang Yu as her first act. But to kill someone permanently, all their lifespan had to be drained. Dongfang Yu, revived and furious, had hired countless hunters to pursue her, leading to the confrontation King Fang had just witnessed. She finished her story in tears and begged King Fang, "Please help me kill Dongfang Yu." Coldly, without hesitation, he refused. She tried again. Her expression desperate, he stared at her in silence. Then, still arrogant in tone, he told her that revenge could only be settled by her own hands. He wasn't a villain, and he would help to that extent, but how far she could go depended on her own destiny. Ghost Spirit was stunned. How? He told her to join his guild, Shadow, and become one of his people. He would help her complete her revenge. The system prompt for the guild invitation appeared. She saw that his guild had only one member, him. With widened eyes filled with joy, she agreed immediately. The system confirmed the acceptance. King Feng accepted her friend request. He felt satisfied and told her there was one thing she now needed to do, her class advancement. He turned his back and said she would need to figure out what that meant and how to achieve it on her own. When she had done it, she should come find him. If she couldn't even manage that, she should give up on her revenge entirely. He vanished with Shadow stealth. He recognized the unlimited potential of the Blade of the Underworld class and believed that with a small amount of guidance, she could go much further in the future. He arrived in the deepest part of the Academy of Evil Spirits. Before him stood a level 15 Platinum tier boss, the aberrant witch Stana, a woman with multiple spiritual heads. He quickly identified her as the Hideout's guardian and recognized from memory that in the first phase only one of her 4 heads would be active, and she would be immune to physical damage. His only option was elemental attacks, which dealt somewhat less damage. However, he had the Pale Whitebone Blade, which boosted movement speed, and Shadow Blade's cooldown reset on weak point hits. He summoned hundreds of Shadow Blades in quick succession, and fired them into one of her spiritual heads, dealing over 200,000 damage in a stream of attacks, effectively a mobile Gatling, gun of fire strikes. The golden head exploded. King Feng focused immediately, knowing the second phase would activate all 3 remaining heads simultaneously. Her eyes blazed with rage. The heads began firing energy bursts from their eyes while she danced, attacking indiscriminately. King Feng dodged them without much difficulty and then drove Shadow Blades into another head for over 200,000 more damage. She writhed in pain. He landed, turned his back, and threw one final Shadow Blade. The boss exploded. The system confirmed the kill, 50,000 XP, the Evil Spirit Academy's Platinum tier hideout key, and a notification that his class advancement was now available. King Feng activated the advancement. Dark shadows engulfed his body, and his shadow class advanced from Tier 1 to Tier 2. Attribute bonuses tripled, strength from 9 to 27, constitution from 9 to 27, agility from 24 to 72, and spirit from 15 to 45. All combat stats improved substantially. His non-tradable lifespan exceeded 4,510 years, while tradable lifespan was over 566 years. He also gained his 4th class passive, the ability to attack without breaking stealth while still applying the stealth break attack bonus. The advancement had completely changed the rules for him. Attacking no longer broke stealth. This was Tier 2 Shadow, and it rewrote the game. Outside the Academy of Evil Spirits, Ghost Spirit was confronted by the same men she had killed, who had now respawned and returned, bringing their entire guild with them, the Shura Palace. The bald man grinned, noting he wouldn't be careless a second time. The orange-haired man was confident, with the full guild behind him. The bald man attacked with an earth/axe strike, but Ghost Spirit reacted in time and dodged. She attempted shadow stealth, but someone threw a flash grenade that blinded her, forcing her to abort the skill. The bald man kicked her in the head and stepped on her with a smirk. She reached for a small green vial, suicide poison, which would consume half her lifespan and return her to the respawn point, but the orange-haired man grabbed her hand and took the vial from her. He began to lick her face. Then he froze as a system window appeared. The Platinum Tier Sanctuary, the Academy of Evil Spirits, now belonged to the Guild Shadow. The barrier was active, and all personnel outside the guild were classified as intruders. Thunderbolts eliminated the men instantly, their bodies dissolved into lifespan orbs. Ghost Spirit stared in amazement at the Academy. Shadow had cleared the Guardian and obtained the key in minutes while she had been fighting outside. A system message also informed King Feng that he had obtained the Jade Tier Aberrant Witch's Ring, usable by all classes from level 14. It raised all attributes by 22, increased cooldown speed by 30%, expanded area of effect skills by 25%, and boosted area damage by 10%. He also obtained a Platinum Tier skill, Virulent Poison Trap, designed for the Assassin and Hunter class. It placed traps with level 5 stealth. Enemies who triggered it suffered 500 poison damage, a 50% slow for 5 seconds, and continuous poison damage equal to 100% of his attack power. Maximum 3 traps, cooldown of 4.65 seconds, duration of 3,600 seconds. He had 2 usable assassin items. The ring was excellent, particularly since Instant Shadow Slash and Dark Knight Ring Blade were both area of effect skills. The expansion enhancement would be significant. His eyes lit up. He had 363 evolution points, just enough to evolve Backstab enhancement to Legendary. He spent 340, leaving 23. The skill progressed from Epic to Legendary. The passive damage from behind bonus grew from 75 to 100%, and the legendary effect made all his damage count as a backstab attack while in stealth. Combined with Tier 2 Shadow's permanent stealth, this massively boosted both his damage output and survival. Then Little Black contacted him saying she had found ruins with murals similar to those in the beginner's village and asked if he wanted to see them. When he asked where she was, she said she was in the Zhonghai City ruins, near a temple entrance. A teleportation orb had appeared after she and her group cleared the enemies, but it wouldn't activate for any of them. The system said only a fated person could enter. King Fang agreed to come and take a look. He told her to wait and have her lifespan ready, since he would bring the new equipment he had obtained. Teleporting between the two sanctuaries would also be convenient for future travel. Little Black also mentioned that the Zhonghai officials were short on lifespan, so he could sell items directly to the Magic City officials instead. Back in the ruins, she was resting on the ground, leaning against her white llama. Not long after, King Feng appeared behind her and asked where the ruins were. The sudden appearance startled both Little Black and the llama. He admitted he had done it on purpose, but promised to be more careful next time. She described how she had discovered the ruins. While playing with a small sheep she received as a mount, a silver-grade boss had frightened her, and she fell off a cliff, landing in a tree below. That was how she spotted the cave. She told him to descend carefully. King Feng leapt down in a single graceful jump. She praised his movement, mentioning that Wang Mang had tried the same and slipped to his death. Inside the cave, she noted they had already cleared the labyrinth and knew the entire path. King Feng advised her going forward to avoid dying if she could help it, and not to let her non-tradable lifespan reach 0. That was especially dangerous. She confidently agreed, mentioning they had a method to replenish non-tradable lifespan. They lured monsters that had absorbed non-tradable lifespan to isolated locations, killed them, saved all non-tradable orbs that dropped, and stored them for later use. King Feng was genuinely impressed and asked if that idea came from Anu. Little Black was stunned he guessed correctly. He recalled that in his past life, Anu had been the originator of this method. It eventually became universally adopted. They reached the teleportation orb. Little Black tried to activate it and received the same message, only a fated person could enter. She asked King Fang to try, explaining everyone assumed this temple connected to the beginner's village. He reached out. The orb began to glow with intense energy. Little Black shielded her eyes. When she looked again, both King Fang and the orb had vanished, confirming her suspicion that he was the fated person. King Fang found himself inside the cave of the Ice Tide, his communications blocked. He activated invisibility immediately. A new mission appeared: protect the Ice Tide crystal. He recognized it at once. Any attack hitting it would trigger an icy tide. Monsters would emerge from the caves and focus on destroying it. If they succeeded, the mission would fail, and he would be permanently locked out of this location, losing any chance at the reward. His only option was to evolve the virulent poison trap. After consuming the necessary evolution points, leaving himself with 17, the skill progressed from Platinum to Epic. Trap stealth increased from level 5 to 8, damage increased to 1200 additional poison, and the slow increased to 8 seconds at 50% potency. He could now place up to 9 traps, each lasting 3600 seconds. He placed 3 traps at the cave entrances. The Aberrant Witch's Ring activated, expanding the trap's area of effect by 25%, perfectly covering every passage. The moment the first monsters emerged, they triggered the traps. Thorny vines erupted, coiling around the creatures and dealing over 100,000 damage. Dust rose through the air. Then an arrow came flying. King Fang's eyes sharpened. There were ranged enemies too. He blocked the arrow with a summoned shield and identified the mob carrying the bow. He noted this and adjusted accordingly. Outside the Magic City ruins, Dongfang Yu met with the orange-haired man and asked if the Shura Palace was abandoning the hunt for Ghost Spirit now that she had joined Shadow's guild. He confirmed it. She gripped her staff and reminded him condescendingly that she had Shadow's personal information and could kill him in the real world easily. Before she could continue, he had heard enough. He punched her hard in the face, sending her flying, and began beating her mercilessly. He screamed that even if he couldn't beat Shadow, he could certainly deal with her. She died and dissolved into orbs. She woke up in the real world at the Chu family residence, enraged. She demanded her husband send people to capture all of the Shura Palace. Her husband asked to clarify. She meant the group she had hired to capture Ghost Spirit. With fury in her eyes, she explained that Ghost Spirit had joined Shadow and the Shura Palace no longer dared pursue her. Her husband said they would deal with those men after handling Shadow. He had already arranged for members of the Magic City Black Dragon Hall to go after Shadow, assuring her the plan was in motion. Dongfang Yu's eyes blazed. She swore she would avenge the Dongfang family and slaughter all of them. In the Cave of the Ice Tide, King Fang killed the remaining ranged mobs with Shadow Blade, resetting cooldowns on each weak point hit, 1 slash per kill. The ice crystal was nearly destroyed and covered in cracks when the system announced the guard mission was complete. He could claim his reward. The crystal shattered and a golden epic tier treasure chest appeared. He extended his hand. The last epic chest had given him graceful release. He was eager to see what this one held. The chest opened. A woman materialized, an NPC. It was the same one from the previous epic chest. With eyes closed, she spoke in the old god language. King Fang recognized the language and, despite not learning it through conventional means, understood it perfectly. He suspected his Eye of Judgment was responsible. She communicated that he had passed both trials and was the chosen one. Her body began to transform as she spoke. The third eye on her forehead opened, emitting a powerful aura. She told him her name was Ace, that she would follow and witness him become the true god of judgment, and asked him to accept her gift. It was the Asathus summoning bell, created by the Herald of Judgment, Asathus, using the power of order itself. It would allow King Fang to summon her once at level 25, once at level 35, and once at level 50. Each summon would grant the opportunity to challenge a special ruin. If he completed all 3 successfully, Ice could reside in his hideout and provide a skill upgrade function. He grabbed the bell, eyes lit with joy. He noted the previous temple had been level 5 and this one was level 15, and Little Black had stumbled upon both. Her luck was genuinely extraordinary. Ace told him to select a skill, explaining he had 1 free chance to upgrade it to his current level. He considered carefully. He knew skill power was judged by 2 factors, quality and level requirement. Quality was fixed unless forcibly upgraded through evolution. Level requirement, however, determined a skill's overall power scaling in the future. Consuming lifespan to increase a skill's level would be no problem. He chose to upgrade his highest grade skill. Graceful Release. Ace kissed his hand to fulfill the request. Graceful Release was upgraded from level 10 to level 16. The weak point attack correction increased from 300 to 410%, and the attack multiplier at those points doubled. Its active use now applied a throat slit effect, dealing 310% of the initial damage per second for 3 seconds, with a cooldown of 6.97 seconds effective. Ace bid him farewell and said she looked forward to seeing him again. A blue portal appeared. Before leaving, King Fang turned back and reached into the chest, finding one final item. It was Baffich's equivalent exchange agreement, an epic tier leg armor for the assassin class requiring level 15. It provided 198 physical defense, elemental resistance, and damage block, along with 19.8% damage reduction and 19.8 whispering resistance. Its unique ability, Art of Equivalent Exchange, allowed him to sacrifice any piece of equipment or skill book of up to epic grade to randomly receive another item of the same level for his class, with a 1-hour cooldown. He grabbed it with gleaming eyes. All those jade grade items and skill books in his inventory could now be cycled into assassin appropriate gear. He returned to the cave entrance where Little Black had waited during his entire absence, keeping watch. He gave her a platinum tier magic shield skill book level 13 as reward. She was shocked and deeply grateful, recognizing it would significantly improve her survival. She mounted her llama, said goodbye, and left. King Fang disappeared as well, deciding to also log off and eat. In the Zhanghai City ruins, the Knights Templar Guild celebrated securing a silver-grade guild sanctuary. The guild leader praised the milestone and particularly acknowledged Zhao Yu, crediting her with finding it first. She took to the small stage amid applause. She thanked her mentor, her friends, those who had looked down on her for their motivation, and her parents, wishing they had lived to see this. The guild leader cut the speech short and asked her to describe how she found the hideout. She revealed it had come from a dream, which drew laughter from the guild. He stifled his own amusement and rewarded her with 1 year of tradable lifespan, encouraging everyone to learn from her dedication to the collective good. Xiao Yu was assigned to continue searching for hideouts. Later, staff in hand, she wandered the ruins following the feeling from the dream, frustrated at not finding the spot. A group of women from the guild secretly followed her. Entering a building, she crossed through a tunnel, noticing both the familiar atmosphere and a feeling of being followed. She reminded herself she was a life priest, a hidden class player, and nothing could hurt her. She opened her eyes to find a monster with mouths emerging from its body right in front of her. It didn't attack her. Instead, it charged toward the women spying on her. They panicked and scrambled, but the monster wrapped its tentacles around one and drained all her lifespan in moments. Her companions fled, screaming. The monster pursued them. Zhao Yu quietly slipped away, descending a spiral staircase, tripping and hitting the ground face first. Through teary eyes, she looked up and recognized the entrance from her dream, the platinum-grade hideout. She immediately messaged the guild master and joined his party. She waited, but then heard movement behind her. The monster returned, smiling sinisterly. Despite her terror, she grabbed her staff and told herself she could do this. She wasn't the same person anymore. She used venomous vines, and the vines coiled around the monster for 500 HP. Excited by the success, she followed up with corrupting poison mist, and then realized in horror that the entire enclosed space was filling with it. She couldn't hold her breath any longer. She remembered she had an antidote spell and used it, dissipating the mist, but the antidote also neutralized the poison on the monster. Its attention refocused on her. In desperation, she inhaled a small amount of the mist and died, turning into lifespan. The system recorded, "Player Xiao Yu Ya has committed suicide." She respawned in the guild hideout. The guild master told her to subscribe to Reincarnates and hit the like button for more goated manhwa recaps in the future.